The strongest mage got nerfed with an arrow in the knee during his victory over the Demon King and decided to retire. But everyone kept pulling him back. Requests, titles, missions, endless expectations. Instead of going back to that life, he quietly picked a random guild quest, guard a remote village. Now he's just a village guy, protecting locals, hunting monsters in the forest, eating good food, relaxing in hot springs, and casually walking around with a wolf familiar that happens to be the strongest beast in the area. The story begins with MC walking through the forest and looking at something in front of him with a smile. An elf with a happy expression pointed to the side and said, "Welcome to their village." A week ago, on the outskirts of the royal capital, Alfred Rint, an S-class mage, was lying on his bed, reading a book, and thought that being a veteran mage at almost 30 years old, he secluded himself and just relaxed at home. A girl knocked on the door, called him and warned him that she was coming inside. He turned towards the sound and called Luca. She, a swordswoman and a doctor, an S-rank adventurer, entered and asked, "Is he still lazing around?" Cruz and Urena had already managed to fight the monsters. He said with a smile that they hadn't changed at all, still as energetic. She laughed and asked, "What is he talking about? He speaks like a nasty old man." He was confused by this and asked, "Is he really that old?" She placed a bag of groceries next to his bed and asked how his knee was. He lifted his pant leg, agreed, and said it hurt, but there was nothing to be done. She called him a liar and asked, "He was too active at the festival, wasn't he?" He thought with a slightly confused smile that she was insightful, as expected of a doctor. You could call it too little compensation. For the young team of heroes he belonged to, subduing the Demon King was the end of a long and arduous journey. He distracted the king while the heroes finished him off. Just when he was about to collapse, he dealt him a critical hit. He was wounded in the knee, and they immediately became heroes. He received recognition and medals from the royal family, and from the Adventurers Guild, he was awarded the first S rank in 200 years. He said then that no words could express his gratitude. Currently, Luca said that his knee would never heal for the rest of his life. Even healing magic was powerless. He lowered his head and said that he expected nothing less from the Demon King's curse. She slapped her palm against his injured leg, left something on the table, and said that he should take it easy then. He took it and wondered if she had come to mock him. He noticed that it was medicine and wondered if she had tried so hard to bring it to him. That sounded like her. He lay down on the bed and thought with a smile that he had been working as an adventurer for many years. He was sure that he deserved a rest. At that moment, a man opened the door to his house, called out to him loudly, and said that he wanted to ask him something. He was surprised by this and thought that it must be Lord Marshal. He asked in a worried voice, "What happened?" He approached him and said loudly, with a worried look, that the truth was that he wanted him to form and lead the magical Knight Order. Even though the Demon King had been defeated, there were still so many monsters at large. He wanted to entrust it to him, with his achievements and experience in every sense. He thought, with a tense look, that this was quite an honor. To be honest, it would be quite difficult to get into battles often in his condition. The protagonist said that he was truly grateful, but the Lord immediately realized that the problem was in his knee and said that it was so unfortunate. Immediately after that, he said loudly that back then, he would like him to train mages in the royal court. Raising the future generation is the leader's responsibility. He must give him a chance. Later, he came to the ball and thought that he had some kind of bad feeling about all of this. The guildmaster came to him, called him and said that he was going to visit him. He was about to say something else, but he interrupted and asked, what difference did it make? The guildmaster said that, frankly speaking, he was planning to form a new adventurers guild in the former territory of the Demon King. He wants him to become the guild leader in every sense. They need to discuss everything thoroughly. After that, several more different people approached him, telling him something, and he thought that this was very bad. He returned home looking very tired and thought that his knee was incredibly painful. He started rolling on the floor in pain and thought that they would not let him rest here in peace. Who knew that S-rank would be such a scourge? He had promised various things to the king and the country, but this was already beyond the pale. Besides, his healing was much more important. He had to figure out how to rest. He thought about it all night, and early in the morning, he packed his things in a backpack and started getting dressed. He went outside and thought that he was going to leave the royal capital. After a night of deliberation, even if he took a vacation, everyone would fuss over him. Everything would be fine if he just accepted the guild quest. He entered the building, greeted the employee, approached the quest board, and thought about 3 criteria he used to choose a quest. First, it had to look easy. Second, the quest was from a village as far away from the capital as possible. Third, it should take a long time. He chose the one that suited him, went to the counter, and said he wanted to accept this quest. The employee took it and asked with a shocked look, he wants to accept this quest specifically. It's for F-rank adventurers, right? He understands that, right? They're looking for a guard for the village of Merg. They have problems with boars and wolves that are constantly attacking. The reward includes food and lodging, and there are also hot springs. MC agreed and said it was fantastic. She looked confused and said that it was early morning, so she was alone here. Maybe she should consult with her superiors. He became worried. loudly refused and said that everything was fine, it was urgent. She still agreed. He went to the exit and thought that the reward was small, but he didn't care. Even if he did nothing, he would receive benefits because he now had a rank. He was going to enjoy the simple village life. For a whole week, he traveled to the right village in a cart with other people. Later, when he was alone, he looked at the compass and thought that he should walk from here. He walked through the forest, saw the sun breaking through the tree branches, and with a happy expression said how good he felt. This was simply gorgeous weather for a walk. 3 hours later, he thought with a tense expression on his face that there was nothing here, only trees. He heard loud sounds and thought that they were the sounds of an animal and a person. It didn't sound very good. He followed the sound and saw an elf who said loudly that she would not give up so easily. She was holding a stick in her hands and looked at the wolf standing in front of her with a frightened look. Alfred looked at her and thought that she looked brave, but her knees were shaking. The wolf sensed him and switched its attention. Because of this, he smiled and thought that this was wonderful. It seemed that he was interested in him. He said in a calm tone that he could handle him. The girl was surprised because of this, and he thought that with such an enemy, he did not even need magic. The wolf quickly ran towards him, but he grabbed him by the lower jaw and easily threw him aside. Because of this, the wolf immediately ran away, and the girl went to him and thanked him for his help. He said that there was no need for thanks. Is she okay? She agreed and said that she actually had a name, Millet. He also introduced himself, called her by name, and apologized for it. She thanked him with a happy expression, and he was surprised and thought that he had been an adventurer for many years and was used to hearing words of gratitude. However, these words were received with pleasure by him. He said with a smile that he was glad to hear it. However, isn't it dangerous to walk alone in such a place? She said with a worried look that the thing is that her younger sister has a fever. It seems that she is in a lot of pain because of it. The medicine in the village ran out, so she came to collect medicinal herbs. It may not look like it, but she's actually a doctor. In general, everyone in the village said that it was dangerous. Wolves appear, but if she does not cure her, he asked. So she was collecting herbs? She shook her head in refusal and said that there are a lot of wolves this year, so she should not have come here. Everything here has already been eaten by wolves and monsters. He asked, so it is already useless? She said that she is sure that if she goes deeper into the mountains. The protagonist was very surprised by this and asked if she was going there alone. She agreed and said that although she was a little scared, he thought it was terrible. Although it was summer, it was already well past noon. He wasn't so insensitive as to leave this brave girl alone, was he? However, if he helped her, he wouldn't make it in time. The village gates would close at sunset, and he didn't want to sleep on the street. If they separated here, she could be killed, and his conscience would weigh heavily on him. She was about to go on, but he raised his hand, asked her to wait, and said that she should allow him to help her find the herbs. He was in no hurry, so it would be more comfortable with an adult, right? She agreed and thanked him with a happy expression. He said that if she could, she should just tell him where these herbs grew. She grabbed his hand, led him along, and said that they were heading this way. He was a little surprised by this, and said that there was no need to rush. He followed her and thought that she seemed happy. They walked further, and she said that plants were growing abundantly here, but it didn't really smell like herbs. He asked, what should he look for anyway? She said that he needed green ivy that resembled the shape of a hand. They looked around, and she asked with a sad expression, it seems that even here all the herbs had been eaten, right? MC asked if there was another place they could go. She said in a worried tone that there was a cave 30 minutes from here. However, this caught his attention, and he asked what she wanted to say. She collapsed due to her depressed state, and said that the thing is that a basilisk had recently settled in that cave. He was a little surprised by this, and thought that it was a B-rank demonic beast. Everyone who looks at it turns to stone, and its tail and blood are incredibly poisonous. On that note, a B-rank group should be able to kill it anyway. If it gets cut, blood will splatter everywhere. It will be a complete disaster. He said in a confident voice that she shouldn't be afraid. An old man like him is simply a professional in exterminating basilisks. She was very worried about this, grabbed his shoulders and said loudly that it was very dangerous. This was not an enemy that could be defeated so easily. He calmly said that it was fine. He could handle it. Later, they came to the right cave and he asked if she could smell the herbs too. She walked alongside him with a frightened look and agreed. Alfred took the basket from her and said that everything would be fine. If something happened, she should call him and he would quickly run to her. He went to the cave and thought that it was really deep here. Still, it looked like no one had touched the plants here. He started collecting the herbs he needed, heard a sound behind him, and wondered if he'd decided to show himself. The basilisk attacked him with its tail, but he repelled the attack with magic and said he should be more careful. He left a barrier in front of him and calmly continued collecting herbs. Having collected a whole basket, he asked if that would be enough. He put it on the ground, picked up a small stone, and said it was nothing personal, but he was going to enjoy its defeat. He began using magic on the stone in his hand, and the monster looked very surprised. The monster began to attack, and he swung his hand and thought it was a small stone enchanted with speed magic. He threw it at the basilisk's head and killed it with that one attack. He thought with a smile that it was overconfident, but the last time he fought such monsters was a long time ago. He couldn't dirty this cave because of his clumsiness. After all, the herbs here would grow year after year. After that, he came out of the cave, called Millet, and she turned to him with a happy expression on her face. He beckoned her over. She quickly ran up and asked if he was okay. He agreed, and she thanked him with a happy expression on her face. He pulled the basilisk's body out of the cave, asked for forgiveness, and said that he was also going to pull this carcass out of here and asked for her help. She was shocked by this and asked loudly, did he really defeat it? He was confused by this and asked, is something wrong? She said with a very happy expression on her face that he was really strong, so he really is an expert in exterminating basilisks. She called him amazing, which made him feel very awkward, turned away, and quietly said that it was just like those days. She took off her cloak and said that if he was going to butcher the basilisk, one way or another, she could help if needed. He immediately turned away from her and thought that he didn't do it on purpose. It just caught his eye. After that, they laid the basilisk's body on the ground and he asked, it's quite big, isn't it? And incredibly heavy too. He took a knife and started cutting up the body and thought that he should start with its tail, fangs, and eyeballs. These can be sold for a high price. Its blood can be used as an ingredient for medicine. The skin is also useful, and the meat is edible, no waste. After some time, they finished collecting materials, and the protagonist said that it was gorgeous. They somehow managed. He called Millet and said that she was a great help. He looked up and said that the sun was starting to set, so they should set up camp near the cave. She screamed in fear, but agreed, and he noticed her anxiety and asked what was wrong. She was about to ask him not to worry, but she heard a sound from the forest, screamed loudly, and grabbed his hand. She walked away from him and said loudly, embarrassed, that she was just a little afraid of the night forest. He called her lady and said that she shouldn't be afraid. He would protect her. She calmed down a little, after which they lit a fire and began to rest. He asked, is she okay? She said that she borrowed his coat, but everything was fine. It was the warm season after all. He finished frying the cheese, offered it to her, and asked if she was hungry. She thanked him for the offer and said that she was okay. He noticed that she was rubbing her eyes and asked if she was sleepy. She said that she could sleep in such a place. He apologized and thought that it must be difficult since she wasn't used to sleeping outside. She called him and asked, by the way, why was he here? He didn't quite understand her, and she said that she was talking about the place where the wolves attacked her. He remembered this and said that he was on his way to the village, from where he accepted the task. She asked if everything would be okay with the task. Wouldn't he be late? He said that everything was fine. It seemed like there was no time limit. Millet asked loudly, by the way, where was he going? If it was nearby, she could see him off. He said that this place was called Merg village. Did she know about it? She was very surprised by this, and with a happy expression said that this was her village. MC thought that his soul even became lighter. It seemed that from now on, his village life would be quite relaxed. She asked then, he would be living with them for a while, right? He said that it seemed so. She covered herself with his coat, looked at him and laughed. He laughed and thought that he was sure that being a guard wasn't so bad. A job where he could protect people's smiles. He was going to enjoy this life, absorbing this carelessness into his soul. Later they came to the village and he thought that thanks to her, he was able to get here without incident. He looked around the village with a smile and said that it was a very nice place. She thanked him again with a happy expression and said that she was sure that he would soon get used to it. The villagers noticed that she had returned and immediately approached her, and she said that she was sorry for making them worry. A child noticed him and asked who this uncle was. Millet approached him, asked him to listen to her, and said that this man's name was Alfred. He was very strong and kind, and also saved her. He helped her collect a special kind of herbs. He began to feel embarrassed and called her to stop, but she did not listen and said that he also looked after her all night without closing his eyes. Most importantly, he was able to defeat the basilisk. The villagers approached him and began to thank him for this, which made him feel very awkward. She waved her hand, ran away, and said that she had to run because she needed to prepare the medicine. The village chief came to the joyful villagers and said that he had heard a lot about him. He was a little confused by this, apologized and said that he should have introduced himself. He gave his name and said that he had taken on the duty of the guardian of the village of Merg. The villagers were confused and he wondered what was going on here. They quickly became joyful and said that it looked like a feast was planned in honor of his arrival. The village chief began to leave with him and said that he should let him accompany him to the residence they had prepared for him. They came to an old building. He apologized and said that it was a dilapidated house, but it served as a house for the guard. He looked at it and said that everything was fine. He liked it. He looked around inside and thought that the house was indeed old, but at least it had a roof and even a bed. He came out of there and asked if he could explain the details of his job to him. The village chief agreed, placed a folding chair in front of the gate, and said he should enjoy the sun while simply sitting there. His main task was to prevent enemy invasion from outside, but they didn't have many enemies. The protagonist wondered if a guard was needed here then. According to the chief, he would be useful helping out on the farms during the day. When the villagers decided to leave the village, he would protect them from bandits and wolves. The village chief said the chance of participating in the battle was extremely slim. He smiled and said that this was excellent. It seemed he could help them. He agreed and said that he looked like a veteran, then he must be disappointed about such a task. He denied it, and he, with a slightly confused look, said that the truth is that the villagers like him were expecting to see a young man, so he was a little surprised. He offered to give him a tour of the village, and he, with a slightly upset look, thought that they just wanted a young man to come here. Now their reaction was clear to him. Their plan was to invite the young man and marry him to one of their girls who had reached marriageable age and make him move here permanently. However, young adventurers would not accept such a task. They were exploring the village, and the chief asked why he decided to become a guard. He walked alongside and said that in the past he had injured his knee. He calmly said that in that case, he could relax in the local hot springs. It helps heal the wounds. That same night, there was a feast at the village chief's house in honor of his arrival. Later, when it was over, everyone went to their homes. MC heard a howl from the forest and thought that wolves were approaching. He stood up and thought that it would be bad if the village suffered on his first day on the job. He started putting on his gear and thought that first impressions mattered. He had to deal with the problem before they decided he was a loser. He left the house, nimbly jumped over the fence and ran towards the howl. He was surprised when he saw a large wolf and asked in surprise why. It was a beautiful magical wolf, wasn't it? He thought with a surprised expression that he might be a veteran, but he had never seen such a beautiful wolf before. Among the ancient magical beasts, there are some that can use magic. The wolf let out a loud roar. He used his head with his hand and thought it was a magical howl. A simple adventurer would have been paralyzed by this attack. The wolves began to attack him, but he easily repelled all their attacks and counterattacked. He thought that they all seemed to be magical, but this huge one was their leader. He was the only one who could use magic. Judging by the size of their pack, there were about 20 of them. There was no end to them. They obeyed him, their leader. He ran towards him, started using magic, and thought that if he used thunder fire here, it could cause a fire, and he couldn't cope with water. He ran closer and thought that this seemed like the best option. He attacked them using accelerated magical barriers. He attacked the leader of the pack, but was very surprised that he was able to dodge. The wolf quickly ran up behind him, was about to attack, but he immediately noticed it, turned around, and thought it was pretty funny. The moment the leader of the pack jumped on him to attack, he managed to attack him faster with magic and threw him hard to the side. He said in a serious tone that he would be glad to kill them all, but if they leave the village of Merg alone, he will let them go alive. He thought that this beast is strong enough to use magnesium, so it is okay if he understands the role of humans. He said that he is a sorcerer. If he used the maximum of his powers from the very beginning, all his followers would be dead by now. He could exterminate them all, but if he does that, the wild boar population will increase, and they will start devastating the fields. That is why he lets his pack go. He thought that besides, it would be a waste of time to kill them all. He prays for him to listen to what he has to say. The leader of the pack stood up and with the help of telepathy called him a powerful child and said that he understands everything. It was his mistake. Even he can't make him be more serious. Alfred approached him, asked him to wait, introduced himself, and said that he respected his strength and wisdom as a magical beast. The wolf said that he did not have a name, so he asked him to give it to him. He thought about it and said that in that case he suggested Gil Gil. He noticed his displeased reaction and suggested Puffy, but this angered the beast even more. He immediately noticed this and asked then, how about Femi? He noticed his reaction and thought that he seemed to like it. He said that he accepts this name. As long as he is alpha, he swears that they will not attack the village of Merg. He does this as an apology for them disturbing his people. He was glad about this and said that it seemed the villagers were scared. They needed something that could calm them down. He looked at him and asked, does he want his head as a trophy? He was confused by his words, but he explained that it was a joke. Femi gave his fang and said that if he showed it to those people, they would understand everything. The protagonist put it in his bag and said that it was clear. In that case, he would take it with gratitude. He stopped at the village of Merg and would be there for a while. If he had any problems, he could talk about it. He extended his paw to him. He shook it and thought that it was a real handshake and not a command given to a dog. The wolves returned to the forest. He went back to the village and thought that the sun was beginning to blind. Millet opened the gate, called him, and said that he seemed to be fine. He was not at home when she came to call him for breakfast. She was very worried. He apologized and thought that he was very tired. It seemed like the whole night had passed like this. He did not want to grow old. The head of the village approached them, greeted them, and asked if he heard the wolves howling last night. He agreed and asked. They were very loud, weren't they? He took out a weapon and said that as soon as they finished preparing, they would immediately go hunting for them. So, would he like to join them? He was a little confused by this, called him and said that to be honest, he had already patrolled the forest yesterday. He was very surprised by this and asked loudly, did he do it all alone? MC took out a wolf fang as proof. They were both shocked and he even fell to the ground, which confused him very much. The rest of the villagers who were going hunting began to gather nearby, called the village head and asked what happened here. They all saw the fang and were also shocked by it. They loudly called him and asked what happened. They began to examine the fang, and he thought that since they were asking endless questions, he was desperately trying to explain the whole situation to them. Millet took his hand and said that he was truly magnificent. He was like a legendary treasure. The village chief called him and said that he apologized for doubting him. This is the true fang of the king of magical wolves, which was obtained only recently. It can be identified by smell. He was surprised by this and thought, so he can identify it by smell? He said that a magical wolf can give its fang only to the one he recognized as his master. 300 years ago, there lived a hero who came here and they fought all day and night. In the end, the hero defeated the wolf, who gave him the fang and followed him like a dog follows its master. Peace reigned, but when the hero died, the magical wolf seemed to disappear. This is a local legend. A villager brought a small box and he turned around and thanked him for it. He opened the box and said that this was the treasure of their village, which was given to them 300 years ago. He thinks so. Alfred saw this and said with surprise that this meant that these wolves would no longer come to the village. They were all happy about this, agreed. And Millet took his hands and said that he never ceased to amaze her. The village leader called her, asked for help, and said that today they would have a feast again. He was very surprised by this and felt déjà vu. He took her hand, called her by name, and said that he apologized for the fact that she had to cook breakfast for him. She turned around and with a happy expression said that it was nothing to worry about. He asked how her little sister was feeling. He was thinking about visiting her, but in this situation, she said with a joyful voice that she was recovering quickly, but he should still visit her at least occasionally. She was sure that she would be very happy. She ran after the villagers and waved goodbye to him. Later, he came to the feast and thought that, as a middle-aged man, it was hard for him to participate in this for the second day in a row. However, since this is a village, it is important to get to know everyone. Besides, everyone was so happy to celebrate his victory. So, it seems the locals accepted him, and he is very happy about it. By the time he returned home, the sun had already set. Arriving home, he immediately went to bed with a joyful expression on his face. The night was almost over and he felt someone's presence, which caused him to wake up. While sleeping, he thought that that magical wolf was not bad. Its size, strength, and it was also very smart. The skin delightfully shimmered golden in the moonlight. Besides all this, it was very soft. It was so pleasant, exactly how it should feel if he touched it. He felt himself being licked, stood up abruptly, and asked loudly, "What's going on?" The protagonist saw the wolf and asked loudly, "What the hell was that?" Vivy said it was very rude. He was surprised when he realized it was telepathy and asked, "Is he the magical wolf?" Having received a positive answer, he asked in surprise, "So, can he become small?" He started wagging his tail and said something like that. "It's very nice." The reason he came back here, he didn't have time to finish because he started petting him and said that he really wanted to touch him. It was so soft. He started getting angry because of this and said that he should stop treating him like a dog. He continued touching him and said loudly in surprise that he was so skinny. Vivy said that the truth is that he had a favor to ask. They went outside and he thought that he himself had said to contact him if necessary. However, he decided to contact him almost that same day. For this, he had to lose a lot of strength to change his form. Well, promises must be kept. He offered him food and asked what his request was. He said that it pained him to say this, but at least this place used to be the domain of the magical wolves. After the previous wolf king died, wild boars began to actively attack and the magical wolves had to leave. MC thought that now it was clear why his past generation called these lands home. Vivy said that he, who became the king of the magical wolves, led a group to fight them. But surprisingly, the main magical boar was strong and they can no longer feed on those lands. He said with a worried look that now it was clear why he was so thin. He was upset by what he heard and he thought that it seemed wrong to call them that. He lowered his head with a sad look and thought that this is why they decided to attack the village, but he stopped them. He said with a small smile that he was just lucky. He said in a serious tone that it was a race against time. He wanted him to share his power with him and the others. Alfred covered his face with his hand, grinned, and said that he didn't mind, but the magical beast, the Wolf King, lost to some wild boar. At first, he was glad that he agreed, after which he sighed with displeasure and said that they were very strong. He himself couldn't sense his presence, but he said that his ability to sense presence was just like a plant's. He was surprised by this, and thought it was because he didn't sense their intent to kill. He said that he had no choice but to accept his offer. He needed to deal with his guards. Vivy said that it was very brave of him. After that, they left the warehouse, and he said that it was late, time to go to bed. Tomorrow, he would lead him to the wild boars. The protagonist was surprised when he heard him thank him. He turned to him, considered him an understanding wolf, agreed, and said goodbye. After that, they came to his house and lay down together on the cramped bed. He turned on his side and asked, nevertheless, why are wild boars so strong? He said that he did not know that. He said with a joyful look that it reminded him of when he showed his fang. Everyone in the village was shocked. He heard this from the head of the village when he showed his fang, but he recognized him as his master. He was surprised by this question, rolled over on his back, and he said that he was behaving like a dog again. The next morning, Femi began licking his face and asking him to wake up. He got up and heard Millet call him and ask if he was awake. He went up to her and they both wished each other good morning. She said with a joyful expression that she brought him breakfast. The wolf approached her and MC thanked her and said that he definitely wouldn't die of hunger. He noticed this and asked what he was doing. She looked at him with a joyful look, began to pet him and said that it was so adorable. She was sure that her little sister would be happy to see him. He said his name, and she asked, did he take him in? He said that it might seem so, but in fact, he was the king of the magical wolves. She was very surprised by this, and he thought that he must have scared her. Femi introduced himself to her using telepathy. She was surprised by this and said loudly that this can't be, he is talking. She petted him and said that he was amazing. This is amazing. Magnificent. He looked at them from the side and thought that everything seemed fine if she was happy. After breakfast, at the request of the king of the magical wolves, he told the head of the village that he wanted to pacify the magical boar. The villagers saw him off and said they would be waiting for him to return with wild boar meat. They left the village and Alfred asked where they should go. He called him to follow him and increased in size. He stroked him and asked, after all, he really is incredible, isn't he? He began to wag his tail with a smug look and agreed with him. They walked through the forest and he said that he had been thinking about this lately. However, is it true, as people say, that the previous king of the magical wolves was the one who fought against the hero 300 years ago? He denied it and said that the previous king was his son. He said with surprise that then, that means he is the grandson of the king of the magical wolves. He was about to say something else, but cried out in pain. Femi immediately turned to him and asked, what's wrong with him? Does his knee hurt? He said that the truth is that something happened during the battle with the Demon King. He was surprised by this, thought about it, and asked if he wanted to ride on his back. It's not like he let people ride on his back that easily. However, since he is one of those responsible for this application, the main character jumped on his back, thanked him, and said that he was basically saving him. He screamed out of surprise, and he asked if something was wrong. He laughed, ran on, and said that everything was fine. They quickly ran to the right place. He got off his back and asked, so this is it? What is this terrible wasteland? He doesn't think there are any boars here at all. Femi said that this is for now. Anyway, is he ready? He came closer, took a deep breath, and shouted very loudly into the water and said that he should wait a little. He was surprised when he felt someone's presence. After that, a huge, very angry boar climbed out of the water. He was very surprised by this and loudly said that he is incredibly huge. He said that he knows about it. Didn't he say that he doesn't have a chance? He asked loudly in a surprised tone. Why is he so happy about this? They jumped in different directions and thought that he has a rule not to commit senseless killings. However, this creature is absolutely huge. This area has become a wasteland because this creature has absorbed it. If this continues, the forest will be destroyed. They felt a strong stench, started to run away, and he said loudly that this is a poisonous boar. Therefore, its breath is also poisonous. MC turned to him and said loudly that he should have said about such an important thing earlier. He is now very sick. He said that he knows about it. He asked loudly with a confused look. Again, why does he look so happy? He looked at the huge boar and thought that it cannot be left alive. This place was already devastated. Showing a small part of his true power should be enough. He used explosive magic and hit the monster with an attack. Femi was surprised by this and asked, did he kill him? He thought that killing him was easy without worrying about his surroundings. He was also glad that he was able to kill him in one blow. He said with a thoughtful look that, however, the villagers said that they were expecting some wild boar meat, but he wondered if it was edible at all. Femi said that it was edible. Even the meat of poisonous snakes is not covered in poison. He looked to the side and noticed that other wolves from his pack had come to them. He looked at them and thought that they must have come to eat meat. They all look thin. After that, he began to cut the meat and said that he would just take this part with him. They could eat the rest. He was very surprised by this and asked loudly, is he really sure about this? He agreed and wished them all bon appétit. When they finished eating, he looked at them with a joyful smile and thought that he had successfully fulfilled his order. Later, he returned to the village. The villagers were happy with the meat they had received, and the village chief was stunned by the sight of the giant tusk. Millet continued to exclaim, it's incredible, and was in a good mood. The children admired Femi's appearance and began to pet him. She called Alfred and asked if he would like to have lunch with them. He agreed, offered to fry the meat, and said it sounded good. They went to her house and he asked how her little sister was feeling. She said she was doing fine, thanks to him, although she still worried and made her sleep a lot. She opened the door, called Colette, and said that they had a guest. He came up to her sister and said that it was nice to meet her. He must have woken her up. She looked at him and asked who he was. She asked with a surprised expression on her face. He must be Mr. Alfred. right? Millet was standing nearby and said that she told her that she was saved thanks to his help. She was very grateful to him for everything he did. She called her sister and said that she should lie in bed until the food was ready. He asked, she didn't want to get sick again, did she? She went into another room and said that she would call her when everything was ready. Colette saw Femi and with a very surprised expression on her face, said how cute he was. She started petting him and said that he was so big and fluffy. She turned around and said in a cheerful tone that she was grateful that he had stopped by. He said that he was glad that he had been able to meet her. She agreed, laughed, and asked if she could whisper something in his ear. He came closer, leaned over, and she kissed him on the cheek. She said that this was her gratitude to him. He was confused by this, thanked her, and she asked what he thought of her sister. He smiled and thought that if she was asking about this, she said that as he could see, she was amazing. Her cooking was delicious. She was kind and skilled in everything, like washing and such. After her father died, she became a doctor to take care of her. There are a lot of guys who want to marry her. The main character said that she seemed popular. Her eyes lit up and she asked if he liked her sister. He was surprised by this and thought that he had never thought of her in such a way. He didn't know what to answer, and she said that she is sure that her sister likes him. She means that she acts so sweetly when she talks to him. He thought with a surprised expression, does she really think so? She said that this is why she wants him to take her sister as his wife. He doesn't have to make a decision right now, he just needs to think about it. It will be their secret. He agreed and Millet opened the door a crack and said that everything is ready. What are they talking about here? She ran to her, didn't answer this, and she asked, she knows that she is curious, right? They went to eat. He tried the dish, called her and said that it was very tasty. She thanked him and said that a dinner like this was only possible thanks to him. Colette looked at him and asked if the wild boar was really big. Like a bull? MC denied it and said that it was much bigger, even bigger than the house. She was very surprised by this and asked, is he that amazing? He said that if she were there, he would even give her a position as a guard. Millet said that the damage caused by animals has definitely increased, but she has never heard of such a big boar before. Honestly, it is really scary to hear about such a thing. Femi said that they should not worry, since he has already defeated the huge magical boar for them. They will catch the remaining small fish, so they will not harm people anymore. Colette hugged him and said that he is amazing. She called her and said that she has not finished eating yet. However, she is sure that everything will be fine since he will protect them. The same applies to Femi. Alfred smiled, gave a thumbs up and said that they can rely on them. He thought that in the meantime, the magical wolves and the magical boar no longer pose a threat to the village. Tomorrow he is going to visit the hot springs and rest. After some time, they were sitting outside, and he thought that although he had chosen the comfortable job of a guard, when there were no threats in the area, he had too much free time. He laughed, looking at him, and said that even the king of the magical wolves relaxed like that. He lay next to him, opened an eye, and said that he was not actually sleeping. He thoughtfully recalled what had happened earlier, and thought that, not to mention the forest, there was a giant magical boar nearby that could push aside even the king of the magical wolves. He wondered if he could have grown so much unnoticed in this outskirts, but the wolves' agitation seemed incomprehensible to him. If he had migrated here from somewhere else, people would definitely be talking about it. He asked if it could be a kind of magic or a curse that enlarges magical beasts. Sometime later, when night fell, Femi heard a sound, stood up abruptly, called out to him, and said that someone was approaching the village. He woke up, focused, and said he didn't feel anything. He still felt something, and said he didn't expect anything else from it. His perception is head and shoulders above anyone else's. I wonder who it could be. They left the house, and he thought that although he didn't feel any killing intent, it was strange for someone to be hanging around in the outskirts of the village in the middle of the night. A girl came to the village, loudly called his name, and said that so, it really was him. He was surprised when he saw her and loudly asked who she was. She got angry about it and said that forgetting who she was unforgivable. She crossed her arms in front of her and said loudly that she was one of the 4 heavenly kings of the Demon King's army, Vivy. He was surprised by this and thought that if what she said was true, he didn't remember her. He said that if she was one of the 4 heavenly kings, then they, the team of heroes, should have defeated them all. She said loudly that there were actually 5 kings. He looked at her with disbelief and thought that something didn't add up. She was definitely a demon, but she was a completely ordinary demon who thought that she was one of the 4 heavenly kings of the Demon King's army. He still called her a heavenly king and asked, so, why was she in a rural area like this? She loudly insulted him and said that he was pretending to know nothing about what he had done. He thought that she looked quite angry and asked if he had done anything. She became very angry and said that it was not just anything. She raised and trained her boar, but he killed it. How dare he? He should just try to say that he forgot about it. She became scared because the protagonist pointed at her and angrily said that it was all her fault. She became confused because of this and said that she should be the one who was angry now. He loudly told her to shut up. Because she enlarged the boar, she disrupted the ecosystem and everyone was in danger. She became angry about this, started using magic and loudly asked, why should she care about people's problems? Now she would make him disappear. She began chanting a spell and he thought that nothing less should be expected from a demon, She possessed enormous magical power. However, only an amateur would chant a long spell in front of the enemy. He quickly ran towards her and knocked her down with a blow of his palm, which made her confused. She fell to the ground, began to cry, and said that she was absolutely sure that he was a wizard. He turned to her and said that disrupting the spell casting is the basic principle. He approached her, swung his hand, and asked, does she have the courage to show herself even after causing problems for people? Now he will teach her a lesson. He stopped because she raised her hands above her head and began to use magic, which greatly surprised him. Vivy launched a fireball, hit his house, and it caught fire. He was very scared because of this and asked loudly, what the hell is this? He needs to put it out with water magic. He put out the fire, turned to her, and asked in an angry tone. She understands that now she cannot even think about the fact that he will just let her go. She said loudly in a very frightened tone that it was not on purpose. Femi came up to her, bit her leg, began to swing from side to side, and she screamed loudly in pain and started crying. MC looked at this with a little surprise and said that he was not holding back, even despite the girl's crying. He never ceases to amaze him. She was indignant about this and loudly asked why he was even praising him for this. He continued to swing Vivy, holding her leg, and she loudly said that he should let her go. He looked at this and asked, now she realized her mistake? She agreed, and he petted the Wolf King and asked, is that enough, right? He let her go, and he showed her how she should stretch out her hands. He used magic to cuff her hands, covered her eyes with a blindfold, and brought her into his house. She fell to the ground and asked loudly what he planned to do with her by bringing her to this barn. Even if he used her body, he might not even think about getting her heart. He looked at the hole in the roof and said that the whole sky was visible from here. She became embarrassed by this and asked loudly, what is he looking at? He's looking at her body where he shouldn't, right? He must stop immediately. He hit her on the head and told her that she should just act normal. She said loudly that for one of the 4 heavenly kings of the Demon King's army, like her to be humiliated as if she were some kind of second-class person. However, she would not lose. Femi looked at her with a displeased look and asked him using telepathy, she is very strange, isn't she? He stood next to her and thought that she lived in her own little world. What kind of problematic girl is this? He removed the blindfold from her eyes and said that he had no intention of doing anything indecent to her. She loudly asked him not to touch her and asked, he is lying, right? He asked her to calm down already and listen to what he has to say. He said with a displeased look that she can do whatever she wants, but the roof that was set on fire must be repaired. He tied her up completely and thought that now would be the most important part. He must interrogate her harshly to find out her motives. Alfred said in a serious tone that she should tell him why she enlarged the magical boar. Vivy said that she had no reason to answer him. She laughed evilly and said that although if he knew her plans, he would definitely be horrified. He stood silently, and she said that enlarging the magical boar was just training. In the end, she was targeting a dragon, and when it grows up, the magical boars will become excellent food for it. She will solve 2 problems at once. He was surprised by this, and thought that she was stupid for telling everything so easily. What a disappointment. Isn't she acting like a child who can't control herself? Either way, her plan is a little scary. If she really can enlarge the dragon, it will be quite a problem. He asked, so what will she do after she enlarges it? Is she going to rebuild the Demon King's army? She was horrified by this question and asked how he guessed. He asked what kind of spell she was using. Growing to such a size is impossible with a normal spell. He covered his face with his hand and said that it was such an impressive magical boar. He peeked through his fingers and saw that she was pleased that he admired it. She picked up a stick, began to draw on the ground and asked, for a lowly creature, he was quite good at this, wasn't he? You should watch closely. She drew a magic circle on the ground and said with a smug look that she had outdone herself. He looked at it and asked, she drew this at the bottom of the swamp, right? He thought with an intrigued look that this spell must be well hidden since he hadn't noticed it. This girl was perhaps a more powerful wizard than he expected, although she was a little annoying. He stood up and said that tomorrow they would clean the magic circles. After they were done, she would restore the roof. Vivy was indignant at this and loudly asked why she had to do something like that. Femi started growling angrily, which scared her, and said she understood. The protagonist said goodnight with a smile and said he was glad to hear it. The next morning, he told the villagers and the chief what had happened, and said it was incredible that something like this could have happened at night. The villagers said that something like that was behind the appearance of the magical boar. How frightening. He felt goosebumps run down his spine. He said it was okay. He would deal with it soon so everyone would be safe. However, he captured a demon with great magical power and saved them. Indeed, if he hadn't been here, their village would have been destroyed sooner or later. They all started applauding and thanking him, and he became embarrassed and said that he hadn't done much. Millet approached them and loudly said that he had indeed done something. He laughed a little because of this, called her name, and Vivy said loudly that she was one of the 4 heavenly kings of the Demon King's army. Children ran up to her, started admiring her horns, and asked who the 4 heavenly kings were. She was scared by what she heard, and asked if she was really a strong demon. He calmly said that he put a limiter on her, so everything would be fine. She turned to him with a worried look and asked if he wasn't injured anywhere during the battle with that demon, right? She offered to to heal him, but he calmly said that she didn't need to worry. She asked if he was a strong and amazing person after all, wasn't he? He denied it and said that she was just a self-proclaimed heavenly king. She said that, even if so, it didn't change the fact that he protected their village, so she was very grateful. He thanked her for her kind words. She was very embarrassed by this, and he thought that she was genuinely happy when he thanked her. They were about to leave, but the village chief called him and asked if he could take her with him as an observer. He agreed and thought that if this was the village chief's order, then he probably couldn't refuse. She approached him, bowed and said that she may be inexperienced, but asked him to take care of her. MC agreed and said that he didn't think it would be dangerous there, but if such a moment came, he would protect her. Colette waved her hand and wished her sister good luck. The two of them sat on Femi, while Vivy walked next to her and she asked with a smile, "He is quite cute. Does he think so too?" She turned to them with a worried look, looked at the Wolf King, who from her point of view, looked incredibly creepy. She quickly turned away and said that it was terrible. It felt like he wanted to eat her as soon as he got the chance. Alfred smelled a bad smell and asked what nonsense she was talking about. She stopped next to the swamp and said that they had arrived. The others also smelled a terrible smell, and Millet said that it was incredible. They defeated the magical boar that was spewing such terrible poison. Femi turned to him with a sad look, because he couldn't hold his own nose. He covered his nose with his free hand and said that it seemed like he had no choice then. Vivy turned to them and asked with a cheerful look what he thought. "It smells, doesn't it?" She had discovered a rare poisonous boar at the end of her search and tied it to the magic circles. He tied a cloth around his face so as not to smell it and agreed indifferently, which made her very angry. He looked around and said that the swamp was getting smaller. Millet called him, pointed her finger and said that he should look. There was a huge lobster there. He looked at it and said, he thinks it's a crayfish, although it was quite large. He found it strange, saw a large tree sparrow and asked, "Is this the effect of the magic circles?" Vivy laughed and asked with a smug look. So he finally understood? The magical energy from the circles that was concentrated in the boar begins to spread throughout this area. She was about to say something else, but he interrupted her and said loudly that if this is the effect of her magic, then they have all the more reason to solve this problem. She must hurry and clean it up. She sighed with displeasure and said that the magic circles are under all this dirt. She can't clean it up. He threw her a bucket and said that in that case she should scoop out all the dirt with it. She took it and said loudly in a dissatisfied tone that this is stupid. He lowered his mask and with a dissatisfied expression said that it was her responsibility. She drew it and it was her responsibility to clean it up. She got angry about this, called him a pig, and said that it was so disrespectful to make her scoop up dirt. Femi let out a growl. She got scared and immediately agreed to do it. She started scooping up dirt with a bucket and asked in a displeased tone why she had to do this. Millet approached him and said that she felt a little sorry for her. He said that she was just too kind. He thought, with a serious expression, that it seemed to him that she was simply reaping the consequences of her actions. If she was careless, she could destroy the village. However, at this rate, she would never finish, and he did not want to harass her. He called her by name and said that there was another way to do this. He created magic circles around his hands and said that wizards must use magic. He began to concentrate with a serious expression and thought that by using wind magic to gather the dirt together, he would simultaneously make it float with gravity magic. He held the dirt above the ground, called out loudly to her, and asked what she was doing. She had to remove the magic circles. Vivy agreed and went down into the pit. He said that she could only try to do something strange, then he would drop all the dirt on her. She became worried about this and said loudly that she had already promised to do this. He watched this from the side and thought that it seemed like she was really obediently cleaning it up. When she finished, Millet helped her out, and he thanked her for her work. He lowered the dirt back into the hole and said that they were done. She turned to him with a displeased look and said loudly that only a demon king could use something like gravity magic, especially use two different attributes at the same time. If he lost control even a little, the spell could spontaneously explode if he didn't know. The protagonist said with a smile that if it was only two elements, then everything was fine. He could use 4 at once if necessary. She was shocked by this and asked, "He must be joking, right?" He asked, did it look like he was joking just now? She was even more surprised and said loudly that even if he was telling the truth, it was terribly difficult. Even demons with enormous magical power could use it for a maximum of a minute. He continued smiling and said that she underestimated him because he could last a whole hour. The two of them got back on Femi and rode back. And Vivy looked at him with a displeased expression and said that this lower creature is scary. Millet was holding a huge crayfish in her hands and asked with a happy expression, "Magic is incredible, isn't it?" MC said that she can do whatever she wants with it. She said that this crayfish is big and looks delicious. He thought that it was even edible. She walked next to them and said that she was covered in this mud. Why did she even have to go through this? She had an idea and said that when they returned to the village, they could all go to the baths together. She became embarrassed and said that of course she meant separately. He thought that in some way he came to Merg village for the hot springs. So why shouldn't he accept her offer? He thought that the secluded village where he works as a guard is abundant in hot springs. After he promised Millet and her sister to have dinner with them and left, the village chief told him about a couple of good bathhouses. Later, he and Femi came to the bathhouse, and he said with surprise that there was an entire bathhouse just for them. He remembered how the village chief said that there were many hot springs on the outskirts of the village, so he could use any of them. He thought with a happy expression on his face that this permission was all he could ever ask for. He went inside, started to take off his clothes and said that he was going inside and he should wait for him here. He would wash him outside later. He was surprised by what he heard and looked at him pitifully, asking to take him with him. Alfred thought about it, began to pet him and said that he only should not fuss and not get anything dirty. He looked away with a suspicious look and said that of course he would not do that. After he undressed, they walked further, and he said with a happy expression that this was his first bath in a long time. Femi ran happily to the spring, but stopped when he said that he would enter the pool only after he washed himself. He said in a confused tone that he knew about it. After that, he washed himself and the wolf and the two of them entered the pool. They sat down next to each other and he said that it felt like the hot water was getting into his knee. He turned to him and said that he really didn't understand what he meant. The protagonist asked if dogs liked baths. He chuckled and said that he was not a dog, so there was no problem. He asked then, "Do wolves like it too?" He chuckled again and said that he was not an ordinary wolf, so there was no problem. He yawned, closed his eyes and thought that even if it was summer, baths were still incredible. However, in winter, such places take on a special beauty. He felt dizzy and started to leave, but Femi turned to him and asked him to stay longer. He stopped and was very surprised when he heard Vivy say that demons don't need any baths. Millet asked, with all that dirt on her body, she should be dirty, right? She chuckled and said that she was different from them, lower beings. Colette said with admiration that the Heavenly King was incredible. MC began to nervously look around with a worried look. The three of them went out to the hot spring and she said that if she sweated, she would smell bad. She embarrassedly said loudly that she didn't stink. They hid behind a rock, and Millet said that this was her first visit to this bath. Femi sat next to him and asked why he was hiding. He sat with his back to him and embarrassedly said quietly that he had principles. He didn't look at the girls and thought he wasn't allowed to listen. She called Vivy and said that she should wash herself after all. It was their chance to finally give their hair a good rinse. She covered her ears with her hands and said in a displeased tone that she hated bathhouses. While they were washing, Alfred continued to sit with his back to them and thought that no matter what was going on there, he wasn't allowed to look because he was a gentleman. Femi looked at him and said with a little worry that his face had turned red. He thought he might be feeling a little dizzy. Colette ran up to them, saw them, and called them by name. The others were very surprised by this and called him. Vivy got very angry and said that he was going to spy on the girls in the bathhouse. He must have wanted to die. He denied it, asked them to wait, and said it was a misunderstanding. She didn't listen, loudly insulted him, and threw a bucket right at his head. He lost consciousness and thought his memory was blurry from that moment on. He opened his eyes. Millet saw this and said, "It seems he woke up." He stood up abruptly, and she was sitting next to them, continuing to insult him. He remembered what happened and thought that, yes, he felt dizzy and lost consciousness after she threw a bucket at him. Although he hated to admit it, it was pathetic for an S-class wizard. He thanked them, and Vivy said that it was strange anyway. She could swear the bathhouse was reserved for them. The protagonist was surprised by this and said that the village chief had also recommended this place to him, and he was 100% sure that the bathhouse was reserved. Millet was confused and said that the village chief had conveyed the exact same words to them through her sister. She called her to clarify, and Colette agreed and said that she learned about it from the village chief. He recommended these hot springs to his uncle and said that she and the others could go afterward too. They both approached her with surprised looks and said that she had told them something completely different. She said that the village chief had asked her to tell them that they could go to the baths. She regretted it, and Millet, with an embarrassed expression, said that somehow they had a misunderstanding. He looked around and wondered, by the way, when did he have time to change his clothes? She came up to him, put her hands on his shoulders and asked how he was feeling. She would get him some water. He thanked her, and she said with a cheerful look that these hot springs were infused with magic from magical minerals, which is why it was so easy for wizards to feel drunk. Colette came up to him, called him, and quietly said that it was his sister who dressed him. He was surprised by what he heard, covered his head with his hands, and said that it seemed like now he owed her a lot. Later he went outside. The wind blew, and he thought that they probably already went home. The three of them ran back to the village, and Millet said that he should hurry. The last one is left without dinner. although in fact she still needs to cook it so he can take his time. She called Vivy and said that she is trying too hard. She did not listen to her and said that it was a matter of life and death. She fell, and she sighed and said that it was because she was in too much of a hurry. He laughed and thought, this beautiful moment and the kind villagers, a life dedicated to protecting them is not so bad, right? After some time, MC sat at his post and thought that 5 days had passed since he got a job as a guard in the village of Merg. He dealt with the danger from the beasts and thought that he could rest, but then the culprit of everything that happened showed up. She is the self-proclaimed one of the 4 heavenly kings of the Demon King's army, Vivy, a demon girl. She intended to enlarge boars and raise dragons using powerful magic and was aiming to rebuild the Demon King's army. However, he completely prevented this. She is not bad, just a little stupid, and is now under his care. Earlier, the village leader listened to him and asked if he wanted to re-educate her. He thought that leaving her under his care for now was a good idea. After all, she is not an enemy the village can fight. He called this argument good and thought that even if she is an ordinary demon, she is still a demon. If they do not underestimate her and let her go, no one knows what she can do. He asked, why not hand her over to the Lord? The village chief said he had thought about it too, but the Lord hated any demons, and if they did that, she would be executed. Alfred understood him and said he was so cruel. In that case, they could rely on him. He thanked him and said the village would also try to help him. He said with a smile that he was going to benefit from her and make her work for the good of the village. Later, he, Millet, and Colette were walking to his house, and he said that at this rate, she wouldn't get lunch. Vivy accidentally hit her finger with a hammer and gritted her teeth in pain. She asked loudly in a displeased tone, why should she even do something like that? Femi growled angrily to intimidate her, and he said it was because she had burned his roof down herself. She said goodbye to them and said she had her own work so they would see each other in the evening. He was surprised and asked if she still had patience. She denied it and said that she helps look after the cattle that is kept in the village. She always tries to help when she can. Colette approached him and said that she thought that her sister would make a wonderful wife. He agreed with confusion and thought that he was not against it, but helping him and looking after Vivy were just her duties. He was sure that if she even thought about it for a moment, she would never love an old man like him. Millet said that she was thinking about something. If they use her magic circles, then could they get a lot of meat? He was surprised by this, considered it possible, and said that these cattle were just ordinary animals. They were different from magical beasts. She asked, however, if a cancer was a magical creature. He said with a thoughtful look that if you think about it, then it was possible. Vivy laughed and said that everything related to magic circles was easy as pie for her. He said that in that case, they would come in the afternoon and try to do it. Millet thanked them and said that she would wait. She was indignant about this, called him a lower being, and said that he should not decide everything himself. He looked at her and said that she could. She said loudly that, however, she did not say that she would do it. She was one of the 4 heavenly kings, an outstanding being who should be served. He must be an impudent fool to force her to do manual labor. Hearing this, he removed the ladder. Femi began to walk in circles near the house, and she agreed and said that it seemed like a little walk would not hurt her. After some time, the protagonist looked at the repaired roof, praised her for her good work, and said that there were a few clumsy areas, but she did everything herself. She wiped the sweat from her forehead and said that of course that was so. He said that after a short rest, they should go to the farm. She said with a displeased expression that she didn't want to, however. They still came to the farm. Millet waved her hand and said that she had been waiting for them. They came to the cow and she said that they were ready at any time. He turned and said that in that case, she should hurry up and make circles. Vivy, with a displeased expression, asked why she should do such a thing for a lower being. She was tired and it was hard to do. He looked away and thought that he could make Femi growl at her, but it was not worth it. He said that if she can't, then there was nothing to be done. Her work was done. She became indignant and said that she didn't say that she couldn't do it. He said that he thought that with her power, enlarging the cattle would be simpler. She became even more indignant and said that it was obvious that it was simpler than pie. He denied it and said that it was too difficult for her. She said loudly that it was no problem for her at all. He still denied it and said that everything was fine. He would not force her. Using too much magic is dangerous, especially for inexperienced wizards. She got angry about this and said that he shouldn't underestimate her. He should just stand there and watch silently. Millet became worried about this, called her, and said that she should go to the free pasture. MC thought with a smile that she was really very easy to provoke. They went out to the pasture, and Vivy said with a smug look that circles are the basis for magic circles. This is their core. Using several techniques at once is also very difficult. He knew experience is especially important for the simplest actions. She admired her and said that she wanted to see how her magic works. He looked at her with a smile and agreed with her words. She continued drawing a large magic circle, and when she finished, he approached her and said that, as expected, she did everything perfectly. She said in a happy tone that she had done twice as much as before. They praised her, thanked her for her help, and she said with a happy smile that she had given it her all. Millet heard her name being called, warned that the break was over, and said that this was not good. She needed to get back to work. He turned to her and asked, why don't they help her? He called Femi and asked, they can't just leave like that, right? She was happy about it and said that they were just a gift from heaven. It was quite hard, so they shouldn't overdo it. They returned to the farm and she said that they should loosen and prepare the straw intended for feed. Feed them until they are full and give them lots of love. Vivy was cleaning the cow and said loudly that she had already worked. Millet looked out at her and said that the cow was happy. After all, she was surprised by this and asked, was she really happy? In response, the cow mooed contentedly and she fell silent. Later, she thanked them for their work and said that they really saved them a lot of time. After the bath, the three of them came to his house, rested, and Vivy disapprovingly called him a lower creature and said that she was hungry. Alfred was too tired and did not want to cook food, so he said that they would eat jerky. Femi was also outraged by this and said that he could not believe it. She loudly said that he was a freak, forcing her to eat jerky for dinner. What an insolent idiot. He disapprovingly said that she should not laugh at jerky. Millet came to them with her sister, called him, apologized for the wait, and said that she brought dinner. Isn't it wonderful? He sniffed, and she turned to her and asked, she's quite a skilled lower being, isn't she? And he, a stupid idiot, should eat his own meat. She seemed a little confused by this and said that she had a portion for him too. They placed the food in front of them and wished each other bon appetit. He began to eat and asked, is this the beef stew from Merg village? It was very tasty. He was grateful that she brought food every day. She cheerfully asked him not to thank her and said that it was just her hobby. Vivy, with a happy expression on her face, held out her empty plate, asked for seconds, and with a haughty look said that in some way she had shown generosity to her, in case she didn't know. Colette continued to admire the heavenly king, and she called him and asked, what about him? The protagonist also agreed to a second serving and thought with a smile that it was truly delicious. He has a good job, he eats delicious food and has fun with his comrades. An ordinary life makes him happy. He helped wash the dishes, after which Millet and her sister went to their home and said goodbye to them. He closed the door, yawned, and asked if it was time for them to go to bed. He saw Femi climb onto the bed and thought that the bed would be covered in hair, although it did not matter. Vivy called him a freak to get his attention and loudly asked how long she would sleep in the hole. He asked with a smirk, who knows? Maybe until she does it? She asked in a displeased tone. Wasn't he tactful since he hadn't prepared everything for her yet before she realized it? She quickly ran to his bed, but he saw through her plan, pushed her away with his hand, and tried to get ahead of her. He lay down on the bed, laughed loudly, and said that it was his bed. She got angry about it and said that he, a lower creature, should know his place. She still managed to push him out of the bed, took his place, called him a freak, and said that he should go sleep in the barn. He got angry about it and asked why she wanted him to get serious so much. Okay, they should make an agreement. He will share the bed and give her the place by the wall. She said with a smirk that it can't be helped. He can only try to think something indecent, okay? MC lay down on the edge of the bed and asked who would even think about someone like her. They lay down with their backs to each other and wished each other good night. He woke up in the morning and noticed that she had laid down on his side of the bed and Fem had his tail on his face, and he thought that the agreement had been broken. After some time, he went to work and thought that over the past time, Millet and Vivy tried to take care of the cows as best they could. He looked after the wild animals, just as he carried out his duties as a guard day after day. He continued to sit in his place and thought that he finally had some free time. At that moment, the village chief called him loudly. He turned around and asked what happened. He said loudly with horror in his eyes that the cow had become huge. He was a little surprised by this and said that of course, they set up magic circles exactly for this. He began waving his arms and said loudly that, however, it was not that big. They ran together to the farm. Alfred looked to the side, saw a huge cow and thought that this was bad news. The worried villagers loudly called Millet and said that she should just leave the cows and come back. She should be careful. He also called her loudly and said that she should not do anything stupid. She called him and said that this cow had suddenly grown big. He called Vivy and asked what this all meant. Those circles shouldn't have that effect. She turned to him, laughed, and said that while she had been taking care of the cows for the past 3 days, she had made further improvements to the magic circles. That's what happens when she gets down to business. He asked loudly. She heard Femi ask, what should they do? He looked at the village chief and said that if he was asking about that, he thought about it and said that they could probably only use her for meat. He was surprised by this and asked if he was sure about this. He said that before, they were planning to sell her next month. However, if they tried that, they would have to deliver her to the city alive. However, if they made meat out of her instead, it would spoil on the way. Even if they made jerky out of her, it would still be worthless given her size. The protagonist said that in that case, after they slaughtered her, he would use magic to preserve it. He was surprised by this and said that he was their savior. Vivy was shocked by what she heard and remembered how she took care of this cow. He began to prepare to use magic and said that he would go and kill this cow. She called him a lower creature in a worried tone and asked him to stop. He thought that he was sorry, but they had no choice. She stood in front of the cow, loudly asked him to stop and said that Mufi had done nothing wrong. He was surprised by what he heard and Millet said that her name was 8. He thought that it looked like she had already found a more suitable nickname. She loudly called him a freak and said, "Look at her charming eyes. Is he still going to kill her?" Hearing a positive answer, she said with a very displeased look that it was so cruel. "He still plans to eat her meat later, doesn't he?" He agreed again, and she asked with a shocked look, "Why is he saying that? Mufi is a special cow, right?" She clenched her hands into fists out of sadness, and he walked up to her, put his hand on her shoulder, and asked if she could understand this. Because she is so big, she will have problems eating. It will also be a disaster if she starts tossing and turning in her sleep and destroys half the village. It will be extremely sad, both for the cow and for the villagers. Millet also approached her and said that they were raising her for meat anyway and were going to sell her soon. It is not her fault. Vivy walked up to the cow with a sad look and said that she is so sorry. It is because she made her big. MC said that it is not her fault, because he was the one who asked her to do this. She said that she wants him to kill her painlessly. He began to concentrate his energy and said that she could rely on him. He jumped up to the cow's head and, with a serious expression, thought about piercing her brain with a magic spear. He succeeded and thought that he allowed them to quickly drain the blood and cut her up. Using explosive magic, he dug a hole and cleared it for storage. Then, using storage magic on this spot, he turned the hole into an improvised magic bag. Its capacity increased without a visible change in volume. Then all the villagers filled it with pieces of meat, securing and covering them with the earth that had been dug. He said that this way the meat would stay fresh all year round. The village headman was surprised by this and asked, "Would it really last that long?" He agreed with a smile and said that they shouldn't worry. They said with admiration that he was incredible. Now they had even more reasons to make him stay here. Alfred looked confused and thought that it seemed like they were talking about everything. It looked like they were having a celebration tonight. Vivy sat next to the pit and quietly said, "Rest in peace." Later, the villagers had a celebration, started eating meat and drinking alcohol. One of them called him and said that these were the best cuts of meat, so he should eat. He tried it and said that it was really very tasty. He apologized and asked for a vegetarian dish and juice. He came to her and said that she had worked hard. She was sitting on a bench and said that she was not going to eat. He said that if so, he would not force her. Her stomach rumbled and he said that they also had vegetables. She said that she had no appetite. Colette called the Heavenly King and said that it was delicious. She turned away from her plate and she said that everyone eats living beings to live. Her sister told her so. She thought about it with a sad look and said that she was right. Millet called her and said that Mufi became meat for a reason. Wasn't it her responsibility to eat everything so that nothing went to waste? Vivy agreed, took a plate of meat, tried a piece, and tearfully said that it was delicious. She called the cow and thanked her for the delicious meat. Later, the two of them went to bed. She began to toss and turn in her sleep, put her hand on it, and he wondered, is this happening again? He turned to her, noticed that she was crying and calling for Mufi, and was a little confused about it. He wiped her tears and said that everything would be fine. He covered her with a blanket and wished her sweet dreams. The next morning, she woke up, called his name in a joyful tone, and said that he should wake up. They still had work today. The protagonist woke up and said how sudden this was. He called her by name and asked if she had come to her senses yet. She said she was fine in a cheerful tone. Millet came to them and said that she had brought them breakfast. They went to eat happily, and he looked at her and thought that it was such a relief. A good night's sleep must have had such an effect on her, and that was the most important thing. They finished breakfast, and the village head came to them, called him, and said that he had a favor to ask him. He left the house, and he said that yesterday's meat, he would like to go to the city tomorrow to sell it. However, lately, there are rumors that bandits have appeared recently, so he would like to ask them to accompany them. MC asked with a thoughtful look, "Is this worrisome, isn't it? He always sold meat to the merchants who came to the village, right?" He agreed, and said that one way or another, the merchants will arrive only in a month, but they have too much of it. He must have gotten tired from using magic yesterday. He said loudly with a confused look that he shouldn't worry, he could leave it to him. Colette called him and asked if this was normal for him. His knee should hurt, right? Millet said that he shouldn't push himself. They had much time thanks to him. He thanked them and said that he would be fine. He thought that she understood his intention to sell the meat as quickly as possible. After all, it was summer. Autumn, it was tax season, and it would be coming very soon. He quickly got dressed, called Vivy, and told her that she should get ready. She was indignant about this and asked loudly why she had to do such a thing. He asked with a smirk, her specialty is magic circles, right? She coughed and said that it was definitely her specialty. He said that they just needed to make enough magic bags. She cheerfully called his name and asked, he really was hopeless, wasn't he? He apologized to Millet and said that he wouldn't be able to wash the dishes. Later, they came to another place and he started using magic and thought that he would first take the skin of that huge cow and use magic to sew together several large bags. He said that first, she should use volume increase, and since they were carrying raw meat, a constant state was needed. She asked that since they were traveling by cart, she would also have to use constant mass, right? The others came to look at it, and he asked if she was going to use 3 types at once. It was quite difficult. She said that she would try to apply it, so if anything happened, he could tell her. Later, they finished using magic. Alfred said with admiration that she really was quite skilled with magic circles. Wasn't she? She improved his work by using some technique unfamiliar to him. She chuckled and said that it was because his circles were primitive and simple. She simply improved on it. He said with a smile that then all that was left was to pack the meat and check the equipment. He stepped aside, and Millet called her and asked why she started calling him her darling today. She called him freak before, right? She said that there was no specific reason. Everyone calls him that too, so she decided to give it a try too. She became embarrassed and said that she definitely didn't have any special reasons yet. She was surprised and said that it felt like she was somehow deceiving her. He thought that by sharing her joys and worries, it seemed she had become a real resident of the village of Merg. At dawn one morning, they set out on an 8-hour journey to the big city to sell meat. The travelers included Femi and him as escorts, Millet in charge of trade, and Vivy and Colette as assistants. She was driving the cart, turned around, called him, and asked how he was enjoying the ride. The protagonist said with a smile that it was quite good. She wanted to switch places. He had some experience driving the cart. She thanked him and said that if she got tired, she would ask him for help. Colette said with a smile that her sister was such a workaholic. Before leaving, the villagers supported her, and the village chief said he was counting on her. He looked at her and thought that despite her youth, she was honest and wise, and not so much trusted as allowed to represent the village. She might even be elected as the new village chief. Currently, Vivy laid her head on his legs, and he called her and said that she was quite heavy, in case you didn't know, and her horn was itchy. She didn't pay attention and said that she was quite light. He denied it and said that his legs were going numb right now. Colette joyfully pointed her finger at her, called Femi and ordered her to attack. He ran to her, she screamed loudly, and said that he should stop licking her. He indignantly said loudly that they should stop freaking out and calm down. Millet looked at them and said how cute it was. He sensed something and screamed in a serious tone, using telepathy. MC immediately listened, called him, and said that he should cover the rear. He agreed, and she called him and asked if something happened. She noticed an arrow flying at her, called him, and he used magic to stop this attack. He immediately told her to get inside, and she agreed. Bandits emerged from hiding, and he thought they were typical bandits. After killing the coachman, they take the cart and the horse. They also block the road with logs so that the horse doesn't just run past them. He got out of the cart and thought, these guys are pretty skilled, aren't they? One of the bandits pointed a knife at him and said that if he gave them the goods and the horse, they might let him live. He said in a calm tone that it was important cargo for them, so he refused. He said with a smirk that everyone who said such things dies. He said that, however, those who obediently agree also die. He said that it wasn't true. People are also important goods because they can become valuable slaves. He sighed and said with a smirk that he had no intention of being captured by someone like them or letting them escape. He was going to neutralize them, so they should come quickly. The main bandit ordered to kill them and said that these freaks were annoying him. They all ran towards him, and Alfred thought that they were too slow. I guess that's normal, because they are ordinary bandits after all. However, he never looks for a fight. He ran between them very quickly, knocked the weapons out of their hands, and bound their hands with magic. He put them in one pile and thought how stupid that was. The bandit leader loudly said that he shouldn't be so insolent. Right now his people are in this cart. At the same moment, Femi growled and drove the bandits away from the cart. He saw this, called out to them loudly, and asked what they were doing. They should shoot arrows at them. The protagonist used wind magic and said that, to his regret, the arrows would never work if he knew that they were going to shoot. At the same moment, the bandits shot at Femi, but the wind currents diverted the arrows to the sides. He used magic to bind the bandit who was shooting from a bow, called him, and asked if he felt anyone else. He looked around and said that everything was fine. There was no one else here. He smiled and said that if so, then it was such a relief. He should gather all the bandits. He looked into the cart and asked if they were okay. They agreed, and Vivy was drawing something on the floor and asked if it was over already. He looked at it and thought that she was going to protect everyone with an arrow ward, but she didn't have time. He said that during a battle, magic circles don't have to be so neat. She was surprised by this and said that, however, if there is some defect, the circle may not work. He said that even if it is 70% complete, it can already work, and if it doesn't work, then she should just draw it again. She thought about it, and he laughed and thought that now she was serious. She draws her circles too meticulously. Magic circles drawn by experts in magic academies have magnificent effects. They are incredibly amazing, but they are aimed at something completely different, or in other words, they are not suitable for battle. He said that wandering wizards cast the spell without enchantments anyway. Femi came up behind him and said that everything was ready. MC turned and asked if he could please not smell it there. He used magic to tie up the bandits in the cart and said that they should go to the city and hand them over there. He sat in the front, and Millet said that she could drive the cart alone. He refused and said that it was dangerous now, so he needed to protect her better. She sat closer, embarrassed, and asked if that was the case. Then she would be protected by him again, right? He agreed and said that she could rely on him. By the way, he could drive the cart alone. She happily refused and said that they should give it their all together. Colette looked at them and said it was so charming. Later, they arrived in the city, and he thought that when they entered the city, he handed the bandits over to the guard. It seemed they were wanted, so they received a good reward. He happily picked up the bag of money and said that they should enjoy a delicious dinner. They were happy about this, and she asked, "They did a good job, didn't they?" They came to the market square, and he asked, "What kind of huge city is this?" Vivy looked around and said with a grin that it looked like there was a whole crowd of lower beings here. Alfred threw a cloak at her and told her that she should put on the hood. She asked in a displeased tone, "Why does this only affect her?" He said that it would be problematic if her demonic nature was revealed. She put on the hood anyway and said that it seemed she had no choice. Millet looked at her with a puzzled expression, saying she couldn't believe the feudal lord of this town despised demons though. He said it was just to be on the safe side. He called Femi and asked him to act like a dog. He immediately did as he was told, and he looked at it and thought, he's indistinguishable from a dog now, right? They came to a butcher's shop, and Millet said she'd go negotiate the sale then. If anything, she was counting on his help. Later, the merchant asked if he understood their circumstances, but was the meat really okay? She said that of course it was. It could be chopped into pieces. Thanks to their farmers and mages, it was high quality. The cows from their village have bright red meat. Their fat is pleasant to the taste, with plenty of marbled meat inside, and the rest of their customers enjoyed it wholeheartedly. The seller, with a thoughtful look, began to examine the meat and said that it was good quality. He'd heard rumors for a while and wanted to try it. After all, there weren't many people around here who could use preservation magic, right? He was just worried about it getting ruined by some mage from a small village. He didn't have any written guarantees. The protagonist approached him, pulled him aside, and said they should talk about it right here, just for a second. He showed him the card and said he should take a look. It had a mage identification certificate. He was very surprised by what he saw and asked loudly, "So, he's from the hero team. Why was he busy with something like that?" He gestured for him to be quiet, apologized, and said that his presence here was a secret for now. He understood and said he was very sorry. He figured that an adventurer's card was impossible to counterfeit, plus he was S rank, so he was extremely trusted. They returned to the others, and the merchant said that they should then return to negotiations. Millet thanked him for his help and said that it seemed this could already turn into tense negotiations. He said with a smile that everything was fine. Ensuring the magical effect was the mage's responsibility. The workers carried the sacks of meat inside, and the merchant came to pay for it, and she thanked him for that. Vivy looked at the cart and said with surprise that they emptied such a huge bag. He looked around and thought that the sun began to set a little after the deal was completed. The merchant called him, apologized, and asked if he could distract him for a moment. He can brag to his son about meeting the venerable gentleman. MC said that he should thank him for the favor rendered, but nevertheless, it was a secret. He happily handed over a piece of paper, quill, and asked if it was a bit rash of him, but could he get his autograph? His son was his fan. He became embarrassed and said that it seemed like nothing bad would happen. Since he was a fan, it seemed like he had no choice. What was his name? Vivy hurried him in a displeased tone and asked if he was going to keep them waiting. They started to leave. The merchant waved his hand, thanked them, and said that if they needed anything else, they should definitely stop by again. He thought that at sunset, the carriage went to the inn, and in this short period when their work was done, they decided to stroll through the streets of the castle. They walked along the shopping streets and said in surprise that it looked delicious. It was impossible to find something like this in their village. He agreed and asked for 4 servings, and Femi asked in a dissatisfied tone through telepathy, "What about him?" He remembered him and asked for another serving. They received their food, began to eat, and admired how delicious it was. Alfred wondered if it was even possible to feed a wolf this. Although, okay, he was not an ordinary wolf, so he was sure everything would be fine. He handed him his serving, they began to eat, and he thought that the sweetness filled his tired body. They walked further and saw a merchant selling roasted meat. He immediately called him and said that he wanted to eat it. He was surprised by this and asked if there was a limit to his hunger. He still approached the merchant and said that since they came all this way here, they might as well have some fun. They bought a portion of meat for everyone, started eating, and he said that this steak was so unusual, it was as if it had come down from heaven. The others were also happy with it, and Millet said that the food stalls here were pretty good. They finished eating, and he thought that it seemed like everyone was satisfied after eating delicious food. Since they would be staying with Femi, he took a slightly expensive hotel for Millet. The hotel worker showed them the room and said that they could make themselves at home. She thanked him, and the protagonist looked at the key and wondered, would they have the same room? They entered the room, noticed that there were only 2 beds. He called her and asked if she was going to sleep in the same bed with him today. She agreed and said that this hotel was expensive after all. Is that a problem? He thought with a tense look. How did she even guess? Vivy went to the bed and calmly said that there was nothing wrong with spending the night in the same room. Not just sharing, she usually shares a bed with him. She was shocked by this and asked, do they sleep in the same bed? She started shaking his shoulders and asked loudly, is it true? Do they sleep in the same bed? The protagonist thought that he considered it a problem that an old man like him would share a room with a girl who is old enough for marriage, not to mention a bed. He agreed and said that it was because they share a bed, so it was true. However, Femi also sleeps with them. Millet asked loudly, but he does realize that this is a dog, right? He walked next to her and said that he is actually a wolf. Vivy was lying on the bed and asked if she could sleep in the same bed with him as usual. She waved her hand dismissively and said that Femi could sleep with them. He got angry about this, climbed onto her bed, and she became confused and loudly asked him not to climb. He started licking her face and Millet grabbed her hand, pulled her away and said that she would sleep with her. They started discussing it, and he looked at them and thought that for some reason they started arguing. Vivy asked with a smirk, by the way, why is she so angry? Is it jealousy? She became very embarrassed and started denying it, and he raised his hand and said that he doesn't mind sleeping on the floor, if anything. She turned to him and with a red face, said that there's no way she can let him sleep on the floor. MC said that he has been an adventurer for many years, so a wooden floor is much better than dirt or stones. Colette thought about it, raised her hand and said that then she will sleep with him. They thought about it and said that everything seems to be fine. He thought that in the end, he went to sleep with her and Femi in the same bed. She started petting his fur and said that he is so fluffy. He covered them with a blanket and they said goodnight. He was about to fall asleep, but heard Vivy say that she should move a little more. Millet called her and asked. She did realize that she was taking more than half of the bed for herself, right? She said that was ridiculous. Or could lower beings be her equal? Later, in the middle of the night, Alfred woke up, looked to the side, and noticed that Millet was sleeping next to him. He was a little confused about this, called her and thought she got up to go to the toilet, but then she got into the wrong bed because she was half asleep. How can I say it? She just clung to his hand. She continued to sleep and called his name, and he decided to do nothing about it. When morning came, Vivy woke up, looked to the side, and noticed that she was not next to her. She was very surprised when she saw her and loudly asked what she was doing anyway. What a shameless elf. She secretly snuck into the guy's bed in the middle of the night. She threw the blanket off them. She was very embarrassed by this and said that she didn't even notice how it happened. She loudly called her a liar, with a displeased look, and said that it was written all over her face. She yawned and said that there was no need to press so hard. She picked up the blanket, lay back down, called him, and said that she wanted to sleep some more. She threw the blanket off them, grabbed his hand, led him along, and said that he couldn't take his eyes off her for even a second. Millet said that she still wanted to sleep. She said in a displeased tone that if she had forgotten, they had a lot to do today. Colette held on to his clothes, loudly called him and said that she wanted to sleep. He stroked her head and said that they needed to go. She could sleep on the way. After that, they left the hotel and went into town to go shopping. Millet looked at the note from the village chief and said that they could leave the shopping in her hands. The protagonist nodded in agreement with a smile and thought, even if bargaining was her job, but was she really the right one for it? They were sitting in the cart. Coletta looked out, pointed to the side, and asked him to look there. He looked there and saw that she was pointing to an ice cream stall and understood her. He handed them some money and said that he didn't want to eat, so they could go ahead. They bought themselves some food, and he helped Millet carry the bag to the cart. After that, they bought some more tools and packed it into the cart. When they left the city, she said with a smile that she tried a lot of different delicious food and also had an incredibly exciting experience this time. He sat nearby, driving the cart while she ate, and said that he also found it interesting. Coletta looked at the city with a small smile and waved. They reached the village calmly, came across some bumps. He laughed and asked if she felt at home yet. This road was just terrible. She said, in a slightly confused tone, that it was inevitable. She was glad to see the village again. He agreed with a smile and thought that they had returned home. He remembered the past and thought that for quite a long time he had lived a life full of travels and adventures and did not know the feeling of returning home. However, he was glad to be back here. Even though he had not lived here for that long, he had already become attached to this village. He turned around and asked, he will unload these things now, okay? They should be more careful. Vivy said with a smile that it was light as a feather, thanks to her magic. He heard the villagers start applauding. MC turned to them, and one of them thanked them and said that they must be tired from the long trip. He was sincerely grateful for their contribution to their village. Thanks to the giant cow, meat had become cheaper, so it was a huge lifeline. She loudly declared that it was all thanks to her. He became embarrassed and said that it was nothing special. He was just doing his job as a guard. The village chief said that he had heard that he had played a big role in protecting against bandits. Millet approached the villagers standing nearby and loudly praised him with admiration. He approached him and said that he should go and rest today. Alfred said with a smile that it was a good idea. He remembered what had happened earlier and thought that when they returned home to the village, the abode of the mysterious hot springs, the first place they would go would be. He called the village chief and said that he would like to ask for advice on where to find a good bathhouse. They received a recommendation and headed to the hot spring to recover from their fatigue. Millet followed them and asked if this was their first time coming here together, right? Vivy walked next to him and said that the abundance of hot baths was the only thing she liked about this stupid place. The protagonist thought that, frankly, he would like to visit this place more often so that his knee would recover faster. They reached the right place. He called the girls and said that they could go first. She politely refused. They continued to give in to each other, and Vivy realized that this would not end, stepped forward and said that she would go first. She was surprised when she noticed that Femi had already gone inside and stopped. He followed him and said that he needed to wash himself, so he would go first. He began to undress and said that the hot spring was quite small, but it was really very nice here. He barked in response. They came to the bath, and he said that here they were, at last, at the hot spring in which he so wanted to bathe. Now is the perfect weather for an unforgettable experience at the hot springs. He looked around and thought that they were on the edge of a cliff. For girls, it would be a little dangerous, so it would be better to leave a protective barrier, just in case. He turned to him, called out and said that he was going to wash his body now. He started washing his fur while he barked, and said that he had been thinking about it a lot lately, but he asked for an answer to something. Hasn't his intellect degraded? He was surprised by what he heard and said that it was so rude. MC denied it and said that lately he couldn't get rid of his dog Aura, or whatever the correct way to say it is. He didn't say anything, only barked. Femi said that it was unfortunate, but people were simply unable to understand him because they only had a weak means of conveying their will called speech. He asked, so he thinks they will be incapable of anything if they don't speak? He said that wasn't the case. There are just many other ways of communicating besides this. He is new. He thought that for some reason, he suddenly started acting so insolent. He pretended to understand him and said that he should wash all the bubbles off him. He sat down next to him, sighed and said that it means he is rude enough not to notice his stupidity. He did not answer this and said that he should be ready. Now he will pour it on him. He was surprised when he heard Colette say with admiration that this is a mountain hot spring. Vivy called her and said that it is dangerous to get so carried away. They came to them. She happily called him, and she said that he is not allowed to look at her. Alfred was confused by this and said that he definitely is not looking at all. By the way, they knew that he was inside. She asked loudly, so is he trying to say that she shouldn't have come in? He agreed, and she chuckled and said that she was a high-class demon. She would not adhere to the usual practices of lower beings. He was confused by this and asked why she did not live up to her own words. She pointed her finger to the side and said that it seemed like she wanted to thank him. Millet came to them and said that she was grateful to him for everything he had done all this time. As thanks, she would wash his back. He felt embarrassed about this, was about to ask something, and she immediately agreed and said that he could leave it to her. She adjusted her towel. He became even more embarrassed, tried to refuse and said that he was quite satisfied with everything as is. She continued to insist on it and said that he did not need to hold back. He did not need to worry about her so much. It had been a long journey, so she wanted him to relax in the hot spring. It was also thanks for protecting them from the bandits. She pushed him to sit on the chair and said in a cheerful tone that he should just accept it and sit obediently. He closed his eyes and thought that it seemed like he couldn't refuse. She looked at him and said that his whole back was covered in scars. He said that it was because he was an adventurer. That's so cool. Vivy chuckled and said that scars on the back are a shame for a knight. He looked at her and said that he is not a knight. She finished washing Colette and she immediately ran to Fem. They got into the bathtub and began to bathe together. Millet said that she finished washing his back. He thanked her and she walked around him and said that now she would wash his front. He became even more embarrassed about this and asked, actually, he can wash his front himself, okay? She asked him not to hold back, began to wash his body, and he thought that her fingers were cool and so relaxing. He became embarrassed, moved away from her and said that she should watch. He could wash himself. Everything was fine. Vivy laughed, turned around, called him, and said that he should wash her back. It was a great honor for him. Millet came up to her and said that she would wash her back too. She was confused by this and said that she only came because she wanted him to wash her back. She said with a smile that maybe it would be next time. She was unhappy about this, and he was grateful to her and thought that he was saved. He lay down in the bath, looked up, and thought that heaven was so close. He felt like his knee was recovering. Coletta called him and asked if his knee still hurt, right? He agreed and said that for now it was bearable, however. She was worried about this and said that then she would give him a massage. He thanked her and said he was feeling much better now. She was glad to hear it, and he thought it was actually bearable, but it still hurt. Come to think of it, an old man at the bar, a former adventurer, had once told him that his joints hurt mostly in bad weather. He was sure that his pain was also related to that, but he could still lead a normal life. However, being an adventurer was difficult. If a battle broke out, even someone like him, who could read the weak points of even intelligent opponents, could end up being the most vulnerable part of the group. Besides, they would almost never be able to rest like that during adventures. Colette got out of the bath, ran towards the house, and loudly said that she was too hot and was leaving. Millet asked her to wait, but he raised his hand to stop her. He and Femi approached her, and the protagonist said that he would keep an eye on her, so since the two of them finally had a chance, they should take a good rest. asked. She said that in that case, they would take him up on his offer. Later, when they were finished, she asked with a satisfied look, "The hot springs really are amazing, aren't they? It's so healing." Then, as soon as she finishes cooking dinner, she would call them. He thanked her, looked to the side and noticed the village chief. He was standing next to several people and said that he was very grateful for their help. They approached them, and he asked if they needed anything. He was a little confused by this, agreed, and said that he had a request for Vivy. She was a little surprised by this and asked what it was. He was about to walk away from them, and he said that it was difficult for him to say this, but he discussed it with everyone. They would be very grateful to her if she used her enlargement magic on the cow again. MC was surprised by what he heard and thought that, of course, the cow would just become twice as big and would not become like an improved version of Mufi. He said that he sincerely apologized, but this was something they couldn't help them with. He understood the situation and apologized. He thought that, of course, it was much more convenient to raise big cows, but she was deeply depressed because of that incident. She turned to him, called him by name, and asked why he refused them. Even if they were going to refuse them, she should do it. He was confused by this, apologized, and she called the village headman and said with an inspired look that it was no problem at all. He was surprised by this and asked if everything was really okay. He was worried about her and said that she shouldn't force herself, okay? After all, he is an experienced mage, so he could probably emulate her. She chuckled at this and asked, "Does he call himself experienced?" She confidently raised her hand and asked who he took her for. "She is one of the 4 heavenly kings of the Demon King's army, a legendary mage." He seemed a little flustered by this and said that if she needed help, she should just say so. She continued to maintain a confident appearance and refused, and he asked, was she really sure about that? This made her think and said that she couldn't say that he couldn't help. It seemed like he could watch, just in case, right? He smiled and said that in that case, it seemed like he would learn from her. She happily said that it was a great idea. The next day, they arrived at the farm to start work, and Millet, with a worried look, asked if she would be okay. Vivy sat down on the ground with a happy expression, called them lower beings, and said they shouldn't worry about the Heavenly King from the Demon King's army. She began to draw a magic circle with a smile, and Alfred thought that it seemed like she had come to terms with the incident with Mufi. Now he felt relieved to see her smiling. It seemed like they had all returned to their normal lives. After some time, he thought that it hadn't been long since he volunteered to be the guardian of Merg village. The village's problems were mostly solved now, so he was enjoying his retired life. However, he had too much free time. He took out a ball, called Femi, and asked if he wanted to play for a while. He threw the ball a few meters and said that if he brought it back, he would reward him. He immediately ran after the ball, and Vivy, who was drawing a magic circle on the ground, was indignant and loudly said that it was raising dust. He started running happily after the ball, and he looked at it and thought, maybe his dog instincts were kicking in? She chuckled and said that after all, he was just a wild dog. Anyway, he should take a look at it. She started talking about it in great detail, and he asked with a thoughtful look, "It looks quite skillfully made, doesn't it?" When he brought the ball, he petted him and praised him for it. She got angry because of this and said that to think that he would decide to interrupt their conversation. She became even more indignant when Femi began to wave his tail around the magic circle, and he chuckled, looking at her. They started fighting, and he watched it from the side and asked, can they even control themselves? He started licking her face, and she said in a displeased tone that she smelled like a dog. The protagonist thought with a smile that he was happy with his life. Later they went to bed and Femi heard a soft sound, woke up and immediately sat up. He noticed it, woke up and said that if he needed to go to the toilet, he should hurry and go. He said that was not the case. He sat still, looking out the window, and began to wave his ear. He asked then, what was the matter? Vivy woke up, began to rub her eye and said that she wanted to sleep. He told her to sleep. She immediately went to bed and covered herself with a blanket. He turned to him and asked if he hadn't heard his name being called. It was the howling of his brothers. He listened, but still heard nothing, and he said that it seemed like something had happened. Could he take a little time off? He lit a lamp, followed him out of the house, and asked if he could help with anything. He said that he could see him out. It was his duty as a king and Femi. He grew in size, and MC said that it seemed like an eternity since he saw this form of him. They walked towards the exit, and he said that he would be back tomorrow for lunch. He said that he should tell him if he had any problems. He remembered the past and thought that when he first met him, he gave the impression of a weak, emaciated wolf. But now he looks fearless and strong. Femi rubbed her head against him, and he stroked him and said that he would be okay. He could go. Immediately after that, he quickly went into the forest. After that, he returned home, lay down in bed and tried to sleep, but couldn't because of a little restlessness. He thought that all the magical wolves had matured, so he said that it would be okay to leave them alone. However, the fact that he was called must mean that something serious had happened. What had to happen for it to be as big a problem as a giant magical boar? Would he be able to handle it? He was able to fall asleep, but he had a nightmare in which a pack of wolves was attacked by a huge monster that was much stronger than them. He woke up abruptly because Vivy was calling loudly and trying to wake him up. He sat up and told her that she should stop. He was already up. He wished her good morning, and she asked with a worried look what happened. He groaned as if he was having a nightmare. He covered his face with his hand and said that he just had an unpleasant nightmare. She began to look around mockingly and said that he was groaning from a nightmare. She did not expect less from a lesser creature. By the way, where did the dog go? He said that something happened to his pack, so he returned to the forest. He looked at her and thought that he wondered if she would be excited to hear this. But in the end, she was afraid of him. They had breakfast with Millet and the others, after which he went on duty as always. They sat in front of the gate and she began to draw a magic circle on the ground. He looked at the place where Femi was playing, remembered it, and took a deep breath. She noticed it and asked, "Is he worried about the dog?" Alfred said that he would be back for dinner. He was about to say something else, and she asked in a calm tone, "Then he has nothing to worry about, right?" He was still worried, and she called him and said that he should look here. He looked at it and asked, "Is this a magic circle?" She said with a happy expression on her face that it was a magic circle that would protect him from nightmares if he drew it on his forehead. He was touched by it, and she said with a happy look that she invented it herself. He wondered if she was worried about him to some extent. After some time, he was still sitting in his place and said that today was also nothing unusual. He closed the gate to the village and thought with a worried look. Millet came closer and said that his food was ready. He turned to her and thanked her for it. Colette ran out to him and asked in a worried tone if Femi would not return home. The protagonist looked towards the forest and said that he thought she was just busy. He hoped that he would not encounter any problems. After all, he was the king of magical wolves, so he was sure that everything would be fine with him. Later, he finished eating and said with a happy look that today was also very tasty. She thanked him for the praise, and at that moment they heard a loud bark. They were happy when they saw Femi, who climbed home. Colette jumped on him with a happy expression, and he said, "Welcome home." "He's a little late, isn't he?" He called his name and said with a worried look that he needed his help. He said with a serious expression that he could leave it to him. He said with a worried look that they didn't have much time. MC went to get ready and asked why he didn't rest for a bit. He would be ready in no time, so he should at least drink a little. He started drinking the water Millet brought, and he quickly put on his clothes. After which the two of them went outside. Femi turned to him and said that he would explain the situation while they ran. They were both surprised and stopped when Vivy said loudly in a decisive tone that she would come with them. He didn't object. He was going to help her climb onto his back and thought that she was an exceptional mage. It could be useful. However, he swung his paw, causing her to fall to the ground. She was indignant about this and loudly said that he should carry her too. He growled angrily, frightening her, and Alfred called him and said that he understood that nothing could be done if he refused, but she could help too. He still allowed her to climb on his back and said that he would make an exception since it was an emergency. Millet stood next to her worried sister and said that they must return safe and sound. He promised to do so, and the three of them galloped into the forest. They galloped quickly along the path. He called him and asked what they should do. Femi said that an enemy had appeared that he could not cope with. She grinned and said that what a pity, after all he was just a dog. He growled angrily to scare her, and he calmly thought that even though she was afraid of him, it did not stop her from making fun of him. He asked what kind of enemy they were dealing with. He continued to gallop forward and said that this is a great immortal dragon. He was surprised by what he heard and thought that a dragon is the most powerful beast. Moreover, if it is a great adult dragon, then it is not even worth talking about its enormous strength. Besides, it is possible that it is undead. It will be able to move even if it is fatally damaged. Even if he breaks its head, skull, or heart, it will not stop moving. To defeat it, it will be necessary to cut off all its limbs and burn it to ashes. It will take them a long time. The protagonist noticed that Vivy was making some kind of sound and asked if she was okay. She did not have to go with them. She was very nervous and asked what he was saying. She said with obvious fear that someone like a great immortal dragon was no match for her. Femi stopped and he asked, "Is this place here?" They looked around, and she felt something and was very scared when she saw the wolves approaching them. He climbed down from his back and asked what the situation was. He promised to explain everything and said that last night, an immortal dragon suddenly attacked. His magical wolves tried to repel the attack, but they failed. Then they asked him for help. But at that moment, a large number of small undead dragons appeared, which is why they failed. That's why he turned to him. MC looked around, saw the bones of the dragons, and said that even though they were small, to think that they were able to defeat 3 undead dragons. The magical wolves are quite amazing, aren't they? Femi said that he could fight alone, but casualties would be inevitable, so he turned to them. He is the king of the magical wolves. He must protect his pack, so he asks for their help. He thought with a serious expression that he can't say that he can win, but he can say that he can fight. He clearly understands the difference in strength between him and the enemy. That's why, as a king, he bows his head to protect his pack. He walked up to him, patted his head, and said that he is an amazing king, so he should raise his head. He said with a confident smile that he can leave it to them. Of course they will help. Vivy said with a smile that he can just be confident and count on them. They walked towards the mountains, and Femi said that it looks like the dragons are heading towards his forest. Alfred said with a smile that there is a village called Merg, not far from his forest. So, you can say that he is doing his job as a guard. He stroked his fur and said that they can leave the huge one on him. The wolves should go and fight back for as long as they can. Vivy pointed her finger at herself and asked loudly, what about her? He said that she can do what she wants, he trusts her. She ran into the forest, and he spread his arms and said, Queen of Fire, who commands the fiery heavens, Prince of Demons, who rules hell, they must open the gates of purgatory with the holy key. The ruler of the sun and earth must burn away the impurities of this world with his hellish flames of eternal darkness. He said his name, completing the spell, and a very powerful explosion occurred in front of him. She felt it, and asked loudly in surprise, what kind of power is this? He looked at the place struck by the explosion and thought, he was holding back his magical power so as not to burn the forest. But what will happen next? He noticed that the dragon survived this attack, was surprised by this and wondered, so he couldn't turn it to ashes? Less should be expected from the great dragon. Not only did he turn into a zombie, but he also had a magical barrier around himself. He looked around and asked, so even the smaller dragons survived because they hid in his shadow? They began to retreat, and he loudly said that each of them must give it their all. They must act as planned. They were running away from the crowd of dragons. He attacked with magic spears and thought that in addition to combat use, their speed was worthy of praise. So the magic barrier reflects his attacks? He continued to use magic and thought that the second round was beginning. He quickly circled the dragon and attacked with his magic. He continued to attack for a long time. The magic barrier began to crack. He put a large amount of energy into his spell and thought that the third round was beginning. With this attack, he was able to break through the dragon's barrier and wounded its body. The dragon let out a loud roar of pain, and the protagonist was surprised by this and thought, so it still feels pain despite being undead? Then it is quite a pity. He must kill it quickly. He noticed that the small dragons began to fly away and wondered, are they running towards him? Vivy saw this and in a decisive tone said loudly that she will not let them escape. He should say hello to her windblades. She activated the magic circle she drew, and many windblades started flying out. She hit several dragons, and the great dragon fell to the ground with a loud crack. He saw this and thought that his barrier was gone, and he didn't seem to have the strength to restore it. He walked up to this dragon, who was suffering from pain, swung his magic spear and said that this was the end. He pierced its neck with this spear, and she ran to him and loudly said that it was still moving. MC, with a calm expression on his face, created fire magic in his hand and said that he could sleep peacefully. He burned the body of the great dragon, and Femi and his pack let out a loud howl. He looked at this and thought that he and the other wolves began to howl now that they confirmed his death by incineration. He wiped the dirt from his face and thought with a smile that they had won. The protagonist reflected. In total, they had defeated 1 great dragon and 20 lesser dragons. Vivy remarked how sad it was. These proud dragons had become undead, or rather, zombies, if anything. The protagonist agreed. Yes, it was a pitiful sight. He thought, zombification magic is absolutely taboo. Who could do such a thing? If someone is struck by this spell, they lose control of their body and become a living corpse. Along with their consciousness, they are transformed into a puppet with zero control over their body. Both allies placed their hands on their chests and told the dragons to rest in peace. After that, MC told Vivy, well, they need to hurry and retrieve the remains. He was sure Millet and Coletta were already worried. The girl replied, then she would help him too. They began butchering. Alfred asked his companion, by the way, why she went with him today. She hesitated for a moment and then exclaimed, exactly. She just thought she could make those puppies owe her. That's right. Now they're in her debt. She wasn't the least bit worried about them. He looked at her in surprise, then with a small laugh thought, it seems she was worried about Femi too. The protagonist stroked her head and said, I see. She tried hard, didn't she? With these words, he left, and she, following behind, asked what he meant by, I see. At that moment, the familiar muttered, are they going back? After a while, Millet, hearing footsteps, covered her mouth in surprise, stopped what she was doing, and ran to the gate. The protagonist and his companions emerged from the forest. He joyfully called her name and asked sheepishly. She was waiting for them. Femi and Vivy also looked at her, embarrassed. The girl happily addressed him by name and congratulated them on their return. Colette ran up to Femi, hugged him, and joyfully shouted his name, hugging him by the muzzle. The magical beast smiled at the girl and licked her face. Then the girl rushed to the protagonist, hugged him, and mangling the word Mr., also congratulated him on his return. He laughed and ruffled her hair. Vivy, looking at Millet, noted with alarm the dark circles under their eyes. Could it be that they'd been waiting for them all this time without going to bed? The elf laughed awkwardly and replied, they caught them. Colette rubbed her eyes. Millet said, they'd been waiting for them all this time, without their knowledge. The protagonist sheepishly replied, I hope they'll forgive me. It seems he's disturbed them. But anyway, thank you. Millet asked Vivy if she was hungry. She admitted, yes, she was very hungry. MC, watching everyone, thought it was great that it was all over and everything was fine. He supposed he should have taken a short break after all that. In any case, he didn't want to strain himself now. Stretching to loosen his body, he followed the girls. Birds were perched on the fence, chatting in their own language. Femi yawned and dozed off, lying on the ground. Vivy, drawing a magic circle in the sand, asked what he was doing. Alfred replied, he was just sorting through things in his bag. There are so many defects here. He's asking for forgiveness. At that moment, Millet called out to him and said she brought the elder. The old man greeted him with a smile and asked if he had some kind of request. The protagonist thanked him for coming and said he'd like to show him something first. He pulled an item out of his bag, laid it out, and said, "The head of a great dragon." The elder cried out in amazement and sank to the ground, wondering, "What?" The protagonist replied with a smile. Indeed, he'd received a lot of things from 20 dragons last night, but they were quite large and heavy. With that, he began pulling out the remaining items. The old man looked at him in confusion. MC continued, calling him over to ask if there was a place he could rent to store these things. They were in his bag, but he shouldn't always carry so much stuff. The elder asked in surprise, "Is that all true? Dragon remains and all that?" Alfred replied that it was. He wondered if it was true that some people in the world considered dragons to be divine beings. Perhaps the elder was one of them. Seeing his astonished state, the protagonist said, "Excuse me, these dragons were undead. He had no choice." The old man countered, "That's not the point." He then grabbed the protagonist's hands and exclaimed, "He's amazing." He simply couldn't believe he'd killed so many dragons in one night. He was definitely the protector of their village. The protagonist thanked him in surprise. Millet exclaimed enthusiastically, "That's right. The elder is absolutely right. MC is simply amazing. She always knew it." The protagonist sheepishly thanked her as well. Vivy was indignant. What are they talking about? She did most of the work. The protagonist smiled and thought, few people can destroy so many dragons. Only a powerful group or a small number of veteran adventurers like himself could do it. The elder turned to him and ordered him never to overdo it. Usually an encounter with a dragon means death. He promised the old man that he understood everything and would be careful. The elder continued, regarding the warehouse, he thought there was a plot of land outside the village that he could use as he saw fit. MC happily exclaimed, "Excellent. They'll build the warehouse there." After some time, he set off for the future warehouse site. Alfred, using his magical skills, began construction. The locals assisting him watched his work with surprise and admiration. He asked, do they remember? He could use magic for the foundation and assembly, but only to a certain extent. If they had any problems, they should feel free to report them to him. The villagers admired his skill. How convenient. The protagonist smiled and remarked that it really did seem much easier for mages than for physical labor. A builder passing by with heavy planks remarked, "He's right." After 3 days of helping the carpenters build, he gazed with delight at his new warehouse. Millet and Vivy sighed in admiration when they saw the structure. The protagonist declared, "They're finally finished." Stepping inside, Vivy exclaimed, "Let him just look at this interior." Thanks to her magic, it's not only sturdy, but also holds more than one could imagine. That's the sign of a master. This isn't some savage battle magic. She had to draw a perfect, elegant magic circle for this. He laughed and suggested that maybe she should become a carpenter. Vivy laughed and replied, "He thinks so too. They'll keep all their valuables here. It needs to be guarded." The protagonist remarked in surprise, "Is that really necessary?" She exclaimed in bewilderment, "Of course." Vivy winked at him conspiratorially and declared, "She has everything planned out." Alfred was even more surprised, right? The next day, she was reading something intently. The protagonist, seeing this, asked why she was suddenly so diligent. Vivy replied, "Just let him wait and watch her do everything with her excellent skills." At that moment, Millet appeared and asked him if he would help her gather herbs. The protagonist readily agreed, after which she thanked him and said, then they should go. He turned to Femi, and the familiar readily responded to his call. Then he asked Vivy if she was coming with them. The girl replied, "No, she's preparing for something." After a while, MC and Millet set off on Femi's back. In the forest, Alfred winced and asked if she smelled something unpleasant. The girl, whose face was covered with a bandage, answered, yes. He was right. The herbs they were looking for had an unpleasant odor. He should cover his nose too. Dismounting her familiar, Millet said, "She's off." He replied, "Okay," and looked at Femi, who smelled something. The protagonist asked if he was okay. The familiar said it smelled so good in here, so strong. The protagonist looked at him in confusion and then replied, "Well, although he doesn't know if humans and wolves have different senses of smell, and why is it sniffing him?" The familiar continued tickling him with its nose. MC laughed and asked him to stop. Finally, Millet appeared and said she was done. He was surprised to notice how fast it was. She replied with a smile that she only needed a little. Alfred said, in that case, they should go back. He offered her his hand to help her climb onto Femi, when suddenly Cruz came up from behind and asked if she could have him for a minute. The protagonist froze for a second, confused, thinking that he hadn't sensed anyone's presence. He never thought anyone could get so close to him without him noticing. She was definitely a difficult person. Millet turned around first and asked in a friendly tone if she needed anything. The heroine replied that she was just a little lost. Do they know where the village of Merg is? The protagonist thought, confused. The hero's team. A squad of 4 S-class adventurers who had destroyed the Demon King once and for all. He himself a veteran mage, Luca a wise warrior, Urina a valuable healer, and the genius, the Holy Spirit-blessed heroine Cruz. But what was she doing here? First, he needed to change his voice. He'd make her leave, even if he had to use force. It would be very unpleasant if the capital's residents found out he was here. Adjusting his mask, he turned to her and in a changed voice asked, What happened? Cruz, looking at him intently and surprised, replied, no, nothing. Had they met before? MC snapped back. No, he didn't think so. The heroine spoke in confusion, thinking they'd met before. Alfred wondered if she was suspicious. What could he do to mislead Cruz? Suddenly, a solution occurred to him. He turned away, pulled a beard from his magic bag, attached it to his face, and removing his mask, turned to the girl, thinking that this should work. Then he asked, she's looking for the village of Merg, right? They'll show her the way. He thought, thank goodness he still had a fluffy beard for the party. Cruz looked at him in confusion, then smiled broadly and asked, in that case, take care of her. Alfred remarked how good it was that she was so naive. Millet looked at her ally in surprise, then addressed him by his shortened name, noting that it was time for them to return home. He corrected the girl. No, his name is Raul. She stared at him in confusion, and he began introducing her as Cruz, saying that her name was Millet. The girl exclaimed in amazement. What? The protagonist turned his head in her direction and clarified, isn't that so? She looked at him puzzled for a moment, then smiled and nodded her head in agreement. He thanked her for her understanding, flashing the accept sign. Finally, the four of them set off. Millet walked next to Cruz, while the protagonist rode on his familiar's back. He apologized to the heroine, asking her to forgive him for making her walk while he rode his pet. He simply had an injured leg. The girl cheerfully replied that she didn't mind. Millet told her name, saying she was from the village of Merg. MC also introduced himself, calling himself Raul. Cruz smiled and said, thank them very much for their kindness. Her name is Cruz Condoran, and she's here to slay the undead dragons that have infested this area. Millet, surprised, was about to say something, but Alfred interrupted her, exclaiming, oh my god, this is terrible. Cruz had noticed it was all true. The undead dragons were created by a dark mage, likely one of the survivors of the Demon Lord's army. The protagonist repeated in surprise, a dark mage? The heroine suddenly caught herself and said, don't worry, they've already taken care of them. They were building a base in the western mountains. She was the one who found them. The undead dragons were ordered to attack the royal capital. That's why they were asked to eliminate the mages. The protagonist thought, that makes sense. If you draw a straight line from the western mountains to the royal capital, it would pass through Femi Forest and the village of Merg. He understood that all the dragons were already dead. But how could he explain this to her? At this point, Cruz continued, so instead of participating in the main event, she would be here to protect the village of Merg. Millet remarked, wow, that's so encouraging. MC muttered, oh my, and noted, have the village guards already taken care of those dragons? He couldn't say the threat was over. Millet turned to Cruz and said she was very good looking for a girl her age. She was quite strong. The heroine happily showed off her muscles and replied, maybe it was because of her training? They chatted incessantly for the rest of the way. Approaching the village, Alfred was surprised to see how lively it was. What he saw left him in shock. He exclaimed, what the hell happened to his house? Instead, only ruins remained, billowing smoke. He approached one of the villagers guarding the house and asked, what's going on? The man, barely able to speak from the fear he experienced, replied, the stranger attacked him, and Vivy tried to protect him. An enraged Luca stood across from Vivy. Cruz uttered her ally's name in surprise. The girls stood facing each other, ready for battle. The protagonist thought, this isn't good. He straightened his beard and stepped between them. Luca rudely asked him to get out of her way. Vivy apologized, telling him to forgive her. She tried to stop her, but she'd simply lost it. He thought, so that's it. But maybe Vivy had burned the house down? Or had that girl unleashed some kind of combat magic and blown it up? The hero and the warrior had come together? He apologized out loud to Luca, saying, that girl might be a demon, but she wasn't a bad demon. Luca responded irritably, saying she didn't care whether she was a demon or not. She tried to create a giant undead bull. Vivy retorted angrily, saying it was just a normal skeleton. He thought in disbelief. A bull skeleton? She continued. This is no place for weirdos who can't even tell the difference between a normal skeleton and the undead. Luca responded, yet that magic circle was enormous. The protagonist thought, now it all makes sense. That's why Vivy was so desperate. She resurrected Morphe as a skeleton and ordered him to guard the warehouse. Luca remarked that she had done the right thing by destroying the magic circle, because he was a true monster. Vivy screamed indignantly, telling her to take it back. She shouldn't dare call Morphe a monster. He said out loud, based on what he knew, some countries use skeletons and humans in their armies, and he didn't think there was much difference between a human skeleton and an ox skeleton. The ability to control the dead. The souls of the dead are defiled, causing them to turn into skeletons. Skeleton souls are temporary and bound to their master. Skeletons can also be partners with humans. Luca countered that that might be true, but it was still wrong. Vivy, looking at him, pointed out, that's right, she's not bad. All the villagers who had approached by that moment began to whisper, that's right, she's not bad. And this young girl, and already with a bad character. The city is a terrible place. Cruz approached Luca and asked, what's going on here? She stared at the heroine in bewilderment and exclaimed, she got separated from them so suddenly. And now it turns out she's already here. Cruz wanted to object, but Luca irritably cut her off and continued, oh well, it doesn't matter now. Vivy, the fifth of the heavenly kings of the Demon King's army, ended up in a place like this. They have to kill her. MC thought in surprise. Seriously? When did this fifth of the heavenly kings become famous? Luca continued. No doubt she's going to resurrect the Demon King as the last of the heavenly kings. She's going to take over the imperial capital with the help of a giant bull, Cruz said thoughtfully. Well, in that case, we should clean up here, does she agree? With these words, she drew her sword. Alfred panicked. No, warrior Luca, the team's brains, even he can't imagine her strength, and he's not even mentioning Cruz, the heroine chosen by the gods. They'll definitely lose if a fight breaks out. Standing between them, he asked if he could talk to them. Turning to Vivy, he said this was madness. Would he talk to them? At that moment, the villagers surrounded the demon. Colette stepped forward, spreading her arms wide, shielding the girl, and exclaimed, Vivy isn't bad. Let them leave her alone. Touched, the demon addressed the villagers with tears in her eyes and thanked everyone. The hero's team looked at Colette and the villagers in surprise. Cruz said to her comrade, Oh my god, if children are saying such things, then let her leave them alone. Luca exclaimed in bewilderment. What is she saying? The protagonist noted, she's always like that. She's not that kind-hearted, but she does have a soft spot for children. She immediately dropped to one knee before the local children and invited them to play. The protagonist wondered if her carefree demeanor made the others think she was easy to defeat. But he was sure Luca wouldn't give up so easily. But to his surprise, she said, it seems there's nothing to be done. They're deeply sorry, but they only ask that they keep their skeletal bull to themselves. Vivy replied that she understood. The warrior exhaled and exclaimed, in that case, let that mage with the fake beard approach her. MC gasped, smiled sheepishly and greeted her. Following the girl, he asked if she needed something. She led him behind the house, abruptly reached for his beard and asked sarcastically, does he think she's stupid or what? He sheepishly replied, no, sorry. With that, he removed his beard. She laughed and said, a touching reunion? Alfred asked. And when did she realize it was him? The girl replied, ever since Cruz drew her sword. He'd been thinking about removing his fake beard, hadn't he? He noted with a smile that surprisingly they hadn't even figured him out. She said indignantly, of course. They didn't reveal it right away. Even his voice was different. How's his knee? The protagonist replied, everything's fine. Here, in this village, there are hot springs, the healing kind. Luca said, I see then, everything's fine. He looked at her, smiled, and remarked, she was worried about him. Thank her very much. She was indignant. Why would she? He laughed even louder, and she thought irritably. As always, her reaction gives her away. The protagonist asked how things were in the royal capital. Yet, he left without a word. Luca mockingly asked, and he's only worried about this now? How much trouble does he think he's caused her already? He apologized. The girl was silent for a moment, and then spoke. Not that she objected. He accepted the Adventurers Guild's request, but she kept it a secret from the others. The MC asked in surprise, how did she do that? Luca said she'd become the royal capital's general manager. So it must be pretty easy for her. He noted with confusion, she'd been promoted. He thought, now it makes sense. The reason no one had found him yet was because Luca had been helping him behind the scenes all this time. He should thank her better. Alfred asked out loud, so the fact that he was here, in this village, didn't surprise her? Luca replied, she knew everything, but she hadn't come here to see him at all. He remarked, it was because of the dragon, right? The girl confirmed that was true. The protagonist added, also to finish off the survivors of the Demon King's army. She agreed with that as well. Suddenly, the meaning of what he'd said dawned on her, and she exclaimed in surprise, that was confidential information. How did he know about that? He sheepishly replied that he'd learned about it from Cruz. Luca said irritably, what an idiot, she'll deal with that later. Then she said thoughtfully, an undead dragon, not to mention a great undead dragon. She'd probably have to ask him for help with that. There were plenty of less powerful ones too. That would be problematic. The protagonist opened the warehouse door and replied, as for that, they've already taken care of it. He then showed her the remains of the dragon. Luca was stunned, then exclaimed in amazement, so she came here for no reason? He replied, so that's true. She grabbed one of the items and noticed with surprise that it was a fang from a lesser dragon. There are about 20 of them here. MC answered, absolutely correct. The girl asked in confusion, wasn't that hard for him? He replied, Femi and Vivy had helped him too. Luca chuckled and clarified, one of the 5 heavenly kings of the Demon Lord's army, huh? At that moment, Cruz peeked in the window and asked Luca if she'd be staying for long. Alfred smiled at the heroine and said they hadn't seen each other in a while. The girl entered the warehouse and stared dumbfounded at the contents. Luca remarked that their work here must have been completed. Cruz glanced at the protagonist in amazement, saw the beard in his hands, and exclaimed in confusion, was that really him this whole time? MC chuckled, thinking how the heroine's gullibility had always bothered him. Cruz asked in surprise, what's he doing here? He's always moving from place to place. Once the heroine calmed down, they were able to talk normally. The allies left the warehouse and went outside, and Cruz clarified, so, he came to the village to treat his knee? The protagonist indignantly asked Luca why she lied to her. The girl replied that it was because if she had told her the truth, she would have definitely followed her. Cruz, clinging to the protagonist, remarked that of course she would go to the ends of the earth for MC. Suddenly, she exclaimed, maybe she should move to this village too? She would like to train with Alfred and become even stronger. He objected, but certainly not in the middle of his recovery. Luca irritably asked the heroine, have she already told her? If the hero abandons his work, a lot of people will be in trouble. The protagonist said conciliatorily, if the hero leaves the royal capital, people will worry and rumors will spread, right? But they can freely come here and stay here whenever they want. Cruz replied, well, if that's what he says, she should listen to him. He smiled and suggested that the two of them could stay here for the night. The allies were delighted at his invitation. The protagonist exclaimed, looking at the ruins. He'd completely forgotten his house had burned down. Cruz looked at the remains of the house in surprise and happily suggested they set up camp together. Luca objected, saying she'd rather not. MC said, now he'll agree with Luca. After a while, he thought, it looks like the village of Merg will become a little more lively. Everyone looked at the hero's team in surprise. Luca asked Cruz why she liked camping so much. He exclaimed, well, it's so much fun. Millet, Vivy, Colette, and Femi wondered what they were talking about. Alfred brought his friends to the elder. Luca bowed to the old man and said, I'm terribly sorry for the inconvenience. The elder and the villagers looked at them in surprise. The protagonist told them that these were his friends, or rather, former allies. They were very trustworthy and regretted what they had done. Could they please kindly forgive them? Luca spoke with a guilty tone. She thought the demon's daughter had wanted to create a monster, perhaps a bit hastily. As soon as she saw the enormous magic circle, she decided to stop it at all costs. The villagers said peacefully, such things happen. The elder asked Luca to raise her head and said that since they were friends, they were glad to welcome them to their village. Luca, relieved, thanked everyone present. Cruz was simply overjoyed at the positive outcome. She shouted, Luca, how wonderful, isn't it? The warrior glared at her with a murderous aura around her, and then, grabbing her by the shoulders, indignantly exclaimed, why are you staring at her so carelessly? Let her go and apologize for drawing her sword. The protagonist thought with a smile. He hadn't revealed their true identities. If it were revealed that they were the hero and the warrior who had vanquished the Demon King, they would be important figures. The villagers would be embarrassed, and these two wouldn't like it. The elder asked him, by the way, what he was planning to do today. He answered thoughtfully, since his house had burned down, he was planning to spend the night in the barn with everyone else. The old man, astonished, objected. No, he wouldn't let them and their precious guests huddle in the barn. MC asked him not to worry about them. At that moment, Millet raised her hand, apologized, and said, please, let them stay with them until his house was completely rebuilt. The elder remarked with a smile. A good idea. After all, Millet had quite a spacious house. Alfred clarified. Was she sure of her decision? The girl exclaimed, more than. He said, well, then, he'll take her up on her offer. Coletta was pleased. Cruz, surprised, asked her why she was in such a good mood. The girl happily answered, because, walking to Millet's house, Luca said she was really looking forward to spending the night at Colette's. Cruz said she was too. The girls turned to Millet, asking her to take care of them, and also apologizing for the intrusion. The elf smiled and said, please, let them make themselves at home. The protagonist said they were just freeloaders, so she could ask them to do something. Millet sheepishly replied, don't be shy, and entered the house. Colette hugged Femi and suggested he have fun. Sitting down at the table, he asked his former team what was up with their healer. Lucas said sadly, Urena has contracted a disease called mumps. He said, poor thing. Have them give her his best wishes. The girls thanked him and assured him they would pass on everything. Millet asked if they were MC's friends, right? Cruz laughed and replied, yes, they are. He had fooled them with his disguise. Everyone laughed at this. Alfred noticed Vivy peeking out from behind the door and asked why she didn't join them. The girl, looking at Luca, replied that the warrior had prevented her from reviving Morphe. Luca sheepishly apologized. The demon's daughter added guiltily, looking at the protagonist, but because of her, his house burned down. Let him forgive her. The protagonist smiled and said, it's okay. Even if she hadn't succeeded, he was the one who ordered the fire. They would return to Morphe tomorrow, but for now, let her join them. The girl sheepishly walked inside. Luca told her guiltily she couldn't really tell zombies and skeletons apart by their magic circles. She admitted it was her fault, but even if all the heavenly kings and the demon lord's army were reanimating the dead, she still would have stopped them. Vivy replied, she's right. Luca pouted and stared thoughtfully into space. Cruz pressed her shoulder and tried to reassure her friend. MC thought with a smile, Luca is a warrior. The fact that she can read magic circles is already impressive. He cleared his throat and said sheepishly, wanting to clarify, was Vivy really one of the heavenly kings? Luca was surprised, wondering if he was only just asking that now. Vivy was indignant, wondering how many times did she have to repeat that? Luca, too, was perplexed. Had he already forgotten how they fought her last time? Utterly embarrassed, Alfred wondered if he'd really thought she was some little girl. Cruz called out to him with a laugh, saying she'd forgotten about it too. So he shouldn't worry. He thought he had conflicting feelings about it. According to Luca, as soon as they set foot on the Demon King's land, they captured a small fortress, and it seemed Vivy was there. He asked the girl what she was doing there. Vivy replied that she was tending the soil and the livestock. The protagonist was surprised by this. The land in the Demon King's territory was becoming barren. The army had rushed the invasion because its primary objective was to plunder people for supplies. If Vivy hadn't rectified the situation, the battle would have been much more difficult. Meanwhile, Millet was stirring something in a bowl and a concentrated smile. Vivy said he was incredibly lucky. It was just a coincidence that he defeated her first. It was simply unbelievable luck. Colette exclaimed in admiration, kings are so cool. Femi barked, supporting his little friend. The protagonist looked at the demon's daughter and thought, She's so confident. And yet, she's an excellent mage, even if she does stupid things. Then he smelled food and exclaimed, "How delicious it smells." Millet announced the food was ready. She placed the prepared dishes on the table. Vivy happily thanked her. Cruz remarked how wonderful it was that they could try her food. When the allies started eating, they began praising the fantastic taste. Millet asked Cruz why she was alone in the forest. The girl replied that she had found a strange trail and followed it, and accidentally separated from Luca. The warrior noticed that she had gotten lost, simply following what she assumed to be a hydra's trail. MC asked in surprise, "Hydras?" Vivy said, puzzled. A hydra is quite a dangerous monster. This multi-headed creature with deadly poison can rival a dragon in strength. Luca said guiltily. She thought Cruz was mistaken. She also checked the road but found no trace of a hydra. But the heroine countered. No, she was sure it was a hydra. Alfred thought, continuing to eat. Cruz might be a bit nuts, as they say, but her intuition never let her down. Out loud, he said, "Fine. If she finds this monster, he will help her." Cruz thanked him with a smile and apologized for disturbing him. After a while, the allies helped Millet clear the table, after which the elf asked if they should go to the hot springs. Cruz exclaimed in surprise, "They have that?" She was all for it. Luca remarked that she would go too. Millet replied, "Well then, she'll take them there right now." The protagonist said he'd be back soon, so they shouldn't worry and take their time. She and Femi would stay. Cruz grabbed his hand, pressed herself against him, and exclaimed, "They haven't bathed together in so long." He jerked his hand away, startled, and replied, "No need, he'll stay home." She clarified in surprise, "He's not going to the hot springs, but he smells bad afterwards." Everyone was going. Millet turned to him in confusion and asked, "Have they ever bathed together?" They both stared at her in bewilderment. He drawled, "Well, if you can call that bathing. He's a traveler. Sometimes he needed to overcome his shyness and quickly wash up." Millet noted sadly, "No, this was something else." The protagonist said, "They were traveling, so it's normal." Millet said regretfully, "She can't believe it." Vivy glared at him and whispered to the elf, "Travelers are so shameless." At that moment, Luca quickly pushed Cruz away from MC, stood between them and said, "Yes, and now they are no longer traveling, and mixed swimming is unacceptable." The heroine switched to Colette, started playing patty cake with her and exclaimed, "It will be so much more fun together." Luca replied, "Yes, let her understand already. It will be embarrassing." Finally, the girls went to the springs. Alfred wished them a pleasant time. Cruz sighed, looked at him, and remarked, "What a pity." Sometime later, the protagonist, having enjoyed the hot springs, said to his familiar as he dried himself off with a towel, "So the hot springs were wonderful today." Femi, shaking off excess water, barked happily in response. Returning home, the protagonist exclaimed in surprise, "Oh, it's a full moon today." Arriving at Millet's house, he announced that he was back. The elf came out to greet him, saying dinner was almost ready. He thanked her and went into the room. The girls were already there, joyfully inviting him in. They asked him to play cards with them. MC looked at them with a smile and agreed. During the game, Millet brought them dessert and tea. They had a great time. After a while, he lifted the sleeping Colette into the bedroom. Millet, having made the beds, said she had already made them. There were only 2 rooms in the house. Colette hugged Femi and capriciously declared that she would sleep with him. The wolf barked in agreement. Millet laughed and said that she and Colette would sleep on the floor, and they could make themselves comfortable on the bed. The protagonist objected. He wouldn't allow it. He was grateful that she let them stay, but they couldn't use her bed. She replied, "No, nothing like that." He insisted. He didn't think that was right. Cruz raised her hand in confusion and said, "She could sleep on the floor." She turned to the protagonist and clarified, "Right?" He wondered, surprised. Why was she asking him? She asked in bewilderment. "Not allowed?" Alfred said, confused. "Well, not exactly impossible." The heroine happily grabbed his arm, pulled him along, and exclaimed, "Then they will sleep here." She pulled him to the floor, sat down, and noted that it had been a long time since she had slept next to him. He replied, "Yes." During the journey, they covered each other's backs and slept in shifts. Cruz added, "The floor is comfortable." Luca settled down next to them and said, "Then she's with them." Vivy also jumped up and exclaimed, "He looks cheerful." Femi approached the demon's daughter and barked questioningly. She said he could sleep alone. Millet also looked at them in surprise and said, "The bed she spent so much time preparing won't be occupied by anyone." Then, as mistress of the house, she would decide everything for them. In the end, the bed was given to Femi, Colette, and the protagonist. The other one was occupied by everyone else. The protagonist worriedly asked if they would be cramped. Millet replied, "It's fine, they've agreed on everything." Vivy said, "Despite these words, she'll still hit her at night." The elf replied sheepishly, "She doesn't do that." Colette sighed, snuggled close to the wolf, and said she always slept well next to him. She wished MC good night, and he returned the favor. Silence fell in the room. He lay there, pondering the Hydra. But everything would be all right. He would protect the village. A terrible roar rang out in the middle of the night. Early in the morning, Alfred, opening the gates, thought, "A guard's job begins with opening the gates." He stretched, loosening his body. Femi, who had done the same, suddenly barked anxiously. The protagonist became wary. What was going on? At that moment, wolf puppies joyfully ran up to the gates, wagging their tails joyfully. He knelt down, the puppies surrounded him, someone licked him, and one of the puppies climbed into his arms. The protagonist wished them good morning and asked where their parents were. He thought they had probably gone to get breakfast. After they built him a hut, several wolves settled nearby. He was sure it was because they'd taken a liking to their scraps. Just then, Vivy called out to him, asking him to help her with a resurrection spell for Morphe. He replied, okay, he'll help her with that. Suddenly, Luca and Cruz appeared, exclaiming, they're in on it too. Vivy noticed with irritation that they'd been secretly watching her this whole time. She cautiously asked Luca, will she bother her again? The girl sheepishly replied, no, she'd already apologized for that. But if she were going to help, wouldn't it be logical to ask for something in return? Although, they'd only be watching? The demon's daughter looked at her in surprise. Cruz muttered in amazement, are they really going to summon a bull skeleton? She can't wait to see it. The protagonist hugged everyone and said, first, they'll all have breakfast. Millet's waiting for them. Everything will be done after dinner. He asked Vivy if it would be okay if they all went to see him. She replied that when he asks, she can't refuse. Cruz happily exclaimed, cool. After a while, MC got ready and followed Vivy. She said she only had 80% of the magic circle drawn. Last time, those two interfered, and she had to destroy it. She saw his workshop and asked in surprise, he works there. Alfred replied, yes, but what's wrong? The demon's daughter was indignant. It's dangerous to work in the middle of the village. The villagers might get scared. He thought about it and said, that's right. After a while, Vivy announced that she had finally prepared the circle for the protagonist to watch. He wanted everyone to be happy about Morphe's resurrection. She didn't know what he, the protagonist, was thinking. At that moment, Cruz grabbed her hands and said, it's okay, she understands, and that she shouldn't lose heart. Lucas scolds her every day too. The MC looked at Vivy warmly, stroked her head and said, this time he'll be watching her from the very beginning. They should move to a bigger place. She wants to surprise everyone, right? She replied with tears in her eyes. Yes, that's true. Then she irritably pushed his hand away and exclaimed, stop stroking her already. He should watch where he puts his hand. Everyone laughed and Cruz remarked, this will be fun. The demon's daughter irritably said, let them follow her already. She asked again, will they bother her again? Luca answered sheepishly, no. Vivy walked forward, and Alfred stopped and said he would watch from here. The girl waved happily and began drawing a circle. He looked at her drawing and thoughtfully said, is this really so incredible? Luca asked in confusion, is something wrong? He replied, no. It's simply amazing. Luca looked at him, confused. Vivy concentrated on drawing in the sand. At that moment, Femi caught a ball, and Colette shouted, have him bring it to her. The wolf snatched the ball in his teeth and joyfully rushed toward her. The girl, laughing happily, hugged him, exclaiming, excellent. He's such a good boy. After a while, Vivy turned to the protagonist and asked if he could check. The protagonist stepped inside the drawn magic circle and checked the drawing. Vivy exclaimed, isn't this amazing? Of course, she has natural talent. MC said he liked her idea. He definitely wouldn't have thought of something like that. He thought she'd taken her time drawing this complex magic circle. He thought she was superior to him in this regard. His gravity magic would hold the bones together. Now, all the preparations were complete. Vivy shouted for them to stay away until she was finished. The allies assured her, of course. She placed her hands on the magic circle and began chanting. With each new spell, the skeleton began to come together. The protagonist, stunned by what he saw, thought, Morphe doesn't have vocal cords. He makes sounds with his spiritual energy. Vivy was simply incredible. The demon's daughter screamed with joy. It worked. Then she folded her hands in prayer and, with tears in her eyes, said the skeleton's name, stepping toward it. MC called out to her in fear, shouting at her not to go there. But the girl stood before the skeleton and said, she doesn't know how to make amends. Let him forgive her for all the pain she caused him. She's so sorry. The bull skeleton looked at her intently. Vivy turned to it and added, if he can't forgive her, he can take revenge on her right now. Luca became wary and grabbed the hilt of her sword, ready to draw it at any moment. Alfred thought resolutely, even if she was willing to do this, he couldn't let her die before his eyes. But at that moment, something simply incredible happened. Vivy pressed her face against the bull skeleton, and it moaned softly, greeting her. She asked in surprise, he forgives her? The monster stretched out its snout and moaned softly again, confirming this. The demon's daughter wiped away her tears, unable to believe her happiness. The protagonist thought, it seems he's forgiven Vivy. However, he was the one who killed him in the first place. He remembered that battle, after which he approached the bull skeleton. The creature, recognizing him, became wary and stared at him. Then suddenly, the bull roared so loudly that everyone was stunned, including the protagonist. The bull skeleton grabbed him by the shoulder and pulled him toward itself. Cruz and Luca called out anxiously to their comrade and rushed toward him. The bull skeleton released MC, and Cruz asked if he was okay. Alfred replied that yes, it had only nipped him slightly. Grabbing the skeleton by the snout, he thanked it with a smile for returning to them. Vivy was incredibly happy. The villagers began to mutter among themselves in confusion. So the rumors weren't lying? Is that really a giant bull skeleton? The protagonist smiled at the people and apologized for the show. He added that the skeleton was harmless, so they shouldn't worry. The two women gasped. The necromancy was amazing. They'd never seen a skeleton move before. Then Vivy spread her arms and told the created beast that this was its home. She wanted it to stay here. Stroking it, the girl added, don't worry, she'll always be by its side. As long as it doesn't stray too far, everything will be fine. The skeleton pressed its muzzle against her. At that moment, wolf puppies ran up and started playing with the bull skeleton's huge hooves. The protagonist wondered why the puppies were still there. That's strange. Cruz turned to him and asked in surprise what skeletons eat. He replied that they don't have a digestive system. They only require a little spiritual energy. Vivy remarked, that's true. Since their bodies were created with magic, they live on it. The heroine answered, I see. And then she asked Vivy, isn't this too much for her? The demon's daughter replied, Morphe is big. It's a very complex thing. She's not the only one supplying spiritual energy to his body. The protagonist muttered, surprised, I see. Suddenly Femi howled, followed by the puppies. Everyone stared at the animals in confusion. MC asked his familiar, what's going on? The magical beast reported that the wolves had discovered the Hydra. Alfred said with a smile, finally, it's appeared. Cruz, drawing her blade, thought resolutely, she had no other choice. She would have to fight. She wouldn't lose the scent again. This time, she would see it through. The protagonist looked at her determined and agitated expression and asked if she could calm down a little. The girl shuddered in surprise and replied, yes. He turned to his familiar, and Femi replied, he knows. Protecting the forest is his job, after all. The protagonist turned to Vivy and told her to stay here in case the village was attacked. She assured him that she and Morphe would keep an eye on everything. He then looked at Luca and Cruz and asked if they were ready. The girl smiled in response. He jumped on Femi and gave the command to advance. All four rushed to battle the monster. Suddenly, in the forest, Femi stopped and howled loudly. Listening closely, he said, it's here. The allies advanced to the monster's location. As they approached, they saw a truly enormous Hydra. MC said in confusion, it's bigger than he thought. Everyone beware. The Hydra is very poisonous. At that moment, Cruz rushed toward the enemy with a loud cry. Alfred anxiously tried to stop her, but she continued running forward. He shouted, don't let her attack so headlong. Lucas stared at her ally in bewilderment and remarked, seriously? The protagonist thought, even though Cruz is a brave warrior, she can be too reckless at times. But even then, it's their duty to support her. He, riding Femi, activated his magic power. At that moment, Cruz desperately began to fight the monster. After chopping off several heads, she shifted her position, and at that moment, one of the Hydra's heads roared, breathing directly into the girl's face. Cruz winced, covered her face with her hand, and exclaimed, what a terrible smell. Her legs weakened, and she sank to the ground. Luca grabbed her by the collar of her shirt and yanked her back. The heroine asked in surprise, what is she doing? At that moment, one of the monster's heads, taking advantage of the situation, was about to strike Cruz, but Luca deftly chopped off the Hydra's head and told her ally they had warned her about the poison. Was she tired of living? As she spoke, she chopped off another enemy head that had been attacking them. Cruz, confused, said, no, I'm not tired. Suddenly, the girls exclaimed in surprise. What's going on? Are the Hydra's heads growing back? Indeed, the monster had all of its heads back, moving erratically, just like the Hydra itself. Luca began chopping off more heads and noticed that the enemy was acting abnormally. The protagonist, watching the fight, thought, definitely. Usually, Hydras need 3 days to regenerate. This one was too fast. It was definitely abnormal. He shouted at the girls to keep chopping off heads. He had an idea. He will try to burn it with his fire magic. Let them hold out until then. The girls replied that they understood and continued their battle. After a while, Luca shouted for him to act faster. She couldn't hold out much longer. Cruz exclaimed joyfully, the fun begins. She wasn't going to listen to someone covered in poison. Luca looked at her in confusion. MC told his familiar they needed to get around the enemy. Femi immediately rushed behind the Hydra. Alfred summoned his fire magic and attacked the enemy from behind. The monster was immediately engulfed in powerful flames, writhing and roaring terribly as it began to take damage. The girls stared at their opponent in amazement. Luca exclaimed in surprise, it worked! Looks like she's finished. Cruz shouted admiringly at the protagonist, this is amazing. Now they'll definitely win. Luca told her not to relax and to cover her from behind. Cruz immediately responded to her request and said, good. The protagonist answered the girls, of course it worked. Now they need to finish it off. He activated his magic again, and Femi asked, is this what his team is capable of? They really are strong. The allies, without a word, chopped off all the Hydra's heads in a matter of seconds and finished it off. Then, Luca exclaimed, well done. They did it. At that moment, Cruz grimaced as if she were about to cry and exclaimed, is she the only one who smells fried fish? Oh no, I think that smells like fried Hydra. Luca cried out in alarm, you can't eat that. The heroine was surprised, right? It's not edible. Suddenly, Femi barked and MC looked warily at his friend. Wolves suddenly appeared from the forest. Alfred approached them, petted them, and said, they did a great job too. Thanks to them for taking care of the Hydra. It made their job easier. The wolves were pleased with the praise and affection. Femi barked discontentedly. The protagonist said, thank you very much to him too. The wolves looked at the protagonist with pleading eyes, wagging their tails. He guessed they wanted to eat the Hydra. The animals barked happily, letting him know that was the case. Cruz stood next to the monster, spread her arms wide, and protested. No, she hadn't tried it yet. Luca irritably replied, let the wolves eat. Fem asked his master, so what? He replied, he doesn't mind. Why not? It's not harmful. The warrior grinned in confusion and asked if he'd ever tried Hydra. The protagonist remarked once when he was younger, for scientific purposes, and he just had a craving. Cruz told her friend, it's fine. It looks so delicious and crispy. MC said he's warning her. Hydra meat isn't tasty. Femi barked, and Luca said, let them stop for now. They'll share it. The girls suggested Alfred cook the enemy's meat. He replied, just don't overdo it. The warrior replied, then she'll come back first. After a while, everyone began eating, sinking their teeth into the juicy meat. The protagonist thought, watching Cruz and the others eat like that, the meat looked delicious. Luca spat in disgust. Sometime later, after dinner, the allies collected some trophies and headed home. Luca was delighted. She'd managed to get some valuable ingredients. What luck. Maybe they should go to the hot springs when they get back. The protagonist replied, good idea. Suddenly, Cruz began breathing heavily and groaned. Luca anxiously asked, what's wrong? The heroine, with tears in her eyes, replied, she has a stomach ache. MC remarked in surprise, she's sick. Strong warriors like her rarely get sick. Luca exclaimed, it's all because of the Hydra. Can she walk? Cruz replied, she can, but not so fast. Alfred, without a word, jumped off his familiar's back, grabbed the girl over his shoulder, and only then told her not to exhaust herself. She was going to Femi. The heroine protested. She's fine. A stomach ache wouldn't break her. He, throwing her over the wolf's back, remarked that he thought she was about to faint. He sat down next to the girl and told the familiar, he'll go with her, okay? He is the king of the wolves after all. The familiar barked affirmatively. The protagonist said, they need to hurry. Let Cruz hold on tight. On the way, the heroine continued to moan periodically and clutch her stomach with one hand. Then she thanked the protagonist for his concern. He thought Hydra meat was tasteless, but not poisonous. He learned from experience. Something was fishy here. When the allies arrived in the village, they approached Millet's house, and MC shouted to the elf to hurry up and help. Cruz had a stomach ache. The girl exclaimed, this is a serious problem. She'll make the bed right away. When the heroine was put to bed, she apologized to Millet for disturbing her. Colette, with tears in her eyes, asked Cruz if she was okay. The heroine, through her pain, answered, of course. Thanks to them for their concern. Millet asked what unusual food she'd eaten. The girl hesitated, but Luca replied that she'd eaten Hydra meat. Cruz was indignant at her interruption, but the warrior sternly told her friend not to try to hide her stupidity. The heroine protested, but Femi had eaten too. Alfred said he thought Femi was okay because he was a wolf. The familiar looked at the girl carefully. Millet noted that, according to the protagonist, Hydra meat isn't poisonous, as it releases all its toxins during battle. Perhaps some traces of them were in the meat she'd eaten. She'd prepare a medicine for her stomach ache and give her an antidote, just in case. The elf looked at Luca and added that if she wanted, she'd make it for her too, but she should just wait. The warrior happily agreed. After a while, Millet entered the room with a tray and said, it's ready. Here's the medicine. The protagonist remarked admiringly, yes, she's a real master. The elf was embarrassed and thanked him. Cruz, taking the potion, grimaced and said, it's green and smells terrible. Millet replied, it's medicine. The heroine sighed heavily and drank the potion, after which she grimaced even more and said, it's too bitter. Millet poured more medicine. Luca pinched Cruz's nose and poured it directly into her mouth, noting in surprise, seriously, how much more will she have to drink? After some time, when all the medicine had been consumed, MC praised the heroine. She had held up well. Luca sarcastically remarked that this would discourage her from eating Hydra meat. Cruz replied, that's for sure. Suddenly she exclaimed, it looks like the medicine has started working. The warrior objected in surprise. That's impossible. Although it doesn't matter, let her lie down and rest. After making her friend more comfortable, she sat down next to the bed and said she'd stay with her for a bit. The heroine sighed and said, okay. A short time later, she jumped up in bed and said, I think she feels better. Luca laid her down again and said, definitely not so fast. Let her lie down already. After a while, Cruz rose again and said, she's already better. She was sure of it. 10 minutes later, Alfred, Millet, and Luca watched in amazement as Cruz had a blast with Colette and Femi. He thought it was a mistake to think the heroine was normal. Millet said, seeing them frolicking is such a relief. It's all thanks to him. The elf stretched, smiled, and added, the village air is so refreshing today. The protagonist smiled and looked at her, at the sky, at the mountains surrounding the village, at the forest, and answered, that's right. Cruz dropped Femi on her back, and sitting on his stomach, began tickling him, saying, he's so fluffy. Local children approached them and asked if they could play too. Just then, a rabbit hopped onto the site of the battle with the Hydra. The beast approached the severed head and began to drink its contents. Suddenly, it seemed to start shaking, its eyes bloodshot and changed color. Vivy, cleaning the rump of the bull's skeleton with a brush, remarked, they returned home in a hurry. Is everything okay? The protagonist replied, yes, Cruz was in critical condition. They took her to Millet. The heroine exclaimed, but she's fine now. MC added, they got rid of the Hydra. Now everyone's safe. The demon's daughter declared, that's good. It was also thanks to her. Only thanks to the village guards, Vivy and Morphe, were they able to fight peacefully. He laughed, patted her head, and said, she's the best guard. Thank them for their hard work. Everyone laughed, and even the skeleton bulls seemed to smile. Vivy was very pleased with the praise. Then she exclaimed, Morphe wants to be petted too. She loves him so much. With these words, the demon's daughter rushed toward the skeleton bull. The ally all followed her. Colette petted Morphe and happily noted how smooth he was. Alfred laughed, and noticed, rightly so. Cruz, petting the pet, said, he is such a good boy. Suddenly, a light began to appear where her hand had been. The protagonist asked her what kind of light was that. The heroine answered in surprise, she's just petting him. Vivy wanted to rush to her and shouted, what is she doing? This must be something bad. Luca stopped her and told her not to worry. The heroine wasn't doing anything wrong. Morphe emitted a drawn-out sound, Vivy cringed in fear, while Luca thoughtfully wondered what was going on. Perhaps this was the consecration of the brave? At that moment, a powerful glow suddenly appeared where Morphe had been standing, so powerful that everyone closed their eyes. When the light faded, the allies were surprised to see Morphe in a new form. It was no longer a skeleton, but a real, living creature. Vivy rushed to him, hugged her pet, and exclaimed, "What does this mean? Is this really Morphe?" The beast mooed. Cruz stroked him and said, "He's become a beautiful bull." The astonished protagonist said, "Consecration is a ritual in which a priest imbues armor with sacred power, isn't it?" Luca, confused, replied, "It is." He continued, "Is this really such a powerful technique?" The warrior remarked. She'd read about it in the texts. "This isn't the great power of priests, it's something like a traditional ritual." MC said, "At most, she can raise lesser ghosts." Luca replied, "But Cruz is special. She has the power of a hero, which makes the technique several times stronger, turning it into the power of a god." The heroine, hearing this, looked at them in confusion and then laughed sheepishly. He asked, "What did she do?" Suddenly Luca exclaimed, "This is some kind of sanctification of the undead. So this is a holy bull, right? It's become a holy beast. Saint Morphe, so to speak." Cruz remarked in surprise. She was sure she could feel a holy aura. Vivy screamed. She understood. Either way, it's amazing. She rushed to the bull, hugged it, and said she loved it so much. At that moment, the wolf cub howled. MC said, "For some reason, the wolf cub seems so happy." Suddenly, he heard Femi's voice and asked Colette, "Has she seen his familiar?" The girl replied in surprise, "Not since they got here." He figured Femi was good at hiding, but he wondered if something had happened. Suddenly, a familiar emerged from the forest, holding the motionless wolf cub in its mouth, and told its owner he needed his help. Alfred rushed to him, asking, "Is everything all right? What happened?" The magical beast replied, "The puppy was deep in the forest, showing the same symptoms as Cruz." The protagonist noted in surprise that the poison had activated with a time delay. He jumped onto his pet's back and told his allies they would talk about it later. He would bring the wolves here, let Millet examine them. After that, he turned to Colette and asked her to call Millet. Vivy sat down next to the puppy and said she would cast a restoration magic circle. Colette ran after the elf as fast as she could. The protagonist, Cruz, and Luca rushed into the forest. Femi told his master that he hadn't actually eaten the Hydra's meat. He asked why. The familiar replied that his minions had come to the Hydra's body. They were very hungry, so he didn't eat. When the allies arrived at the scene, they saw the wolves lying down in great pain. MC sat down next to them, began petting them, and said regretfully that having heard that Cruz was in danger, he had completely forgotten about them. Let them forgive him. Luca, picking up one wolf, said he could apologize later, but for now they needed to get them to the village. He jumped to his feet and said, "They'll take care of it." Cruz, carrying 2 wolves at a time, said she was doing a good job. Luca replied, "She's counting on it." Alfred told his familiar to just carry him and run. "It'll only take a few minutes. He'll use his magic." With that, he began activating his magical power to gather all the wolves at once. All the animals rose into the air. Femi ran, carrying the protagonist, who used his magic to pull the sick animals through the air. Cruz and Luca kept pace. The heroine exclaimed in admiration, "No one can handle gravity magic so deftly." As expected of him. The allies quickly arrived at the village. An alarmed Millet waved at them, shouting, "Come here." Vivy said she'd drawn a magic circle to ease their pain, but it wouldn't have much effect. All the sick wolves were placed in the center of the circle. Vivy said, upset, her magic wasn't enough. Millet began examining the animals. Femi described the symptoms: stomach pain, vomiting, weakness. The elf exclaimed she understood. "These match Cruz's symptoms. She'll prepare the medicine, please. Let them wait a minute." Alfred thanked her. Femi told her master he did something wrong. It also had to do with his overconfidence and pride, the king of the wolf demons. The protagonist told his friend not to dwell on it. It wasn't entirely his fault. Luca asked, "Doesn't he think it's a little strange?" Cruz looked at her, puzzled, and asked, "What exactly?" The warrior replied, "The protagonist said he ate Hydra meat in the past. Its meat itself isn't toxic, and it's not the poison." The heroine drawled, "Ah, so that's it." Luca looked at her in confusion and asked if she'd forgotten she'd been poisoned. The girl smiled sheepishly and confirmed, well, yes, she'd forgotten. The warrior concluded that it was unlikely the poison was on the meat, and that it had caused the illnesses. She turned to Femi and said that if he were a wolf with a good sense of smell, he'd notice it before he ate it. The magical beast replied, "Of course." The girl continued, "This Hydra had been abnormal from the start. It's impossible to grow a head right away. She'd never heard of such a thing." She turned to MC and asked if he could show her some Hydra bile. When he gave her what she had requested, which was in the jar, she began to examine it carefully. Then Luca said, "It's large at first glance." The heroine noted the unpleasant aura. Alfred asked, "What does she mean?" The heroine replied, "There is a strange energy around it, and she didn't like it." The protagonist thought she sometimes scared him. Luca asked if she could take it to the royal lab. She'd check everything there. The protagonist replied, "Of course." He thought, "She's a magical beast researcher, a genius." At that moment, Millet approached them and apologized for making them wait. As she handed them the medicine, she remarked that it was a bit bitter, but they should drink to their health. The allies poured the medicine into bowls and made the wolves drink it. After a while, Femi remarked that they seemed to be feeling much better. The wolves really did look much better, as if they'd come back to life. Luca noted with a smile that they drank it all themselves. unlike Cruz, right? The heroine countered. That's not true. Millet said she thought they'd feel much better tomorrow. MC agreed. Femi bowed to Millet and said he really appreciated it. The elf smiled and replied, "No need to thank me." Alfred said, "Well then, he'll watch the wolves tonight with his familiar." At that moment, Morphe moaned. The protagonist hugged him around the neck and added, "And with Morphe, of course." He waved goodbye to his friends. Luca shouted, "She will study the bile and try to find out what is going on here." He replied, "He'll leave it to them." Late that evening, all the wolves huddled together around the bull and fell asleep. Femi walked between his predecessors, adjusting their postures and licking their sides. MC said he was glad everyone had gone to bed peacefully. Maybe Morphe had a healing aura. He noticed his friend and thought, he's licking them one by one. He was worried about them. After this, Alfred put out the lantern, leaned against the wall, wrapped himself in his cloak, and falling asleep, thought, Femi is the best king. Everything will be all right. The night, indeed, passed peacefully. With the early rays of the sun, the protagonist woke to the sound of something licking his hands. They were wolf pups. He looked at the wolves, who were jumping happily, and sleepily noted, "It seemed they were all fine. That was good. Good morning, everyone." He was glad they were all healthy. The wolves rushed to him, caressing him, licking him, expressing their gratitude. Femi approached his master and thanked him for helping save them. Tears welled up in his eyes, and he added that it was only a pity he couldn't help them. The protagonist petted him and told him not to think as if everything was over. Now they'll have breakfast, and then they'll begin studying the secret of the Hydra. They'll solve this problem together. The familiar responded happily. This is his chance to prove he's useful too. They have to go. Let him repay him. When the friends arrived, MC said a Hydra was killed here yesterday. He thinks they'll find the secret of the immortal Hydra here. Vivy sounded puzzled. She sensed no trace of magic. He remarked, "That's strange. He certainly butchered the carcass, burned it, and buried it, but now there's no trace of the monster left. That's strange." Femi said, "Everything's a little strange." Alfred asked, "Did he understand something?" The magical beast said, "He'll try to track something." The familiar began sniffing, pacing around the area around yesterday's battle. Everyone looked around tensely. Suddenly, Vivy shouted at the protagonist, "Let him look here." The daughter of demons pointed in his direction and added, "A hidden magic circle. It's a huge magic circle, and this is one of its parts. It's what made the monster so huge." The protagonist exclaimed admiringly, as expected of her. She was delighted by his praise. At that moment, Cruz called out to him and, also pointing in one direction, said, "There." He approached her, looked in the indicated direction, and noticed with surprise a huge group of monsters. The heroine said, "And this is bad." The rest of the comrades came over to look and everyone froze, as if in a stupor. There were so many monsters there. MC declared, "They're 3 times bigger than the Hydra." Knocking on wood, he added that he couldn't bear to look at this anymore. Luca added, puzzled, "If even one of these monsters gets into the city, the population will be wiped out." Femi said firmly, "They can't let them leave this forest." Cruz exclaimed, "Then they should do it." Alfred thought, "The Hydra must have escaped from here. Why would someone enlarge these creatures, and where did they come from?" Cruz eagerly asked him if she could attack them. He smiled at her impatience and replied, "Yes, but she shouldn't overexert herself. He'll cover her." The heroine exclaimed. She understood him. Just as she swung her sword, preparing to kill the monsters, the aura before her suddenly changed like an explosion and disappeared before her allies. He looked at Cruz and said, "Okay," dodging. He'd been trying to lure her out, but she came on her own, saving him a lot of effort. The protagonist gloomily asked, "Who is he? What does he want from them?" Tis replied, "He's not interested in people." He pointed his finger at the demon's daughter and said, "She's one of the heavenly kings, Vivy. She abandoned her plan to rebuild the Demon King's army. She's a traitor, and he's one of the 12 heavens, Yis, the purifier of filth." Vivy stared at him in confusion and said to the protagonist, "She doesn't know this man." The MC replied that he didn't know him either. Yis was indignant. Was she mocking him? She's the weakest of all the heavenly kings. What is she even doing? She ruined the dragon invasion plan. He can't forgive her. Alfred suddenly understood everything. This guy with dark magic created these monsters. He wondered out loud, even so, what is he gonna do? Or do demons just like to chat? It seems he likes to chat. Yis looked at him carefully and then said, "What difference does it make, right? They're going to die here after all." He waved his hand and commanded his demonic army to kill them all. But as the monsters rushed forward, they were decapitated in the blink of an eye. Tis, perplexed, said, "What?" He extended his hand again to activate his dark magic. Cruz crept up behind him quietly, but he abruptly turned his head toward her and told her not to even think about doing that. She stopped in her tracks, surprised. Suddenly, one of the monsters began to emit such a bright light from its eyes that the heroine closed her eyes, hiding her face, and noticed it was too bright. Tis laughed and exclaimed, "Wonderful. No one can defend themselves from the basilisk's petrified eyes." Cruz raised her head and said, "Yes, it was bright." The boy looked at her in confusion, clearly not expecting such a thing. The heroine smiled and said, "She's fine. She's not susceptible to such things." He clutched his head in confusion and muttered, "Why didn't that work?" Luca raised her sword and declared, "It's time to end this." She closed her eyes as the basilisk attempted to blind her again in his right, and, with a sharp lunge, attacked the monster. In a few lightning-fast movements, she finished it off, still squinting in the gradually fading light. The protagonist activated his magical power and commanded his familiar to attack the enemy. The magical beast swiftly rushed forward, tearing the monster apart with its fangs and claws. The protagonist activated fire magic, reducing all the remaining monsters to ash. Tis looked at him in confusion, at the burned monsters near Cruz, and asked, "Who the hell are they?" The protagonist replied, "It doesn't matter, they're just S-rank adventurers passing by." Suddenly, the boy covered his face with his hands, laughed, and said, "I understand." He thought he could do it quickly. But these damn people. At that moment, Cruz drew MC's attention to the fact that the monster's wounds were beginning to disappear. Before their eyes, the monsters quickly recovered and returned to their normal forms. Tis laughed evilly and exclaimed, "They're out of luck. These monsters specialize in regeneration. They're invulnerable zombie soldiers who will never fall. Let them play as much as they want, but they'll still die." Alfred understood. Cruz and the wolves had eaten the Hydra's flesh, and their stomachs ached. The reason was that he was turning into a zombie. Although these monsters were dead, they were still connected to this place and controlled by one of the 12 heavens. Luca told him they could fight them endlessly, but her magical power, and even her strength, would eventually run out. The familiar angrily declared, "He'll kill him." The protagonist stopped his friend and said, "They'll only kill the zombies. They need this guy alive. He would stand trial in the capital." Femi asked what they were going to do. The protagonist mounted him and told him to run to the center of all the monsters. He called out to Tis and said, "Thanks for the tip." The guy looked at him in confusion, not understanding what he was talking about. MC continued, "He's actually a little angry with him, but he thinks they can defeat him." Cruz shouted, "What should she do?" Alfred replied, "He's going to use his magic to make a splash. Have them help him along with Luca." The warrior replied, "Of course, but it's hard." He said, "Have them chop off the monsters' heads." Cruz exclaimed in delight, "Easy as pie." "Chop, chop," the protagonist remarked. "Yeah, let them keep chopping off heads." Tis watched their every move in confusion. When his comrades joined the fight, he shouted, "Tell them to stop. It's pointless." The protagonist activated the magic circle and summoned the Ice Queen, who reigned in the heavens, and the commander of the Void, so they could open the Void Gate to the secret of the absolute world. He also summoned the Sky and Darkness, declaring that he would freeze the impure of this world with a heavenly hammer. His name is Alfred Rent. Something unimaginable began to unfold around him. Blocks of ice began to emerge from the ground, freezing the monsters, covering them in a thick layer of ice. Tis tried to jump to safety, but his legs were also frozen. He cursed in amazement and said, "I can't even move my legs." MC said, "Gotcha." Tis fell to the ice, looking at his legs bound in solid ice, and angrily shouted, "Is he joking? He's really an S-rank adventurer? Such magical power, he's really not a monster?" The boy cursed angrily and said, "He should have known. Vivy was the weakest of all the heavenly kings. She couldn't defeat the dragons. He was the one who defeated them." The protagonist grinned and replied, "He wasn't alone." Activating strong magical bonds, he securely bound his opponent. Tis angrily declared, "There's only one thing left to do. The traitors must be destroyed." He activated his summoning on the monster and commanded the basilisk to attack the demon's daughter. The protagonist called out to Vivy in warning. She drew a magic circle and said with a grin, she'd been waiting for him. When the enemy approached her, she activated her magic circle, from which strong, long whips emerged. These whips entangled the basilisk in an instant. The monster struggled, but it was futile. Vivy noted, the monster would never break these bonds. She drew her sword and sliced her opponent into several pieces. Tis hissed angrily and exhaled loudly. MC asked, "What else does he want to say?" The enemy hung his head, exhausted. Alfred praised the demon's daughter. She had created an excellent circle. She held up her index finger and said solemnly, "The battle is his and the others." But just to be on the safe side, she created a magic circle that would completely stop the monster's movements. He patted her head with a smile and replied, "He understood. A good decision." After that, MC looked at his allies and said, "They're going back." Femi, his eyes sparkling with joy, held the bound Tis in his teeth. The protagonist told Cruz that her stomach hurt because she'd eaten a zombie. She clarified in surprise, "That couldn't be true. What's so bad about it?" Luca replied, "They have to be completely deprived of their freedom to become zombies, right? That's why she casts all sorts of harmful magic on her body." This time, the zombies were especially huge, and had survived many transformations under various influences. "Therefore, you can't eat this meat." Cruz shuddered and said in confusion, "It's scary." The warrior noted that she would tell her something else. There were parasites that could turn her into a zombie, but there was magic that would rid her of them, and her stomach wouldn't hurt anymore. The heroine asked fearfully, "Parasites, zombies?" The protagonist smiled and thought, Millet's cure might help. He should let her know. He told her out loud, "Millet has a potion." She caught herself, rushed forward and shouted, "She'll run to her." He called out to her, but she no longer heard him, rapidly moving away from them. At that moment, Millet was minding her own business, two wolves playing around her. Cruz, screaming her name, flew into the courtyard, grabbed her clothes and began to scream fearfully. "Pain, insects." The elf looked at her in bewilderment and asked her to calm down. She added, "It's okay. She has a cure." The heroine, her eyes wild with fear, declared, "She'll be a zombie. She'll die." Millet looked at her in confusion and went to get the medicine. At that moment, the rest of the allies entered the courtyard. The elf congratulated them on their return. MC, looking at Cruz standing next to Millet, laughed. noting that someone wouldn't be eating weird things anymore. The heroine replied, yes, that's right. The elf thanked him for his work and asked if they were finished. He pointed to Tis, still in Femi's mouth, and replied, as she could see, they were finished. Cruz, meanwhile, was already hugging the wolves. Luca noted that the animals seemed to be doing well too. It was thanks to Millet's medicine and the power of Saint Morphe. Vivy looked at her in confusion, not understanding what she was talking about. The warrior explained with a smile that sometimes the spirit of the beast can cleanse an effect. Morphe made a grateful sound at the praise. Vivy joyfully rushed to him, hugged him, and was touched. He was so good. Alfred looked at Tis and said, good. He removed the gag from his opponent's mouth, crouched down next to him, and said, he and his friends summoned zombie dragons in the western mountains, and they failed. But this time they took on the Hydra and the basilisk, right? He really thinks he can revive the Demon King's army? Tis replied angrily. The Demon King will undoubtedly be resurrected. Until then, let them live in fear. The protagonist chuckled and remarked, yes, of course he will be resurrected. He thought the opponent didn't want to talk. He continued out loud. The zombie transformation technique is imperfect, and one Hydra is a major failure, and the parasites helped him create them. Someone with power. The guy looked at him irritably. The protagonist called out to Vivy and asked if there was a zombie expert in the Demon King's army. The girl replied that she didn't think so. The Demon King had banned zombies, but she was defeated by him and the others and left the front early. She doesn't know what happened after that. Tis called her the most idiotic of all the heavenly kings and added that the Demon Lord had allowed zombie magic. Femi, hearing his friend insulted, grabbed the boy with his teeth and began shaking him violently from side to side. Tis screamed, no, enough. Eventually, the allies couldn't get any more information out of him and sent him to the capital. After some time, Millet announced that dinner was ready. Luca raised her hand and said, then, she'll say a few words. They decided to leave the village tomorrow morning. Tis must stand trial. She's glad she met such kind people in this village. Millet hugged her with tears in her eyes and said she'll be lonely. The warrior sheepishly asked her not to cry. Cruz and Colette fell to the ground, began kicking their feet and screamed, no, they don't want this. MC looked at them and thought they were like children. Luca told her friend she had a lot of work in the capital. The heroine ruefully agreed. Yes, of course. Alfred smiled and said she could come anytime. She glanced at him and asked, is that true? Then that's good. Luca took a plate of food and remarked, I'll have to say goodbye to Millet's wonderful food. The protagonist exclaimed, then they should eat well today. Everyone began to eat with relish. The wolves also happily ate the meat. The protagonist, having finished the last piece of meat on his plate, pressed it to his face and licked the remains, sighing with satisfaction. Then he looked at Cruz and Vivy, who were whispering something and looking at him strangely, and asked, what's wrong? The girls, without saying a word, gave him a sign of appreciation. The next morning, the allies began to say goodbye. He said, well, he hoped they got home safely. The girls thanked everyone and waved goodbye. Luca told MC to take care. He reminded them it was a secret that he was here. The girls assured him that it would be so. With that, they left, but Cruz kept turning around and waving at them. Millet, wiping away tears, said they were gone. He replied sadly, that's right. Then he seemed to perk up, pushing away his sadness, and said, well, everyone, get to work quickly. Vivy said she'd feed the cows. Millet, confused, rushed to the gate and said she'd help the headman. He sat down on a chair and said, well, he'll get to work. Vivy grumbled, he's a sly one. Alfred said with a smile, he'll keep an eye on them, so he suggests they do their best today. The girls laughed. Vivy gave him a thumbs up and told him to watch his knee. They were counting on him. He thought about it. Things were quieter in Merg village than usual. As soon as Luca and Cruz left, the village guard had nothing else to do. He yawned openly, sitting in his chair and reassured that they might return. No, they irritated him, but sometimes seeing them wasn't so bad. Vivy noticed he'd been yawning for a while. The protagonist agreed. She added, well, it couldn't be helped. Defending the village was pretty boring. He agreed with that and thought, but with Femi and Morphe here, the village defenses were already pretty strong. Soon, he wouldn't be needed here at all. However, in such a short time, they were trying to revive the Demon King's army near the village, using dragons, hydras, and a basilisk. It was scary that the villagers didn't know about this. He had to show the village that he was useful. The protagonist noticed Vivy staring somewhere and asked curiously, what's that? What's she looking at? She answered briefly, the field. He asked, puzzled. The field? The girl said. The land in the village is spoiled. The MC looked at the field, where the owner was busy among the sparse plantings, and noted, yes, it wasn't very fertile. Had she realized this just by looking at it? Vivy replied, yes, it's because of the magic ore that seeps into the hot springs. He asked, surprised. Isn't it bad that magic ore mixes with the soil in farmland? The demon's daughter exclaimed, exactly. They say the poverty of the Demon King's land also stems from the presence of demon ore in the soil. She paused, and he looked at her in surprise and exclaimed, he heard she was involved in land reclamation? Vivy replied, yes, but that was in the Demon King's territory. Alfred remarked, as expected of one of the heavenly kings, He was counting on her. She looked at him puzzled at first, then guessed what he meant. He thought he was a farmer, but he had no experience, so Vivy would be useful here. The girl grabbed his hand and exclaimed, "Okay, she's going to clear the land here." He cried out in surprise. "What? Why so sudden?" Vivy pulled him along and replied, "He was bored doing guard duty, wasn't he?" The protagonist replied, "That's right," she continued, dragging him along. "Land improvement, that's her specialty. They'll make a rich farm with their own hands. It'll be so much fun." Her face simply glowed with joy. He thought in surprise, "She looks inspired." Out loud he answered, "Of course. They'll clear everything here. He'll be happy to eat delicious vegetables, and the residents will feel better. But first, they need the mayor's permission." Vivy rushed forward and shouted, "She'll get it." The protagonist turned to the familiar and asked if he could cut down part of the forest. The wolf barked happily, expressing its consent. The elder also gave his permission. After that, Vivy gathered her allies and said, in short, they would clear the area and use magic circles to purify the land. They could easily clear everything here. MC noted that Millet and the others would help. The elf laughed and said, "That looks funny," and the mayor agreed. "How good that they decided to support the locals with agriculture," Femi said, and he, as the Wolf King, would help them dig furrows for vegetables. Alfred thought with a smile, "It looks like he wants to dig a hole." Out loud he answered his friend, "Okay." Suddenly, Vivy announced, "Let Morphe join them." The protagonist objected, perplexed, saying he was too big to work with them. The demon's daughter was indignant. He was a spirit beast. She was sure he could shrink. If Femi can go, why can't Morphe? The magical beast looked at her in surprise, growled, and walked toward her. She hid behind the protagonist and shouted for him to stay away. The allies approached the bull and MC asked, "So, can he shrink?" Morphe grunted in response. Alfred's surprised expression widened and he answered. Vivy clarified, "He said he could." The protagonist was even more surprised. "Can she understand him?" Femi replied, "No. He said he wanted Vivy to touch him, and he doesn't understand human language." Vivy sighed, embarrassed. The protagonist stroked her head and said, "It can't be helped. They'll take Morphe next time." Looking at the upset girl, he added, "Morphe has transformed into a spirit beast. Perhaps later she'll figure out how to make him smaller." Millet came out to meet them and offered to do everything possible for Morphe. Vivy addressed her by name in surprise, then looked around and approached her pet. Petting him, she said she was sorry but let him keep an eye on them from here. Morphe groaned in response. She headed for the exit and urged everyone to get to work. Arriving in the forest, MC said that first of all, they needed to cut everything down. Vivy agreed. He activated his magic and said to leave it to him. He could handle it. Vivy managed to shout at him to take his time. Cutting down trees is a delicate process. Don't overdo it. Millet had made a point. They needed to take it slow. She would help. Vivy had said, but if they got tired, they should take breaks. Alfred had remarked indignantly. They were treating him like an old man, weren't they? There was no need to worry so much. He was no beginner. He could handle it. Millet had objected sheepishly. No, that wasn't it. She grabbed his hand and said with tears in her eyes, she was just worried about his knee. Her words struck him like a bolt of lightning. He would never have thought she was so worried about his knee. He appreciated it, but it was so embarrassing. The protagonist had thanked her, confused, and said he would do as much as he could. Colette had exclaimed, "Safety first." Vivy had pointed out a distance on one of the trees and told him to try cutting in that spot. He replied that he understood everything. The demon's daughter spoke. "Then he can begin." The protagonist activated his magic, wondering if a little magical power would be enough. He launched his skill, and trees began to fall one after another in different directions. No one expected such a result. Vivy screamed, "Let everyone be careful." Millet seemed frozen in place, and a tree began to fall on her. She closed her eyes, unable to move from fear. MC rushed to her, grabbed her in his arms, and carried her to safety. Looking at her pale face, he asked anxiously, "Is she okay?" The elf looked at him in confusion, then, embarrassed, covered her face with her hands, thanked him, and added that she was already fine, so he could let her go. But he continued to hold her in his arms. She called out to him in surprise, and he thought his knee hurt a little because of that. It was kind of awkward. Then he came to his senses and pulled her to her feet. Vivy screamed in irritation, thinking something like this would happen. She told him to be careful. Colette, sitting on Femi's back, pressed herself against him. The familiar barked in displeasure at Vivy for yelling at its master. He rubbed the back of his head in embarrassment, and Millet playfully wagged her finger at him. He thought, his experience in farming is not so good, but it is a start. After a while, the forest clearing was complete. Alfred said, "Okay, that seems to be it." Millet remarked admiringly, as expected of him. "He's doing well." Vivy activated her magic and said, "Let them do the rest." The protagonist watched in confusion as all the branches and other things simply vanished. After she finished, he said, "She's so good." Millet added, "Simply amazing." The protagonist remarked that she could be a lumberjack. The girl laughed sheepishly and replied that she wouldn't deny it. He looked at the neat stumps, the clear space, and said, "She's done a lot." The elf said that the trees they cut down would keep them warm all winter. They needed to be carried to the village entrance. MC exclaimed, "Then we need to use magic to do it." Vivy asked, puzzled. "Use magic?" he replied. "Well, yes, it's convenient for both everyday life and battle." The demon's daughter said, confused. Humans, with their large amounts of mana, always scared her. Millet took as much wood as she could and said, "The main thing is not to be lazy. You can carry it by hand." The wolves joined in, carrying the trees in their teeth. Colette also participated, carrying one log at a time. Millet and Vivy loaded the cart with as much as they could carry and rolled it forward, shouting. A farmer working in his garden looked at them in surprise. After a while, the elf said, "Almost done. But the next task will be more difficult. It's tree stump removal." The protagonist asked how they usually do it. She replied, "They dig up the soil around the stump, cut the roots with a saw or an axe, and then the oxen pull the roots out." He noted that it was painstaking work. He longed to use magic to make the job easier. Vivy crept up to him and asked, "Is there a problem?" The protagonist replied, "Yes, she's right, he does." The demon's daughter approached the stump, placed her hand on it, and said, "Let him leave it to her. With this magic circle, this problem can be solved quickly." She activated the circle and set it on fire. A whirlwind formed over the stump, gently burning it, scorching its flesh down to the roots. Vivy exclaimed, "It's a circle combining fire and wind. Air enters the stump, and it burns down to the roots." Millet added admiringly, "And the ashes will fertilize the soil. As they say, killing two birds with one stone." Colette watched in awe. MC said with surprise and thought, "That's effective." Vivy replied, "Then they need to apply this circle to each stump. He can help with that too." Alfred agreed to her proposal. She thought for a second, then exclaimed, "Exactly. Which of them will burn more?" While he was perplexedly trying to clarify what she meant, the girl rushed to the stumps and began quickly burning them away. The protagonist shouted, "That's not fair. She didn't even warn you." Vivy laughed and continued her work. He thought, watching her, she was like a fish in water, but he wasn't going to lose to her. He also began casting magic circles and burning stumps. Vivy mockingly asked, was he trying to keep up with her? Millet, rooting for both of them, shouted out their names in turn. Colette was also enthusiastically cheering for her friends. The elf thought, it's good that everyone is having fun. After a while, Colette remarked on how hot it was in here. Femi barked, agreeing with her. Millet said she didn't want to upset anyone, but Vivy had won, both in the number of stumps burned and in the strength of the fire. The demon's daughter rejoiced. The protagonist playfully lamented, he lost. Vivy touched his shoulder with her hand and said, well, it can't be helped. He lost to the heavenly king, so he shouldn't be upset. Failure is what makes them grow. Then she jumped away from him, and to the astonished looks of the protagonist and Femi, she screamed. She finally won. She rushed to Millet, the elf hugged her and said, her magic is so cool. The demon's daughter happily clarified, is it true? Coletta replied, yes, she's amazing. MC grinned, looking at them and thought, most importantly, they were having fun. Looking at the cleared area, he said, it looks good. Now he needed to make sure they were completely burned. He asked his familiar if he could do it. The wolf replied, he'll dig some holes and check everything. Alfred smiled and said he was counting on him. He set to work, and the wolves followed him. They began digging holes, and everyone stared at them in amazement. The protagonist thought, wolves, they're driven by canine instinct. Sometime later, Femi, covered in dirt and soot, reported to his master that almost all the roots had been destroyed by the fire. The protagonist, confused, thought, I need to wash him quickly. Colette was sitting on the sand, humming and playing with small stones. Suddenly, she saw a wolf with a mole dangling from its jaws and exclaimed, let everyone see what he caught. Millet said, that's a great achievement. The girl hugged the wolf with its catch, and the elf continued, moles and mice are harmful animals, so he was a great help. Colette petted the animal and happily said, he's such a good boy. The other wolves stared at their comrade in surprise and envy, then rushed off to dig holes again, hoping to find someone too. MC gasped in surprise and said, the sun has already set. Millet suggested everyone call it a day. After much work, the friends all headed to the hot springs. Alfred thought that since he'd been living at Millet's, he'd been going to the nearby springs. After a while undressing, he said to his familiar, they did a great job today, didn't they? Femi sadly replied, yes, they did. The protagonist smiled and remarked that he'd wash him soon. Approaching the bathhouse and looking at the steam rising from the water, he said, the semi-open air atmosphere is pleasant. Femi agreed. The protagonist straddled his friend and cheerfully asked, so, is he ready to wash? They leaped noisily into the springs. He soaked his companion and began to bathe him. When MC finished, he said, good, he looks great. Burying his nose in his fur, he noted in surprise that he smelled so delicious. The wolf was pleased with such praise. Alfred poured a bucket of water over himself and said, shaking drops of water from his head, now it's time to relax my knee. He sat quietly in the bath and relaxed his body, enjoying the pleasant sensations. Femi also enjoyed the hot water. The protagonist looked at the setting sun and thought, the cool twilight, the hot springs. He liked this kind of life. The wolf asked if his knee was okay. He replied that it was. The hot water from this village was seeping right into his knee. The familiar replied, he didn't know what that meant. Suddenly, a naked Cruz entered the bath and screamed, he's here too. The protagonist was struck by a shock of embarrassment and surprise. He exclaimed in confusion, why is she here too? Anyway, let her cover up. The heroine, as if nothing had happened, asked, what's the problem? He closed his eyes and screamed, why is she here? She'd returned to the kingdom. The girl, laughing, replied, she'd decided to return to him, and she wasn't the only one. At that moment, Urina's voice rang out, telling Cruz she'd asked him to wait for her. This village was a nice place. She was glad she'd brought her to this wonderful hot spring. They should take a bath. Finally, she could relax. MC thought in confusion. That voice. When the girl entered the bathhouse, he tensed up, then waved shyly, noting they hadn't seen each other in a while. The girl stared at him with surprised eyes and exclaimed, "Him!" Before Alfred could say anything, she burst out of the bathhouse with a loud scream and began scolding Cruz why she hadn't told her he was here. She has no shame at all. The protagonist chuckled and said, something like that was what he expected. Bemi replied, that was strange. After a while, the wolf asked Urina, she's a saint, isn't she? The girl shuddered in surprise, then laughed, and remarked that she couldn't believe a telepath was speaking to her. What a smart wolf. The protagonist said, exactly, he forgot to introduce her. He looked at his friend and said, this is Urina, one of the most powerful healers in the group of heroes. She replied, it's nice to meet you. He asked Cruz. She just left the village. Why is she here? She said with a laugh, oh that. She just returned from the capital, MC said, but she didn't answer. It's impossible to get here so quickly. The journey from the capital would take 2 to 3 days. The heroine admitted that there was actually a secret in the warehouse. She asked Vivy to draw a circle for the passage. It leads to her room. Alfred, confused, asked, how did she install that in her room? Cruz replied, she took a dragon bone and carved a magic circle on it. He said, confused. That doesn't explain anything, the girl continued, and now, she can live with him and the others, and she even has her own bed. The protagonist irritably reminded, she still hasn't said what she's doing here. The heroine cheerfully said, Urina was a little tired and she decided to bring her to the hot springs. He replied, okay, and turning to the healer, added, he's glad she's back. The girl thanked him. He started walking but suddenly stopped and asked Cruz where Luca was. She tucked her head into her neck and replied, she's busy and won't be coming. The protagonist understood everything and said, so, she left silently, leaving all the work to Luca? The girl blushed, and he remarked, well, since they're already here, he's inviting them to the hot springs. The heroine immediately perked up and exclaimed joyfully, as expected of him. Urina, confused, asked, what? Cruz turned to him and asked if he shouldn't tell Luca she'd been slacking off at work. Otherwise, she'd definitely be mad at her. He sighed and led the girls away, noting that first, they needed to ask Millet if she could cook dinner for them all. Cruz thanked him and replied that it was time to greet her. When the allies approached the elf's house, the heroine knocked on the door and, wishing the hostess a good evening, added that it was Cruz and she'd come again. Luca opened the door, greeted her comrades with a broad smile, and added, welcome. The heroine felt like she was about to burst with embarrassment. Urina looked at Luca with a smile. The warrior grabbed Cruz by the collar as she tried to flee and dragged her inside. She began scolding her, thinking she wouldn't notice she was gone. She was even using dragon bones for personal gain. She was embarrassing people. She's a heroine. She can't act like this. Cruz only nodded in response, repeating that she was sorry. Finally, Luca pointed at Millet and told her comrade to apologize to her. The heroine nodded in agreement, but Millet countered with a smile, no apologies necessary. Luca, bending Cruz's head with her hand and bowing herself, asked for forgiveness for both of them. The elf assured her everything was fine. They were always welcome. The protagonist concluded, well, very well. As he'd said earlier, how about going to the hot springs? Millet made a point and right on target. Luca and Cruz looked at her in surprise and Urina said, she wants to go too. The elf said that if they had a day off or vacation, they could always come to the village without any embarrassment, and after relaxing in the hot springs, get back to work. She looked at the heroine and added, let her come whenever she wants. Cruz tenderly pronounced her name and told her friends they could go. They had permission. Luca remarked, fine, they'll go to the springs. Cruz rushed forward and shouted, hurry. When the girls entered the bathhouse, the warrior, lathering herself with soap, said, it's good that the village of Merg has hot springs. Urina, rubbing the heroine's back, remarked, so good. The girls took their first water cleansing and, rinsing off the soap, plunged into the bathhouse. Their blissful voices could be heard outside. After some time, Luca asked Millet if the hot springs were always this good. The elf replied, of course. Urina said it was the best hot water. Cruz remarked that she was so well rested. Stepping outside, Luca inquired if the protagonist and the others were working on recovery, right? Well then, they should do their best today. Cruz yawned, stretched, and said she was already tired from work. The protagonist suggested they go have some fun. They arrived at the plot and said with a smile that they would be plowing the field today. Morphe approached them and mooed happily. Cruz called out to him and smiled. Vivy said he must be happy to see her. The heroine agreed he was. Hugging the bull, she continued. She too was looking forward to working with him. MC and Vivy stared at her in surprise. He asked if she understood cow speech. The girl admitted, well, a little. She can do a lot of things. The demon's daughter rushed up to her and asked if she could make Morphe small. Cruz asked the bull if he wanted to become smaller. Morphe grunted in agreement. The heroine activated her magical ability, and the bull transformed into a small calf before the astonished eyes of her friends. Vivy was perplexed, wondering how Morphe understood human language. She asked Cruz how she did it. The heroine, surprised, asked, well, that's normal, right? They communicated telepathically, and she understood Morphe the same way. That should be easy, right? The protagonist countered, it's not. Vivy let out a surprised breath and called the bull to her. He approached her and began to hum. The girl hugged him and said affectionately, he's so good, so he can be with her anytime. The sacred beast grunted something in response. He would help them plow the field. Morphe moaned in agreement, and the demon daughter commanded her pet, go ahead. They would do it. The allies harnessed him, and Vivy took control, exclaiming enthusiastically, "It's simply amazing." Alfred asked her not to push too hard. In no time, half the land was plowed. Millet said in surprise, "This is a record pace of work." The protagonist shouted to the girl that if she was tired, he would take her place. He thought it had been a long time since Morphe could move so actively. He must be enjoying it. The bull tried his best. He and Vivy plowed the field quite quickly, and the demon daughter began casting the magic circle. After a while, she exclaimed, "She's almost done. Their farm is ready." The friends looked at the field in admiration. Vivy said, "It's amazing." She did her best. Millet noticed. Without a doubt, the demon daughter declared, "But this is only the beginning. This is where the fun begins." The elf asked if they could plant some vegetables. Could they do that while the magic circle was still there? Vivy replied that it wouldn't disappear just by planting. It takes about 3 months for the soil to be imbued with magic. The protagonist said, meaning it would be imbued closer to the ground. So, they could practice farming with potatoes, which are easy to grow. The harvest could be ready as early as late autumn. Finally, planting. Millet exclaimed happily. She was looking forward to it. By the way, it's getting late today, so she suggests everyone have dinner, and she'll also talk to the village chief and get some seed potatoes from him. MC said, surprised, "Okay." The next day, Colette happily suggested they plant potatoes together. Morphe and Femi happily agreed. Wolf said potatoes were good. Ox agreed, and indeed they were good. But Colette said it was boring. At this point, Alfred and Vivy, standing before the village elder, exclaimed in confusion, "No seed potatoes." The elder replied sheepishly, wishing he could help, but yes, they didn't have any of that root vegetable right now. The protagonist replied that it was fine. It was a sudden request. Vivy asked, "Then what else is there?" The elder hesitated and said, "I have nothing." The allies looked at him in confusion. The demon's daughter, almost in tears, said she wanted to plant potatoes. She should have expected this. Millet was upset too. The protagonist tried to calm Vivy down. It couldn't be helped. The elf apologized. Colette asked her sister what was wrong. Millet apologized again. The MC, feeling awkward, told the girl it was fine, it wasn't her fault. At that moment, Cruz ran up to them and cheerfully asked if they were done with the field. He replied in surprise, yes, it was done. Moreover, she was neglecting her work again. The heroine countered, "Nothing special. It was her day off." She looked at the field and asked in surprise, why hadn't they planted anything? Alfred smiled sheepishly and replied that they actually didn't have any potatoes to plant. The girl exclaimed, "They've been plowing this field for so long. Maybe she should buy some in the capital?" The friends looked at her in confusion, but the protagonist thought, she has a brilliant idea. He exclaimed, "Exactly. She's brilliant, and they're leaving this to her." He himself, however, sensed that something was about to go wrong. Vivy rushed to hug the heroine, saying what was expected of a legendary figure. Cruz, without thinking twice, hurried back to the capital, shouting that they'd see each other soon. The protagonist wanted to stop her, but she had already briskly run off. He said regretfully, they didn't give her any instructions. But Cruz suddenly returned and asked what kind of potato would be best to buy. Millet happily replied that in their village they usually grow the Count's potato. Vivy had made a significant observation. Indeed, this variety is best suited for this soil. Examining the soil, the demon's daughter said somberly, she didn't think things would turn out like this. She's in such a good mood. The MC turned to Millet and whispered something in her ear. She asked in surprise, is that important to her? He approached Vivy and said he'd help her. The elf thought warmly of him, of his sensitivity. The demon's daughter said solemnly that the Count's potatoes were good, but the dragon's eye variety was better. Cruz exclaimed, that sounds so cool. Alfred had found a solution. Why don't they buy both varieties at once? Millet laughed and agreed. That's right, Cruz exclaimed joyfully. She'll buy both. The girl was about to run off again, but the protagonist grabbed her shoulder and said he'd write down what they needed and give her the money. The heroine replied, okay. After a while, the friends began cultivating the soil with hoes. The protagonist remarked that a harvest would require a lot of effort. Vivy replied, let him try harder. He wiped the sweat from his face with a towel, and Cruz approached him with potatoes. He thanked her for her hard work and apologized for her day off. The girl sheepishly replied, no need. He asked, did she bring potatoes? The heroine showed him the bag and said, here, these are the dragon's eye variety, and these are the Count's potatoes. Let him keep them. With these words, she handed him the bag. The protagonist began to examine the seeds in surprise from all angles, and noted with bewilderment that no matter which way he looked at them, they were cuts from burdock stems. He looked at Cruz, thinking she was expecting praise. At that moment, Vivy exclaimed, she's back. He thought he should tell the heroine the truth. The demon's daughter snatched the seeds from his hands, looked at them carefully, and asked Cruz in bewilderment, she made a mistake and bought burdock instead of seed potatoes? The heroine exclaimed in confusion, what's that? MC smiled and gently remarked, excuse me, but this is rotting burdock. Cruz was on the verge of tears. She said contritely, she was deceived and they sold her this? Vivy bluntly stated, yes, she was deceived. She blushed with shame and said, Alfred asked her to buy potatoes and she couldn't handle it. He patted her head and said, it's okay. Let her tell him about her shopping experience. Did she go to a grocery store, like he told her? The girl said yes. While she was browsing, a nice guy asked what she was looking for. She said she was looking for seed potatoes, and then he said the goods in this store were bad. The protagonist clarified, a nice guy? And he said the goods in this store were bad. The heroine confirmed this and continued, and then the man said he would take her to a store with good potatoes. MC asked, where is this store? The girl said on Habang Street in a back alley outside the royal capital. He thought, this street is exceptionally poor in the capital. There's a store in such a place, she added. The man said she was lucky, it's an obscure place. When she gave him the money the protagonist gave her, he said it wasn't enough, but he gave her a discount and gave her this bag. He also said it was a good product for that price. And then she returned. She was sorry, she caused them so much trouble. Alfred put his arm around her shoulders and said, no, it's not her fault. He thought that if he went for the money, it would be difficult to prove that he had been deceived. He was completely calm. He had given Cruz a lot of money. He wouldn't be able to buy enough potatoes to sow the entire field. But isn't Cruz worse now? Yes, being deceived is even worse. Vivy asked what he was going to do. He made a gesture of beating him, unnoticed by Cruz, by slamming his fist into his palm. Vivy smiled happily. He patted the heroine on the head and said, let her leave it to them. He'll talk to the one who deceived her. They're going to the royal capital. Themi and Vivy received this announcement with joy. The protagonist added that he said they were going to the royal capital, but they would have to disguise themselves a bit. Cruz noted that he secretly left the capital and came to the village, right? He replied that he did. Vivy muttered, she'll need a disguise too. The protagonist, surprised, clarified, she wanted to do that too? That's right. There are demons in the royal capital. She mustn't be noticed. The girl was indignant. He was so cunning. She wanted to disguise herself too. Cruz said she has something for her. It's a cow mask. With these words, she took it out of her bag. Vivy screamed. She was scared. MC asked the heroine in surprise, what is this? Where did she get it? The heroine happily answered, she found it the other day in a souvenir shop, and she bought it because the mask was cool. He thought she always had a love of the strange. Cruz added, it's a precious mask, made by artisans from plants of a southern country. After these words, she put the mask on herself. Alfred noted that Cruz may look like an ordinary child, but she is a very rich hero. She received the title of Knight Protector from the king and the rank of S-class adventurer. This is the heroine Cruz. Meanwhile, the heroine was running around in circles with the cow mask on her head, noticing how uncomfortable it was to wear. It kept falling off, and she had to constantly adjust it. Femi looked at her warily. Cruz ran up to Vivy and handed her the mask. The demon's daughter took it very carefully and said, if you look closely, she has very cute eyes. Putting it on her head, she asked the protagonist, how does he like it? He couldn't help but laugh and replied, excellent. After that, Vivy turned to her pet and asked him how he liked it. The calf moaned approvingly. She snuggled up to him and said, now they look alike. Morphe was pleased. The protagonist said, now it's his turn. He took a masquerade beard out of the bag, attached it, and asked, doesn't it look weird? Cruz exclaimed in admiration. That way, no one will recognize him. Vivy remarked gloomily, he looks just like him with a beard. MC said, it would be bad if he ran into anyone he knew. He turned to Cruz and asked if she had another mask. The girl laughed and replied, of course. With these words, she pulled out a terrifying wolf mask. He picked it up and thought, this mask looks even scarier. Pulling it over his head, Alfred noted that it was more suspicious than the beard, but it was an excellent disguise. Covering his hands with gloves, he declared, it's ready. Femi stared at his master in amazement, then rushed toward him and began to fawn. The protagonist told his friend to calm down. This was no time to play. They would do that later. The familiar gave him a puzzled look. He exclaimed, well then, they're heading to the capital. The allies entered Cruz's room and teleported. The protagonist thought, this is the first time he's used transition magic. The allies quickly found themselves in the heroine's room in the capital. Vivy looked around and asked in surprise, is this Cruz's house? MC replied, it is. The demon's daughter admiringly noted how large the mansion was. The heroine scratched her head in confusion and answered, exactly. Vivy added, exactly. Cruz said that if the maids saw them, it would be very noisy, so let them walk more quietly. Her friends promised her so. Finally, they emerged from the mansion and breathed a sigh of relief. Vivy looked around and admiringly noted, this is the capital. What a beautiful and vast city. Alfred asked if she liked it here. They encountered two women who shouted at them, bandits. Cruz turned to them with a smile and said it was okay. They were all her friends. The women immediately calmed down, laughed and said, wow, she scared them so much. She shouldn't do that again. The protagonist thought it was to be expected of Cruz's neighbors. They were all well-mannered, but he couldn't believe they were so scared that they mistook them for bandits. The heroine said they were heading to the slums. He asked her to hurry. After a while, the allies arrived at Habang Street. Peeking out from behind cover, the protagonist asked if this was the store where she'd been scammed. The girl replied, yes, it was there. They needed to deal with this quickly before they scammed the farmer again. The MC examined the building and noted that it didn't look like a store at all. It was just a private home. He didn't think they'd harm the farms even if they left them alone, but they'd still deal with the bad guys. He told the heroine she should go there and demand compensation. Vivy objected. She couldn't do it alone. Alfred insisted. Cruz was responsible for this. She couldn't just leave, and there was nothing to worry about. They were here. The heroine turned to him fearfully, but the protagonist said let her see who these people were. If anything, they would come. The girl sighed and said, okay, she's going. With these words, Cruz resolutely moved towards the deceiver's house. The allies remained in place and began to closely observe what was happening. The heroine knocked on the house, apologizing to the owners, but no one answered. She said in bewilderment, no one's here? Maybe they couldn't hear? Cruz knocked harder and broke a hole in the door, gasping in surprise. Then she heard it open. The protagonist thought in surprise. Her strength was something special. She entered the house and said hello. The man who had tricked her angrily shouted, why is she destroying their store? Wasn't it obvious that no one was there? His comrades told her to take off her clothes as compensation. Seeing the same bag in her hands, he grinned and more peacefully asked if she needed the seed potatoes again. The girl answered no with a smile. She recognized it as just burdock. Please let him return her money. All three laughed loudly, and the man said he didn't think it was burdock. Burdock is an oblong plant. The girl's allies approached the door at that moment and hid. The deceiving man took a round thing out of the bag and noticed that it was thin and flat. Wasn't it a potato? She had been tricked. Cruz responded indignantly, but MC said it was burdock. Alfred, overhearing the conversation, thought they were trying to trick her again. The deceiver asked, then will she be able to prove it was burdock? Or is her protagonist a potato expert? The girl hesitated. No, but she believes him. The man laughed nastily and said, then let her trust him as a true expert. And now, let her go home. Cruz insistently repeated, let him please give her money back. With tears in her eyes, she screamed. The protagonist said it was a burdock. She begged him again, let him give her money back. One of his friends smiled unkindly and said, okay, she wants her money back? Then they should get something too. At that moment, the door shattered into splinters with such a crash that even Cruz ducked. MC said, they're not just selling bad potatoes, they're passing off this rotten burdock as them. This cannot be forgiven. The scammers exclaimed in fear. Who are they? Vivy threw her hand up and declared, they're the ones who are going to give them a beating now. The sight of Morphe and Femi didn't inspire any good feelings in the bandits either. The wolf bared his enormous fangs. The sacred bull noisily exhaled through its nose. The man who had deceived Cruz grew bolder and shouted, no pets in the house! Tell them to get out! Why are they dressed like animals? They look like bandits. Alfred thought he couldn't argue with them. He simply sternly ordered him to shut up and return the money. The impudent liar demanded that he prove it was a sham, and then they'll talk. The protagonist showed him what he sold the heroine and said that if he opened his eyes, he'd see it was a sham. The man chuckled and remarked, so since he can't prove it, he won't return the money. The protagonist sighed and looked at Vivy. She understood and ordered Morphe to get the team moving. The sacred bull charged and rammed the man with its forehead, pinning him to the wall. At that moment, Femi turned on the trickster's comrades. They screamed in fear. Cruz angrily told the trickster to give him the money. MC thought she was turning into a villain. The trickster and his comrades began begging for it to stop. Alfred commanded the beasts to stop. He looked at the heroine's offenders. They were badly beaten, battered, and frightened. He asked, so they'll give the money back? The man who sold Cruz the burdock jumped up exclaiming, yes, he will. With these words, he quickly pulled out a bag of money and grinned. Cruz joyfully reached for the money and exclaimed, he did it. But the protagonist stopped her and told her not to touch it. He took the bag, sorted through the coins, and said, I think it's missing. The swindler grinned and replied, he didn't hear them want the whole amount. He'd given them back what he had. His comrades also grew bolder and supported their friend. Right, now let them go home. They won't get another coin. The protagonist sighed and remarked, what's with this obsession with money? The man replied irritably, shut up. He wouldn't pay people in stupid costumes a single penny. The MC activated his magic power and calmly said, no, he must give them the whole amount. With these words, he cupped the swindler's face in his hand and squeezed it. The offender screamed, no, don't let him touch him. Let them take it all. With these words, he laid out all the money. Alfred thanked him and collected every single coin. The swindler shouted, they took it all. Now let them go. The protagonist looked at him and asked, do they think this is the end? The man exclaimed in bewilderment. What? He gave the money back? The protagonist activated the magical bonds and said he thought he would get away with it because he had returned the money. But that wasn't true. Fraud is a crime, and he'll be punished for it. Afterward, he bound the swindlers tightly. Cruz asked where to take them. He replied that they'd hand them over to the royal guards. The girl replied, okay. So they bound the swindlers and headed to the guards. They arrived there late in the evening. The guards were initially afraid of them, but thanks to Cruz, everything went well. MC watched her sweetly talk to the guards, thinking she was, as usual, in her element. The head guard addressed her respectfully and asked for her cooperation in sorting out the situation. She smiled and replied, okay. The allies followed her inside the main gate. Alfred told her he was sorry for causing so much trouble. Cruz responded in surprise, no, everything's fine. What's he doing? The protagonist replied, no, he was the one who asked for help. The girl said sadly, but she was deceived. It was a good lesson. He remarked that she shouldn't think about it too much. They'll have a lot of fun on her next day off. If she wants to do something, she can. Cruz exclaimed in surprise, anything? The protagonist objected. He didn't say that. So she wants something? The heroine replied, that's true, but she's still thinking about it. After some time, they bought seed potatoes and returned to the village. He knocked on the door, which Millet opened. The protagonist said he thought everyone was asleep, and he didn't want to wake her, but he had no choice. The elf smiled and said, welcome home. The others were here too. They They had already finished eating and taken a bath. Yurina and Luca were sitting at the table. The warrior turned to Cruz and asked, "They were in the capital, right?" The heroine answered sheepishly, "Yes, something had happened. Basically, she was very sorry." The warrior chuckled and replied that she had something to say, but she was glad everyone was safe. "Good night, everyone. They'll talk about it tomorrow." Looking meaningfully at the heroine, she asked pointedly, "Right?" Yurina stood up for Cruz, asking Luca not to be mad at her friend. She was trying her best. Millet said conciliatorily that everyone was worried because they'd been gone for so long. MC said sheepishly that he was sorry. The elf yawned and said she just wanted to sleep. "There's food in the kitchen, so let them have a snack, otherwise she won't forgive them." When the allies arrived in the kitchen, they collapsed exhausted in all directions. Alfred drawled, "He's so tired. He wants to bathe in the hot spring and refresh himself." Femi supported her master. Cruz said she's very hungry. He noted that then he, Femi, and Morphe would go first. Vivy grabbed him and exclaimed, "Let him stay." She wanted to go with Morphe. The protagonist objected. "He'll wash him himself." She was hungry, right? Cruz screamed. "She wants to bathe in the hot spring with everyone else." The protagonist and Vivy stared at her in surprise. The heroine smiled and said they'd rub each other's backs. He objected. "No, there are many problems with mixed bathing." She paused, surprised. "But he himself said he'd do whatever she wanted." MC looked at her with a heavy gaze and said, "He already told her." Cruz asked, "What about the man's words?" He immediately became embarrassed and asked, "What will the others say?" Vivy and Morphe laughed at them. The heroine smiled and said, "Everyone's asleep, now's their chance. There's nothing wrong with such little secrets, right?" The protagonist felt awkward, but he agreed to go to the hot springs. Femi was the first to get ready after washing, and by the time it was Morphe's turn, the wolf was already splashing around. The sacred beast also jumped into the spring, and both began lapping up the water. The protagonist, surprised, asked, "What are they doing? Why are they drinking this water?" Femi replied, "It's nice." Morphe confirmed his companion's words. MC laughed, and even Morphe noticed. He thought he'd heard that magical creatures absorb magic. Hot spring water containing magical ore must be delicious for them. At that moment, Cruz and Vivy entered the bathhouse. The heroine exclaimed joyfully, "Thanks to Alfred, her wish had come true." He looked at them and asked in surprise, "Is that a towel?" Vivy asked irritably, "What did he, a shameless mage, mean?" He sheepishly replied, "Nothing." In fact, he thought, considering Cruz had washed naked before, he was surprised she'd finally learned some common sense. The heroine sat down next to him and offered to rub his back. He declined, saying it was her day off, so let her rest. The girl stared at him in surprise, then blushed and screamed. So awkward. The protagonist pointed out that she shouldn't scream like that. Vivy had said that she wouldn't mind having her back rubbed at all. He replied, "Okay." While he was doing this, the demon's daughter rejoiced. It felt so good. The heroine said, confused, "It looks nice." The protagonist replied, "He can do that for her too." She, not believing her luck, looked at him confused, turned away, took off the towel, and said she was ready. When he began rubbing her back, the girl cringed and began laughing, shuddering from his touch. MC pointed out, "Let her stay still." She replied, bursting into laughter, "It tickles a lot. Next time, she'll wash his back." After a while, the friends enjoyed the hot water. Femi rested her head on the edge of the bath. Cruz blissfully said, "Maybe this is happiness." Alfred pointed out she was exaggerating. The girl asked how his knee was. "Can she take a look?" He showed her his wound. She anxiously asked, "It still hurts, right?" "It doesn't look so bad." The protagonist replied, "It hurts, but not unbearably." She could still feel the Demon King's power? Cruz, placing her hands on his knee, replied thoughtfully, "That's true. Nothing has changed." He sighed heavily and said, "I see." He thought the Demon Lord's power would weaken over time. One way or another, the pain from her magic was subsiding. The girl was surprised, right? "Then she'll try to come more often." Vivy looked at them enviously and said, "Then she'll help too." With these words, she placed her hands on the heroine's limbs and remarked with a smile that she was sure he would soon feel better, thanks to Cruz's and her strength. He'd even be able to run. The protagonist smiled and thanked the girls. The animals rushed to him, began licking and fawning over him. He laughed and said, "Thank them too." They began expressing their love and gratitude to him even more. In the night, he could be heard telling the animals, "Thank you. He understands, that's enough." The next day at breakfast, he turned to Vivy and said they had seed potatoes. Maybe they could plant them today? He could see how excited she was. The demon's daughter, slowly sipping her tea, remarked that they needed to prepare them for sprouting. MC, surprised, asked, what was she talking about? The girl answered knowingly, "The seed potatoes are exposed to sunlight and sprouted so they take root well. This usually takes 2 to 3 weeks, but with magic it can be reduced to 3 days." He exclaimed, "Really? How can he help?" Vivy, chewing her food, replied, "No, if he's free, let him take Morphe for a walk." Cruz exclaimed, "She'll take them for a walk." He thought she was acting rather strange today. After breakfast, Vivy began sprouting the potato sprouts. Alfred asked his familiar if everything was all right. The wolf replied, "Yes." He exclaimed, "Then they're going for a walk." When they reached a clearing, Femi crouched down carefully so as not to knock over his master, who was sitting on his back. The main character happily gave his permission. He can run freely. He barked joyfully. Cruz suggested a race. The protagonist asked, "Why don't you try riding Morphe?" The heroine happily replied, "No, she doesn't want that. She wants to run." The sacred beast moaned indignantly. MC noticed she'd offended Morphe. The girl confusedly asked the bull, "Is this true? Does he want to ride with her?" He moaned in agreement and even seemed to smile. She quickly mounted him and shouted, "Then, go." The sacred beast blew steam through its nostrils and prepared to run. Alfred exclaimed, "Then, go." He spurred his familiar, and Femi took off first. Cruz laughed joyfully and urged Morphe on, trying to catch up with the rivals. During the race, the familiar told its master that he would carry it into the depths of the Wolf King's territory. After a while, in the forest, the allies dismounted their pets to rest. Cruz stretched, warming up her body, and said, "It's quiet and peaceful in this forest." The protagonist answered, "Exactly. In the past, the village of Merg was inhabited by boars and wolves. There was a huge boar, but he defeated it and even befriended the wolves." Femi was playing with Morphe at the time. The girl answered. She understood. He asked his friend, by the way, who owned the outer part of the territory. Femi replied, "Many people." But a bear stood out. The allies were surprised. A bear? At that moment, Morphe became wary and began to look into the thicket of the forest. Femi, watching him in surprise, barked as if asking what had happened. To the surprise of everyone present, the bull simply relieved himself. The protagonist, confused, exclaimed, "What? He's surprised. Even a spirit beast goes to the toilet." Cruz noticed that yesterday he drank water from a hot spring. Suddenly, the aura around him changed. Cruz sensed it and said, "I don't like this." Suddenly, a huge bear emerged from the thicket and roared terrifyingly. The stunned allies were simply stunned. Morphe, without hesitation, rushed at the monster. MC yelled at him to stop, but it was too late. But to the friend's surprise, the monster took off running. Alfred gave a cheer, and their fearless Morphe suddenly attacked him. Femi noted that the monster was attracted by Morphe's scent. Cruz petted the bull, praising him for his bravery. The wolf continued, "It's strange. Although it's crossing territory, it's still wolf territory. Bears usually don't trespass on other people's property." The enemy's roars could still be heard through the forest. The protagonist asked the familiar if the bear was the strongest here. The wolf looked thoughtful. The protagonist remarked that it wasn't Morphe who had attracted the monster. He must have been fleeing his territory from the demonic beasts. Suddenly, the very beasts the bear had been fleeing from appeared before them. Cruz quickly drew her sword and said, "She can handle them, right?" MC, activating his magic power, answered, "That's right." The heroine rushed forward. A short time later, the allies surveyed the pile of defeated monsters. Femi, confused, said, "How fast?" Cruz sighed, regretfully. "They did it in just 10 seconds. Alfred, laughing, asked his familiar, "Did those monsters also react to Morphe?" The wolf calmly replied, "Perhaps. But why are there demonic beasts here?" Cruz suddenly exclaimed. She understood everything. She figured it all out. The protagonist asked in confusion, "He doesn't understand what she's talking about." The girl exclaimed, "Perhaps that man in all black is to blame? Does he remember him?" The protagonist replied, "She's talking about the 12 heavens? No, he turned beasts into zombies or giants. There's nothing like that here. He didn't sense any magic in them. That's why it seems strange." He looked around and offered to butcher the monsters and collect the spoils. He and Luca would meet later. After a while, they finished butchering the carcasses, put everything away in the magical storage, and he told his ally they were done and could go. Then he turned to his familiar and said, "He knows he's tired, but let him give him a ride." The wolf barked happily, expressing its agreement. Morphe moaned and began rubbing against his leg. MC asked, confused, "What's wrong?" Cruz said in surprise, "He wants something." The sacred bull told him to mount it. Femi barked in confusion, asking, "What's wrong?" Alfred smiled and asked his wolf, "Is it okay?" The familiar replied, "He can do whatever he wants." After this, the protagonist mounted Morphe and, to the astonished looks of Cruz and Femi, shouted to the bull, "They can go." He had to tuck his legs tightly, as the sacred beast was now small. Femi barked in irritation and declared, he doesn't know him anymore. With these words, the wolf raced ahead. The protagonist called to his companion, and the wolf shouted from a distance, "He told him to do whatever he wants, right?" Eventually, the allies returned from their walk, following Femi, who was sulking at his master. MC called out to his companion, but the wolf had its back to him. Millet, surprised, called his name, but the familiar didn't respond either. Vivy asked, puzzled, hugging a plaintively moaning Morphe. "What happened to Femi?" Alfred said, embarrassed. His comrade saw how he had become friends with Morphe. The sacred bull approached the wolf with a plaintive moan and asked if he was angry. The wolf replied, "No." The protagonist approached the familiar and, crouching next to him, asked, "Are you sure he's not angry?" Femi repeated again, "He's not angry." The protagonist noticed, but he ran away when he decided to ride Morphe. The familiar responded irritably, "He's too confident." He was happy he didn't have to carry his master. MC said he'd be happy to ride him again. The wolf countered, "He can ride Morphe." Alfred replied, "No, he likes Femi. He's the only one who can be his partner." After these words, Femi wagged his tail but was in no hurry to turn around. The protagonist, smiling, asked his comrade, "Well?" The wolf sighed, turned, took his hand and replied, "Well, there's nothing he can do." The protagonist smiled and thanked him. Then Femi looked at the sad Morphe and asked, he was glad to give his master a ride, wasn't he? The bull admitted he was happy. The wolf licked him and said, "No problem. Everything will be fine." All the allies sighed with relief and smiled. Urina laughingly remarked that MC is popular with animals. Luca cheerfully added, "I wish she could be that popular but with humans." Millet looked at them in surprise. Meanwhile, Alfred was already asking Vivy what happened to the seed potatoes. She replied that everything went perfectly. Only 2 to 3 days left to dry. Luca remarked how fortunate she was to be allowed to witness the power of the heavenly kings. Urina admitted she was lucky enough to witness it too. It was difficult to discern the value of this technique, but the barbarian swordsman managed it. Luca thanked her with a laugh and asked, Since they had nothing better to do, could she take a stroll around the village? Millet happily offered to show her around. Cruz rushed over and said she wanted to come too. Vivy, hugging Morphe, said, and they're coming too. The protagonist looked at his friends with a smile. Millet clapped her hands joyfully and said it had been a long time since they were all together. She was glad the village was so lively. She'd make them all dinner, he remarked. They all looked so happy. Suddenly he remembered something and told Luca he had something to tell her. Right here in the forest there were 2 wyverns, an earth dragon, and 3 more basilisks. Didn't she find that strange? The warrior looked at him in confusion and asked, is he joking? Monsters of that level don't live here. He objected, but it was true. The girl wondered why they had all attacked at once. Femi answered. Frankly, he was a little confused. Millet was frightened by what her allies had said. Urina reassured her. The protagonist remarked, speaking of monsters that usually live around the village, that there were wolves, boars, and some kind of basilisk, but ones like the ones they had encountered. Luca asked, does he think this is someone else's doing? The girl turned to the wolf and told him that if he noticed anything, he should immediately report it to his master. Femi assured her that he would do so. MC said thoughtfully, that's a little strange. His intuition didn't detect anything strange. The warrior had said that the bear that suddenly appeared was being pursued by monsters? He answered, that's right. They were attacked by a bear and then by monsters. Confused, the warrior clarified, a wild bear? Alfred noted that he had reacted to Morphe's excrement that day. The girl had pointed it out, right? Let him see how the animals cling to him. At that moment, the wolves were playing with the sacred bull. The protagonist asked if she thought it was somehow connected. Luca thought for a moment, then said, there's one hypothesis. Morphe's excrement may contain a high concentration of magic. He drawled, puzzled. So that attracts the beasts? She replied. That's right, the protagonist asked. Does something like that exist? The warrior replied. According to recent research, demon beasts can feed on magical power. MC spoke in surprise. As expected of her, he didn't know that. But does that mean they wanted to consume the contents of Morphe's excrement? Femi replied, no, but the hot springs in the village are imbued with magic. Vivy added, yes, that's because the water contains particles of magical ore. Looking at Morphe, who was reaching for the demon's daughter, a thought occurred to Luca. She turned to the sacred bull and said she wanted to test him, so she wondered if he would allow her to collect his biological material. As a demon zoologist, she was very interested. The bull stared at her in surprise and moaned. Vivy shouted irritably, telling her not to do something Morphe hated. The warrior assured him she wouldn't force him. Alfred said placatingly, the sacred beast doesn't eat or drink much, so it won't work. They'll have to wait patiently. Luca apologized to Morphe for frightening him. After a while, he explained everything to the bull himself and asked if he could help with this. Morphe agreed, and Luca handed him a vial, asking him to take this and fill it with its contents. After a while, while washing himself, he told Luca he would help, but it was too much. But still, he had to do it. After that, he went into the bathhouse and said it was time for them to get out. Femi and Morphe answered okay, but they themselves were in no hurry to do so. The protagonist thought in surprise. They were drinking water from the hot spring again. After a while, he led them out of the bathhouse. Femi spread a towel on the floor and began to dry himself. The protagonist thought he was so smart. Then both animals began shaking off excess moisture, splashing in all directions. MC laughed and said, no need to overdo it. He will dry them off properly. Suddenly Morphe froze in place and said, it's time. Alfred jumped to his feet and exclaimed, he'll take him outside right now. Can he wait? The bull replied, okay. Grabbing him in his arms, the protagonist skipped outside, not forgetting the vial. He asked Morphe to hold on a little longer. Femi looked at them, confused and irritated. When everything was done, the protagonist looked at the vial's contents and thought in surprise, it's normal biological material in color and smell, but it should have a different taste. But how can you tell? He turned to his familiar and asked, is everything okay? The wolf barked in confusion. MC handed him the vial and asked if he could try it. The magical beast was indignant. He wouldn't do anything like that. If he wanted to know what it tasted like, let him try it himself. Alfred laughed, apologized, and added that he was sorry. After a while, Millet invited everyone to the table. The allies gasped at the abundance and beauty of the dishes on the table. In the blink of an eye, the entire dinner was gone. Millet laughed and thanked everyone for coming. Urina, in turn, expressed her gratitude for the wonderful dinner. Afterwards, the entire group drank together, with Collet and the animals getting some juice. Collet, playing with Femi and Morphe, clung to Urina and asked her to sit with her. She added that the animals wanted that too. Luca and Vivy argued about something, and Cruz listened with a bored expression. The protagonist and Millet poured themselves another glass. Vivy pushed away the empty plate, drinks, and glass, and said dreamily that she was eagerly awaiting the sprouts of the seed potatoes. The protagonist noted that it takes 2 to 3 days for them to germinate, so everyone was resting today. The demon's daughter replied, no, only he. He asked Millet if there was any work in the village. She replied that there wasn't much available right now. Vivy said that if he had so much time, he should take this opportunity to rebuild that house. Millet looked at her in confusion, stopping wiping her plate. MC groaned, thinking that the house he shared with Vivy had burned down in an accident. They'd been living in Millet's house ever since. He muttered that it was annoying to be forever in her debt. He needed to talk to the village chief. At that moment, Millet cried out his name with tears in her eyes and said that she never thought that. He looked at her in confusion, not expecting such a reaction, and said that even if she said so, he needed to rebuild his house. Colette threw herself into his arms, crying, and said that she'd be lonely. He shouldn't leave. Alfred declared that everything would be fine. When he built a new house, they could come visit. The girl promised she would come every day. Millet turned abruptly to leave and said, "I'll make the bed." She ran into the room, closed the door, and tried to control her emotions. The protagonist followed her in and addressed her by name. The elf looked at him and asked what was wrong. He said he thanked her for everything she'd done for him. Could she give him her hand? Millet, perplexed, did so. He placed a gold coin in her palm and said it was for lodging and food. She protested. She can't take it. The protagonist replied with a smile. It's all fine. It's not the coin. It's his feelings. The elf looked at him, confused, and clutched the coin to her chest. She thought, what a gift that would be. As he left, he thanked her for the evening. He thought he felt something had ended. He added, when his house is finished, she should come visit. The elf began fiddling with her apron and, with tears in her eyes, quietly said his name. The next day, Vivy showed everyone the drawing and said it was the layout of the new house. MC said he understood. Millet stared silently. Femi happily said he hopes the house will be big. He wants a big room. Can they build a room for him too? It's very cold outside in the winter. Vivy exclaimed then, a room for Morphe too. Alfred agreed. Bull said, true, but why? The protagonist asked in surprise, don't you want your own room? He shook his head from side to side and said he wanted to be with the master. The protagonist petted him with a smile. Femi barked indignantly and declared that he wanted to share a room with the master too. Could he? MC laughed even harder and replied that he didn't mind. It would be warm in the winter. Cruz exclaimed that her room didn't have to be big. Ian Vivy stared at her in confusion. She asked him if something was wrong. He thought she wants a room too? Urena said she would share a room with Cruz. Luca added that she didn't care about the size, but she wanted a desk. Alfred exclaimed in confusion, and she did too? The warrior turned to Millet and said that she should have her say too. The elf refused, saying no. She had this house she inherited from her parents. She would be here. Luca looked at her carefully and asked if she was okay. Millet thought sadly about this house. She tried to make it the protagonist's home too. From now on, they wouldn't spend time together anymore. They'd build their own house, and they wouldn't be able to spend time like before. She barely whispered out loud that she felt lonely when she thought her life with the protagonist was over. Luca, perplexed, asked what she'd said. The elf quickly climbed the stairs and said she'd finished making the bed. Luca, confused, replied, that's the second time enough. The next day, Cruz and the others returned to the capital, and MC continued guarding the village. Millet approached him and said she brought the elder. The old man greeted him joyfully. Alfred thanked him for his hard work. The man remarked he wanted to talk about rebuilding the hut. The protagonist replied, that's right. They want to build it next to the warehouse. The elder replied, okay, he doesn't mind, but is it any better outside the gates? Won't he be lonely? The protagonist replied, no, thank you for your concern, but he also wants to take care of the wolves. The elder was surprised. Is that so? If he wants to use the forest, please let him use the one at the entrance. He thinks that will be enough for him. Vivy showed him her drawing and said, let him take a look at it. They finished this plan in one night. The old man smiled and remarked, so they were prepared? Well, let him take a look at it. When he looked at the drawing, he said, well, it looks more like a mansion than a house. It's quite large. The protagonist replied, yes, that's right. They don't need a second floor, and even 1/10 of this house is enough. Vivy looked at the plan and said, that's right. He wondered what she would come up with now. She was born and raised in a large castle, as expected of one of the heavenly kings of the Demon King's army. The demon daughter said, MC said let it be wider. She began working on a new drawing. After a short time, she exclaimed, it's ready. Alfred, looking at the plans, noted that the house was still too luxurious for a guardhouse. The elder also commented, it's still a bit big. He asked the old man in surprise, they don't have enough space? The man replied, no, there won't be enough wood. Wood is also the village's fuel. The protagonist said sheepishly, he's right, they'll review everything carefully. The elder replied, okay, and walked off leisurely. The girls watched him go, surprised. The protagonist said he had an idea. Vivy asked, he wants to buy wood in the capital? He replied, no, they'll make bricks. The demon's daughter exclaimed in bewilderment, what did he say? It's expensive and requires a lot of effort. He chuckled and remarked, have they forgotten who he is? Vivy whispered excitedly to Millet, he's the village guardian, right? The elf answered, yes, she thinks so, right? MC countered, no, well that's true too, but he's a mage. Magic makes it easy to create materials and build. Millet responded in surprise. She understood. He asked his familiar if there was a place with clay soil. The wolf replied, around the swamp, next to the mountain. Alfred exclaimed, okay, they'll start right now. He'll make bricks and Vivy will fire them with her magic. He turned to her and asked if she could handle it. The demon's daughter said, don't be so stupid, of course she can. Millet smiled and said, okay, she'll help them too. The protagonist looked at her in surprise. After a while, he set to work. While mixing the material, he thought, clay is mixed with water and kneaded for a while. Then it's cast into molds and dried for a week or more. But with magic, everything is simpler. This is done much faster. He tapped his knuckle on the finished product, testing its strength, and said, the first batch is quite good. I need to repeat this a few more times. Suddenly, he heard enthusiastic voices. Is this really a house? Wow, this is simply wonderful. He turned around in bewilderment and asked, What is going on? Many villagers gathered behind him. Millet said that when she told everyone in the village that he was building a house using magic, everyone wanted to see it. The villagers were chatting admiringly. No, this is not magic. This is something they can't imagine. It looks heavy, but it's the protagonist. He laughed. Millet said, but it's definitely true. She assures them of this. MC thought in confusion. What is she doing? He told the villagers that he was sorry to disappoint them, but a house that is built with magic will not be built by magic. He makes bricks with magic, and then he will build a house. As they can see, it's just ordinary work. The people marveled at how amazing it is to make bricks with magic. Millet said what was expected of him. Colette exclaimed, amazing. Alfred exclaimed, they misunderstood him. Vivy came to his aid and said she would show them how it all works. He said her name with gratitude. The demon's daughter turned to the villagers and said she will show them that mages are first-class masons. Vivy activated her magical power, created a powerful flame, and began firing bricks. The villagers exclaimed in confusion, how hot is it? Where did such a large flame come from? This is simply insane. The protagonist told his ally, her flame is magnificent. She happily replied, of course. And so the first day ended with brickmaking. On the second day, the allies began construction work. This is where the protagonist's gravity magic came in handy. To repeat simple tasks, he took the mortar, applied it to the bricks, and using magic to move the material, began laying the bricks, aligning them. The villagers, who had gathered again, couldn't believe their eyes. That was magic. MC took the mortar again, applied a thin layer to the bricks, and repeated the movement. The people, watching the bricks lay themselves in a row with astonishing speed, were amazed. It was simply amazing. Alfred was simply amazing. He thanked them for their praise with a satisfied expression. Millet, looking at him, said, that's so cool. Vivy, with an air of importance, declared as expected, he's one of the best mages in this world. He's the only one who can do such things. It's nothing new for him. Everyone admitted he really is awesome. One of the villagers smiled and remarked that in the future, he might even marry his daughter. But seeing Millet's frightened expression, the man hastened to say he was just joking. Did someone say she was in love with him? Millet said, confused, I'm sorry, and blushed to the tips of her hair. After a while, the protagonist said, almost done, and the sun is setting. Vivy ran to the house and said, now it's her turn. She was going to engrave a strengthening magic circle on the building. The villagers wanted to see it. He replied with a smile that she could begin. The demon's daughter remarked, let him leave it to her. The villagers started asking her what it was. She explained it to them as she drew the magic circle. At that moment, the heroine's group approached them. The protagonist asked in surprise, have they finished their work yet? Cruz replied, she came to see the new house. Urena said, she wants to go to the hot springs as soon as possible. Luca said, however, she was surprised he was already finished. He replied, it's only the outside. She clarified, is it completely empty inside? MC replied, yes, they'll finish the interior tomorrow, and everything will be ready. Cruz spoke in confusion. So they can't go there? He said he'd finish everything tomorrow. Looking at his allies, Millet and Collet, Alfred exclaimed, they're throwing a party tomorrow. Even the wolves were happy with the new house. They fawned over Femi. Late in the evening, the protagonist summarized, the walls, ceilings, and floors were insulated, and magic circles had strengthened the house. Now it was resisted to impacts and earthquakes. At dinner, Millet spoke enthusiastically of Vivy's abilities and asked if she could draw such circles on her house too. The demon's daughter replied with a smile. She cared about her, so she would. Luca, looking at the protagonist, asked, is he all right? He looked sickly, was hesitant to answer, and then said, he's a little tired. She noticed, right? He used a lot of magic power. Why doesn't he go rest? The protagonist got up from the table. The elf told him not to overdo it tomorrow. He replied, okay, he will. She led him to his room, lit a candle, and helped him cover himself with a blanket. MC said she was taking care of him right up until the last minute. Millet was embarrassed and asked him not to think about it. She was looking forward to tomorrow's construction. After wishing him good night, the girl headed for the door. Alfred stopped her and remarked that she hadn't been feeling well lately. What was wrong? If she wanted to talk, he was ready to do so anytime. He thought he could be someone she could talk to. At that moment, Morphe emerged from under the blanket and groaned. The protagonist laughed and added, he can even share his bed. He owed her a favor. So let her approach him and feel free, okay? She looked at him in surprise, then smiled and said, thank you very much. Sometime later, lying in her bed, she thought of him and wanted to convey her feelings to him. Millet returned to his room and knocked softly, but he was already fast asleep. Then she entered, approached the bed, pulled back the blanket, and settled in next to him. In his sleep, he sensed someone crawling under the covers and wondered if it was Vivy. Turning around, he saw Millet and, in surprise, yelped, jumping up. She asked sheepishly, did she wake him? The protagonist cried out her name in confusion, and the elf replied sheepishly, she came to share his bed. At that moment, Morphe and Femi emerged from under the blanket, also making surprised sounds. Millet, mustering up her resolve, pressed her hand on his shoulder, pushing him back down, lay down next to him, and said that since he decided to leave them, She didn't know what to do. MC, feeling extremely awkward, called her by name again. The elf admitted she missed him, but she couldn't tell him the truth, and it hurt. Morphe began to moan in surprise. The girl continued, asking why she thought this was the only way out. Confused, Alfred asked, what was she talking about? She hesitated, mumbling something unintelligible. Morphe crawled up to her and moaned. Millet, unable to contain herself, irritably asked the sacred beast if she was actually talking to him right now. He moaned in bewilderment, and Femi looked at her, also perplexed. The elf plucked up her courage and said, there's something she'd like to tell him. He quieted the beasts, stroked her head, and told her to take her time. He was listening to her. Millet, not expecting such a reaction from him, looked at him with loving, surprised eyes. Morphe joined her, also looking devotedly at the protagonist. He laughed, picked up the bull, and said, yes, he will pet it too. Millet burst out laughing at the humor of the situation. The protagonist said that she should forgive him. He didn't notice how lonely she was. He was moving to a new house, but he was not leaving the village. She could come anytime, and it didn't matter if he was home or not. He wanted to hear her voice again when he came home. He wanted to eat her homemade food again. Did she understand him? Could she continue to be near him? The elf laughed happily and answered, with pleasure. Femi sighed with joy that everything had turned out so well. MC added, he was going to throw a party. Wouldn't she like to celebrate too? Millet happily agreed to his proposal. After that, she added, okay, now they can sleep. Having wished each other good night, they lay down. Morphe settled in between them. Millet thought they were sleeping together. Turning to him, she asked if she could ask him for something. He replied, just today, until he falls asleep. She asked him to pet her. Alfred smiled, turned to her, and began to stroke her head, wishing her good night. The next morning was the third day of construction. That day, they began interior work. Until noon, the allies helped in the village and built a house for the wolves. And then, they finished their house. The villagers who came to gawk exclaimed joyfully. Their village had a new house. The protagonist exhaled. Finally, they were finished. He invited everyone who had come to look inside. Luca said impatiently that she wanted to see the house as soon as possible. He laughed and called the girls to follow him. Looking at the joyful Millet, he thought, good, she looks happy. Then he turned to his familiar and asked, what about his house? The wolf replied with a satisfied expression, they'll be comfortable this winter. Thank him very much. He said, well, we can go. When the girls got inside, they were simply stunned with admiration. Vivy stood ahead of them, joyful, with blueprints in her hands. The villagers were also incredibly surprised. Everyone said how wide the room was. What a pleasant smell of wood. When the villagers left, the demon's daughter opened one of the doors and told him to look at this storage room. She used magic to prevent the things inside from rotting. He exclaimed, it's so convenient. She showed him 2 boxes, adding, one box cools, the other freezes. After that, she led them further, and in the next room, Vivy said, here's the most important thing. A bright and spacious bathroom is at their disposal. The protagonist happily said, good. Now there will be a place to bathe Morphe. The bull mooed happily in response. Urena asked if that meant there was a hot spring here. Vivy said with an air of importance, good thing they noticed. There were open-air hot springs here. She led them further and showed them what it looked like. The girls were absolutely impressed. At that moment, there was a knock at the door. The surprised allies opened the door and were congratulated on the completion of the construction. MC sheepishly thanked them for it. Afterwards, they showed off the offerings they'd brought with them and shouted, they're ready to party. He stared at them in confusion. A joyful Millet said that when a new house is built, it's customary for the whole village to celebrate. Alfred remarked with surprise, so that's it? Afterwards, he smiled broadly at the villagers and exclaimed, then they'll start celebrating together. That day until late at night, the house was full of guests. The next morning, he woke up in a chair and grumbled, unable to sleep in his new bed. He drunk too much last night, Vivy irritably remarked. Did he forget something important? The protagonist asked, perplexed. What was she talking about? The demon's daughter replied, not very kindly, potatoes. They'd already sprouted so they could be planted. He was surprised and thought, yeah, right. She'd been helping him with the construction until the sprouts sprouted. The protagonist asked, do you want to plant them now? Vivy replied, of course. Finally, all the allies gathered in the field. He looked at the potatoes and said, okay, the joy of planting can only be achieved together. They should call Millet and Collet and plant the tubers together. Vivy replied, I understood, and went to get her friends. MC said he'd get everything ready in the meantime. After a while, Colette, surrounded by Femi and Morphe, dreamily said, a round potato with a crispy crust. The wolf said, yes, in anticipation. Morphe added, good. Vivy asked irritably, did they understand why they were here? Gathering everyone together, she declared, now she'll teach them how to plant potatoes. They responded happily. She demonstrated and explained each step. Plant the potatoes in a furrow, sprouts up, spaced 30 centimeters apart, then lightly cover with soil, and almost ready. Millet, carefully repeating all the steps, said, good. Vivy added, the potatoes don't need to be watered right away, so they'll worry about that later. Potatoes aren't hard to take care of. Alfred laughed and replied, right, they'll wait until they sprout, and then they'll take care of the rest. The demon's daughter remarked, let him leave that to her. Millet joyfully suggested that Collet write her name where she planted the tubers, so everyone would know she was the one who planted them. The girl enthusiastically accepted her offer. The elf carefully wrote her name and expressed her hope that the inscription wouldn't rub off. At that moment, the protagonist, looking at the wolves, admiringly said how great they were. They helped get rid of the parasites. This is simply excellent. Dead mice and rats lay at the edge of the field. The wolves stared at him. He asked in bewilderment, "What's going on?" Femi replied, "They're waiting for him to praise them." The protagonist crouched down in front of the wolves and thanked them all for their work. The wolves began to fawn over him, licking his face. He laughed and said, "Now they can eat." Almost all the captured rodents were instantly destroyed by them. Suddenly, MC shouted for them to stop. He pointed at one of the rodents and asked, "Is that a demon rat?" Femi replied, "He defeated that rodent. They're quite rare." Alfred patted his comrade's fur and remarked, "Is that so? He wants to examine that rat, may I?" The wolf replied, "Let him take it if he needs it." The protagonist thought that such a huge demonic rat here was a bad sign. These creatures are enormous, and they quickly devour crops. They say that just 3 of these rats can destroy the fields of an entire village. He needed to take care of this. He told his familiar to continue exterminating the rodents. If anything happened, he was to report it. The wolf assured him that he would do so. The protagonist noted that their first farm was already in danger of being destroyed. The next day, Femi showed him his catch. MC remarked in surprise, "Is this a rare monster? A demonic rat?" Morphe groaned warily. The wolf said they're rare, but he sensed that the forest had changed recently. Today he saw a goblin in his territory. Of course, he tried to drive them away, but it seems to him that there are more and more creatures in his territory. Alfred knew goblins were pale monsters, resembling human children, with low intelligence and extreme ferocity. Alone, they pose no danger, but in a group, they pose a serious threat. He asked his familiar if they were rare here. The wolf replied that they occasionally visited these parts. Sometime later, while walking through the forest, they suddenly heard Morphe's menacing moo and a goblin's sharp cry. The monster had attacked the sacred bull, but the beast quickly dispatched the enemy. The allies watched in confusion. Then the protagonist rushed to the bull and asked, "Is it all right? Is it wounded?" He scanned the beast's condition with magic. It was fine. Morphe looked at him with devoted eyes and asked for praise. He sat down next to it, stroked it, and said, "Well done, but let him not overdo it. By the way, where was the goblin?" The sacred beast moaned and set off. The allies followed, and the protagonist realized he told them to follow him. Morphe led them to the spot, and MC asked, "Did he catch him here?" The bull moaned affirmatively in response. At that moment, several monsters jumped out from behind cover and charged the allies. Alfred quickly activated his magical power and dispatched the enemies with ease. He looked at the spot from which the monsters had emerged. They had approached this spot cautiously. Femi said they'd been collecting clay for bricks here. The protagonist, surprised, clarified, "Did the holes they dug turn into burrows?" Femi sniffed it and declared, "Yes, indeed." His appearance made the protagonist wonder, "Is something wrong?" The wolf replied regretfully, "They're on his territory. They'd let them get this far." And he was ashamed. MC patted him on the back encouragingly and tried to calm him down. Then he asked why Morphe had noticed the goblins. It seemed he hadn't even noticed that he, too, had a good sense of smell. Morphe groaned and replied, "He has a bad feeling about this forest." Alfred chuckled and wondered if the sacred beast relied on the spirit beast's senses. He asked his familiar what was up with the bear. Femi replied that, come to think of it, the demonic bear's penetration had increased. Of course, he was chasing it away again. The protagonist answered, "I understand," and thought, demonic wolves are the strongest in the local hierarchy. But now, other beasts are encroaching on their territory. What's going on in the forest? The other day, when they were all walking together, they came across monsters that weren't supposed to be here. Were they running away because they were being chased? He said out loud, "They need to figure this out as soon as possible. They'll help him, right?" The beasts eagerly expressed their desire to help. When they returned to the village, Vivy cried out in irritation, "It's bad." She heard the villagers say they'd seen demon rats. He replied, "They know. They just explored the forest." The demon's daughter said they needed to go again. They needed to go back to where they'd gone for a walk. The friends mounted their familiars and raced forward faster than the wind. As they rode, the protagonist thought, the ecosystem has been disrupted. He remembered the hydra, the basilisk, and the others. He didn't know where they'd come from, but if they didn't go away, he'd destroy them. He would protect the village. The appearance of the earth dragons had disrupted the ecosystem. They had to do something. After a while, Luca reported to him that the results of Morphe's biological material were ready. He exclaimed anxiously, "Did she find something?" The girl replied, "The concentration of magical power is abnormally high. Otherwise, it's just ordinary material." He asked in surprise, "What does this have to do with the dragon attack?" After all, it tried to eat Morphe. Luca replied that she couldn't say for sure. But why was he so close to such a remote village? He remembered the appearance of earth dragons and monsters. They were wounded and exhausted. I wondered why. MC replied, "Okay, he'll try to investigate. If it's causing harm, they should deal with it." Luca replied that she'd like to come with him, but she had work to do. He assured her that it was fine. He knew she was busy. But even here, they needed her strength. She thanked him. Millet approached them and said, "Thank you too." After a while, the elf sheepishly took the healer's hand and repeated, "Please, for the village, let her lend her strength." Luca looked at the embarrassed Millet and asked, "Isn't this common? She's a doctor in the capital. It's business as usual for her. She helps hundreds of people." Alfred smiled at the girls. After a while, the allies fought monsters. The protagonist activated his magic power and directed a stream of fire at the monsters. Vivy, riding Morphe, also used her magical skills. Having defeated the enemies, the friends moved on. The demon's daughter noted that there were plenty of small monsters here. "What's going on in this forest?" He replied that they needed samples, so she shouldn't kill them all at once. The earth dragon's appearance had disrupted the ecosystem. Femi barked worriedly. He reassured his friend. It wasn't his fault. Suddenly he stopped and said, "This is where they encountered the earth dragon, but it's quiet here." Femi said no. He smelled a strong odor. There was definitely something here. It must be a dragon. The protagonist said there was no point in waiting. They needed to move on. They dashed forward. Suddenly, Femi stopped and said, "It smells of death and blood." MC asked, "What? Should they go see what's going on?" The wolf shouted, "Come here." He ran forward, Vivy and Morphe rushing after him. When the friends arrived, the demon daughter exclaimed in surprise, "These are dragon bones, the bones of a basilisk and a bear. What's going on here?" Indeed, there were the enormous remains of demonic beasts lying on the grass. Alfred said in confusion, "There's no flesh on the bones at all. There were teeth marks." Vivy exclaimed in bewilderment, "What? But dragons don't have natural enemies," Femi said. "Judging by the shape of the teeth, it's an earth dragon." Vivy clung to the protagonist in fear. He said, "So he was eaten by a dragon of the same species?" The demon daughter asked in bewilderment, "If they're hungry, why don't they return to their habitat? Why eat each other?" The protagonist replied, "He thinks there's a reason for it. Some cataclysm happened, or a more powerful enemy appeared." Vivy clarified, "So they were running from something?" He said dragons have high intelligence, so they didn't invade the Wolf King's territory and fight. Only monsters with low intelligence invaded and rushed towards the village. Hungry beasts don't know what to do. Femi remarked that it must be cannibalism, or, more precisely, it could be the corpse of a starving dragon. Vivy asked why he thought so. The wolf replied that blood only contains magic power. MC said yes. That's unique to demonic beasts. Does he mean the magic concentration is low? The familiar said so. Alfred remarked that perhaps he was planning to eat Morphe with its high magic concentration during that attack. Suddenly, an idea occurred to him and he asked the sacred bull if he could go to the toilet. At that moment, Vivy shouted in irritation, "Don't let him say that!" What was he going to do with her beast? The girl hugged the bull and shielded him. The protagonist replied that they couldn't just leave a hungry dragon like that. Let her understand that. Before any more damage was done, he wanted to stop this. Vivy buried her face in the bull and said, "But Morphe, she's worried about him." The protagonist was indignant. Who did she take him for? He promised them complete victory. He would protect them. Let them help him, along with Morphe. The bull looked at the demon's daughter and said, "He can do it. He would protect her." Vivy, barely holding back her tears, said how brave he was. She was very impressed. Clenching her hand into a fist, she exclaimed, "Go ahead, her brave Morphe. Let him defeat the dragon and protect the village." Femi snorted and sarcastically remarked, "That's too much." The sacred beast said, "Here it goes." Vivy, wiping away her tears, said, "Let him do it. He can handle it." When the bull did his job, MC praised him. "He did it. He's great." The demon's daughter walked up to her pet and shielded him with her body. The allies froze in anticipation. Suddenly, the aura shifted dramatically. A sound was heard, and dragons appeared in the sky. Alfred said, "Here they are. One of them is bigger than the last one. But he's really skinny," Vivy noted in confusion. "He's skinny?" The dragon began to descend. The protagonist prepared for an attack and asked his ally to cover her ears and hide. As it approached, the dragon let out a terrifying roar, opening its enormous maw. The protagonist thought it was a roar that contained incredible magical power. Vivy was stunned, as if she were about to burst apart. She began making sounds, trying to say something. Her allies looked at her, and MC noted that this was a normal reaction. Even 100 soldiers would have fled at the roar alone. He asked his familiar if he could go. The wolf barked, agreeing. They set off, and Alfred asked Morphe to stay with Vivy. Moving away from his allies, he told Femi, "The dragons are about to attack. They had to deal with the small fry first." At that moment, a moo was heard, and the sacred bull rushed at one of the enemies, ramming it head-on. The protagonist thought in surprise, "Morphe?" It had returned to its normal size. Having torn one dragon apart with its powerful horns, the sacred bull began to deal with the other monsters. It tore some apart, trampled others, and sent others flying, inflicting incredible damage. The protagonist couldn't believe his eyes, and neither could Femi. When the smaller dragons were dealt with, it stopped, breathing heavily. MC remarked with delight, "It's incredibly strong." Suddenly, the sacred beast raised its head. A larger enemy was circling above it. He activated his magical power and prepared for battle. The battle didn't last long. The enemy was destroyed. Watching Morphe shake, the protagonist anxiously asked him not to worry, but the bull simply returned to its normal calf size and let out a long moo. The protagonist asked, "Is he okay?" Morphe rushed into his arms. MC petted him and joyfully said, "Amazing." It was simply magnificent. Even Femi began to lick him joyfully. When they returned to where Vivy had remained, they found her sitting under a tree. He asked, "Is she okay?" The girl turned to him and asked, "Did he defeat the Earth Dragon?" Alfred replied, "Yes, but mostly thanks to Morphe." The demon's daughter, hugging her sacred bull, perked up and asked, "So the village and the forest are safe?" He replied, "No, it's temporary. They still don't know the root cause of this. Where did the Earth Dragon come from? What are they running from? They need Luca's help. That's all they can do now. It will be dark soon. They need to return to the village. He will take the dragon they killed as a sample." When they arrived at the village, Millet called out to him. She said she was so worried about them. She was worried that something would happen to them. She was told they went to destroy the Earth Dragon. Cruz asked in surprise, "Is it an Earth Dragon?" The protagonist tried to calm Millet down, and he apologized to her. Cruz asked, "What happened?" He put his finger to her forehead, pressed it, and asked in bewilderment, "Why is she here again? What happened to her work in the royal capital?" The girl closed her eyes and replied, "She's finished." The protagonist said, "He hopes so. Let her pass for Luca. He wants her to see the dragon." The heroine immediately ran off to fulfill his request. He turned to Millet and asked her to bring the elder, saying he would tell them the details. The elf also ran as instructed. A short time later, Luca emerged from the house, approached him, and said she had heard everything. It seemed it was her turn now. She adjusted her glasses and clarified that tomorrow was the long-awaited day off. So he wanted her to work hard today? He replied, "Yes, please." MC retrieved the dragon parts from their storage and handed them to her. Cruz offered to help her friend, but Luca categorically refused. In the end, Luca took care of the dragon and the demonic beasts. He told the villagers about the current situation around the village, the demonic beasts that had appeared around the village, and the dragon that was destroying the forest system. After finishing his story, he summarized what had happened. Millet, touching the village chief's shoulder, appealed to Alfred to protect their village. He assured her, of course, he was their guardian. That evening, Luca didn't come to dinner. She was sitting in her room, scribbling something intently on a piece of paper. Millet came in and asked if she was okay. She was stuck in her room. She needed to eat, but Luca didn't answer, continuing to scribble. The protagonist then said it would be better for her not to disturb the girl. Irina noticed that Luca was so focused that she couldn't hear anyone's voices. He added that she might get angry if disturbed. The elf listened to them in surprise. The protagonist remarked, "And when Luca is hungry, she gnaws on dried meat." Millet said, confused, "So that's it?" He thought he knew how Luca gnawed on that meat. She was very different from Cruz. After dinner, everyone went to bed. Early in the morning, Luca woke him up and, handing him the papers, said, "Here are her results." He took the papers, still half asleep, and Femi yawned right next to his ear. The girl said she'd laid it all out so concisely and clearly that even Cruz would understand. With these words, she gasped and fell onto his shoulder. Emp, confused, lifted her from his shoulder, but Luca was already fast asleep. He laid her on the bed and told the surprised animals that she was asleep. When he left the room and informed the others that the results were ready, after reading Luca's report, they exclaimed in amazement, "Amazing." Millet repeated, "The distribution of small species and the habitats where the monsters came from." Urina noted with confusion that dragons have many different types. She hadn't known that. Cruz exclaimed, "That's awesome. They'll find them all," he said. "She likes it." Luca did a good job. With this, they can continue their investigation. Apparently, an earth dragon descended into the forest from the western mountains. He thought, a powerful enemy, the likes of which even he couldn't imagine. Perhaps they were waiting for him. Luke's research revealed that the monsters raging around the village inhabited the interior of the western mountains. This time, they would punish the culprits. As he and his allies set out for battle, he thought, they couldn't protect the village or the ecosystem by simply watching. They didn't have time, and what lay ahead must be terrifying. He hadn't faced a powerful enemy in a long time. He'd have to maintain the demeanor of an S-rank mage. He shouldn't be happy about that. Vivy, riding Morphe, asked why he didn't take Cruz and the others. They would have had a better chance that way. Alfred replied, "They said they had work to do, subdue the devil." The demon's daughter, confused, asked, "Devils? They're rare and powerful. They're also both human and demon. They're said to be humans transformed into demons. They've caused a lot of trouble everywhere." He noticed, and this was the Demon King's former henchman speaking. Incidentally, he noticed they were already so far away, but they hadn't encountered any monsters. She said, surprised, "It's true." The protagonist asked Femi if he sensed anything. The wolf sniffed the air and replied that there was no one nearby. He could barely hear the buzzing of insects. The protagonist said it was frightening. Vivy said the enemy was somewhere on this mountain. He looked around and chuckled thoughtfully. Then he suggested they move on, and the allies set off again. Suddenly he heard the babbling of water and stopped. It was a small stream like a waterfall. The allies approached the source and drank the cool, refreshing water. After that, they continued on. When the sun set, the friends made camp. Everyone lay down to rest. MC, stirring the fire, remained on guard. Vivy snuggled up to Morphe, snored sweetly. Femi settled down next to his master. Alfred, nibbling on dried meat and gazing at the moon, thought, after all, adventures are good. He'll probably be like this until he dies. The horse ride to their destination would have taken 3 or 4 days. Thanks to Femi and Morphe, they were able to get there much faster. At sunrise, the allies set out. He looked at his familiar's paws and noticed that his legs were getting worse and worse. Suddenly, The wolf stopped and sighed heavily. The protagonist anxiously asked, "How is he? Is he feeling unwell?" The wolf replied, "Sorry, but with every step up the mountain, the tension in his legs was growing." The protagonist asked, "Is he all right? Can he go on?" The wolf perked up and barked decisively. He asked Morphe, "Is he all right?" The sacred bull mooed and began breathing noisily through its nostrils. Vivy laughed and declared, "He is invincible." After a while, MC told his companions, "Fog, don't run forward." The fog was so thick that visibility was 0%. Suddenly, everything cleared, as if nothing had happened. Alfred exclaimed in surprise, "Finally, everything is visible." Vivy remarked on the magnificent view. She climbed down with Morphe and walked a short distance, admiring the scenery. The demon's daughter said, "It's time for a walk." Morphe hummed happily, agreeing with her suggestion. But the protagonist said they weren't here to play. Suddenly, Femi became wary and growled softly. The protagonist asked in surprise, "What's wrong?" He called out to Vivy and Morphe and told them they better not move. Things were looking sloppy. The demon's daughter asked in confusion, "What did he just say?" He stared ahead and said, "I have a bad feeling about this." Femi continued growling, his neck raised. The MC asked, "What's wrong?" Suddenly, a terrible roar came from behind the mountain. He thought there was something there. Then he suggested his friends take a look. When they reached the spot, the allies hid behind cover and cautiously peered out. What they saw left them completely stunned. Alfred, confused, exclaimed, "Impossible! It's an ancient dragon." In the lowland between the mountains, curled comfortably in a semicircle, slept the most ancient species of dragon.